Hey guys, it's Senti Reads, and as you can see by the video title, today I'll be ranting about the third book in the ACOWAR series, A Court of Wings and Ruin, or ACOWAR for short. I'm splitting this video into two parts so that my computer doesn't launch itself into the sun when I try to export it, because this is going to be my longest rant yet. ACOWAR is not only longer than the two books that came before it, but also significantly more stupid, confusing, and infuriating. Buckle in, because this book is absolutely bonkers. Thank you to everyone who gave feedback on the coloring in the last video. Go watch the last video if you haven't seen it, or this one won't make a whole lot of sense. I brought the coloring back for this video because it's fun for me to do and y'all seem to enjoy it, so we'll be doing some more of that. I won't explain every page individually like I did last time, but my general critique of the ACOWAR coloring book still stands. The choice of what scenes we get to color is very random, and there is a lot of totally boring landscapes of like the spring court and the autumn court and all of that I imagine even fans of the series would not be interested in. Many of the pages, and especially these landscape kind of scenes, have vague details or shoddy line work that can make it kind of confusing to color because you can't really tell what certain things are supposed to be. Also, the paper in this coloring book isn't really suited to alcohol markers, so they often end up looking streaky and not very good. There are much better coloring books out there, so I don't really recommend this one if you're looking to do some arts and crafts. As a quick plot recap from the last video, ACOWAR ends with a big showdown in Hybern because Tamlin has been secretly working with them to get Feyre back from Rhysand because Tamlin is fully delusional and can't accept that Feyre has broken up with him. Feyre's sisters are turned into hot fairies against their will, and many of the Night Court inner circle are gravely injured, so to prevent any further damage, Feyre pretends that she really was being mind-controlled by Rhysand, but she's come to her senses and she's totally snapped out of it and she wants to go back with Tamlin. Everything's okay now, let's just all go home. If that sounds totally stupid and unbelievable and that Tamlin should have known better, that's because it is stupid, but this is what we're going with. So the book ends with Feyre returning to the Spring Court with plans to destroy it from the inside out. Before we jump into the absolute mess that is ACOWAR, I have a few disclaimers/notes. Please check the screen now for a list of content warnings. This book is mostly stupid nonsense, but it is about a war after all, so there may be triggering content for some viewers. As a general note, I'll be referring to Sarah J. Maas, the author of this series, as SJM for short so that I don't have to say her full name every time I reference her, which will be frequent because I have a lot of complaints, SJM. But with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into the hot mess express that is ACOWAR.
Anyways, I'm reading it now, and I'm just going to start out straight from the heat. Alright, so my fellows with toxic masculinity, it's time to head out of here. Everybody else, it's time to get steamy. Let's get it. His clothes vanished.
The book opens with a chapter from Rhysand's perspective from the previous war 500 years ago. Yes, that war. The only war. Until now! We don't really learn anything new or important in this chapter. It's basically just a reminder that war sucks and it's super terrible to witness all that bloodshed, and Rhysand has suffered. Poor Rhysand.
Whoa! That's interesting, but I sure don't care!
We then jump to Feyre's POV with an iconic line of, "The painting was a lie," which is super reminiscent of "The cake is a lie." If you know, you know. I don't think that was an intentional reference from SJM, but I'd like to pretend that it was. Anyway, Feyre's only pretending to paint so she looks normal. Well, she is actually painting, but her heart isn't in it, like she's not actually creating art, she's just painting to look like she is doing better. And Tamlin is either too stupid or too delusional to question her about any of that. I supposed that in the past weeks I had crafted my demeanor as intricately as one of these paintings. I supposed that if I had also chosen to show myself as I truly wished, I would have been adorned with flesh-shredding talons and hands that choked the life out of those now in my company. I would have left the gilded halls stained red, but not yet. Honestly, this first part of the book with Feyre plotting and scheming and spying in the Spring Court is kind of delightful. Not because it's actually well written, because it's not, but because shit is actually happening, so I wasn't bored. And Feyre is so over the top with it all. Like, it circles around from being so bad that it's kind of good again, but I'm getting ahead of myself, you'll see. Feyre thinks about all the awful shit that happened in the last book and snaps her paintbrush in half, like out of anger. So maybe she's more like Tamlin than she'd care to admit. But Feyre has zero self-awareness, just like most of the other characters in this book, so like that's not gonna occur to her. We also get a huge jump in Feyre's Daimati powers, and if you don't remember what a Daimati is, that's the whole mind control thing that Rhysand can also do. Feyre is now able to cast her mind out, whatever that means, and sense whatever is nearby, which seems really silly to me. The Fae already have like superpowered hearing hearing, so I would think she could just hear people coming and doesn't need to sense them, and I don't even think she uses this power for anything useful, so it's just weird. A lot of things in this book are just kind of weird. So Feyre is doing her painting and pretending even though nobody's watching her, but she can sense Lucian and Tamlin approaching, so she tries to act extra normal. Tamlin says that he's there to get Feyre for a meeting, and she asks if Ianthe will be there, and remember from the last book that Ianthe is the one who gave Feyre's sisters over to Hybern, even though the queens also knew their location and also could have sold them out, but Ianthe did it for reasons? I complained about this in the last video. Anyway, fuck Ianthe, we don't like her. How dare she turn Nesta and Elaine into super hot, super powerful fairies? What a bitch!
I hate the shit out of you!
It was Lucian who answered, studying my painting as if it held the proof I knew he was searching for. Yes, she had her reasons. She is willing to explain them to you. Perhaps along with her reasons for laying her hands on whatever males she pleased, whether they wished her to or not, for doing it to Rhys and Lucian. Sick burn from Feyre. Not only is Ianthe a sellout, she's also a sexual predator. Wow! There's quite literally no good reason to give Feyre's sisters to Hybern, so, I don't understand how Ianthe is going to explain any of that, and her explanation is so stupid, but we'll get there. Also, it's very clear that Lucian knows Feyre is up to something because he's apparently the only person in the spring court with 2 brain cells to rub together, but is he going to do anything about it? Fuck no, he's not! Lucian's character has been thoroughly nuked and he really doesn't do anything helpful ever, and he's just kind of a shell of the character he once was from the first book, and I complained about this in the last video. Lucian is even worse in this book, sorry Lucian. Anyway, Feyre goes to get cleaned up for whatever this vague meeting is, and we learn that she has a new bedroom, conveniently right by Lucian's, so he can spy on her. And the reason why she has this new room is that Tamlin destroyed her old room in a rage when she left for the night court, and it's awfully convenient that they didn't share a room so that he didn't rage destroy his own shit, but he's been known to destroy his property before, so that definitely wouldn't have stopped him. Lucian shows up, and they talk about Ianthe. Feyre is pretending to be willing to hear her out and forgive her, which is real sus given all the threats she made in Hybern about never forgiving any of them. Did they just forget about that? Lucian sees right through that shit, but instead of asking Feyre anything important, he asks about Elaine. Yeah, remember Lucian and Elaine are mates? It got sprung on us at the end of the last book and completely doesn't matter or go anywhere in this one, so don't get your hopes up on that. Feyre dodges all his questions and we cut to the meeting with Ianthe. And Feyre can't even look at her without thinking about how much she wants to kill her, which is kind of fair given what Ianthe did, but is weird coming from Feyre, who typically isn't a violent person and frequently admonishes Tamlin for his own violent rage, so it's weird that Feyre justifies her own actions so much. But that is something that I will extensively complain about later, so I won't get into it now. Anyway, here's Ianthe's excuse for giving Feyre's sisters over to Hybern. The High Priestess lowered her teal eyes to the dark wood table, the hood casting shadows on her perfect face. I wish to begin by saying how truly sorry I am. I acted out of a desire to grant what I believed you perhaps yearned for but did not dare voice, while also keeping our allies in Hybern satisfied with our allegiance. Huh? That's really what she's going with? She gave Feyre's sisters to Hybern to turn them into fairies so Feyre wouldn't have to watch them get old and die, and Ianthe just assumed that's what Feyre wanted but couldn't ask for? Seriously? There was no guarantee that Nesta and Elaine would survive their dip in the Cauldron, so how was Ianthe going to justify all of this if they had died? I guess that's kind of irrelevant because I doubt Feyre would bother with all this spy shit if her sisters had actually died. I think she would go full scorched earth and not do any of this pretend stuff, but whatever. Lucian somehow finds the balls to tell Ianthe that what she did was stupid, even if it means that his mate is conveniently immortal now, which is another excuse Ianthe throws out to justify her actions. She's like, oh, well, now Elaine and Lucian can be together forever, so, everybody should be happy. And Ianthe just really puts on a big show about how sorry she is, but Hybern is just too strong to fight, so the best they can do is ally with them and ride out the war, and she's like, well, this was our only option, and no, it wasn't, but whatever. Lucian points out yet again how stupid that is, and is about to say how obviously evil Hybern is, but then Tamlin glares at him, so he shuts up, because Lucian is a pussy now. That's just how his character is. He went from being sassy to being very lame. R.I.P. old Lucian. He does not exist anymore. Tamlin still seems to trust Ianthe and Hybern after all the nonsense they pulled, and surely he can't be that stupid, right? There's no way Tamlin is this stupid. I guess we'll find out later, so keep watching. Everyone kind of agrees to make up and move on, and Feyre asks if the citizens of the Spring Court will be safe with Hybern showing up to, occupy their lands. Remember, there are actually people other than the ruling class who live in these lands outside the palaces that the High Lords live in. Yeah, I forgot about them too. Outside of Valaris and Adriata in the Summer Court, we don't really see a lot of the cities and see like regular people doing regular things, so it's easy to forget that there are actually citizens who live here, and yeah, they're here. And Tamlin's like, yeah, they'll all be fine. I moved them to the east, and Hybern is to the west, so they're all good. Oh, and by the way, Jurian will be here tomorrow. If you don't remember who Jurian is, I feel like this is like a meme, and I remind everybody who Jurian is every time I talk about him, because I care about him so little that I frequently forget who he is. Anyway, if you don't remember Jurian, he's a human who fought in the previous war until Amarantha turned him into jewelry. The King of Hybern resurrected him to use him as a pawn to recruit the human queens to their side, and Jurian was so crazy from being a necklace for 50 years that he's just evil now, I guess. Or is he? Because that makes literally no sense. I guess that's another thing you'll just have to keep watching to find out. Side note, even though Jurian was resurrected by the Cauldron, he's still human instead of fairy somehow. Don't ask me why.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
We learn that Hybern's war efforts have slowed down a bit because the Cauldron is now drained from turning Feyre's sisters into hot fairies, so even though this book is called ACOWAR, the actual war isn't going to happen until like the last 100 pages of this long-ass book. Yep, we get almost another whole book of them preparing for the war, and then the war is covered super quickly right at the end. Love that for us. We get more confirmation that Feyre and Rhysand's mating bond is alive and well, though they can't communicate much because they don't want anyone to realize that the King of Hybern failed to break that bond. If you don't remember from the last book, the king just broke their bargain where Feyre has to go to the Night Court every month or whatever, and they tried to pretend like it broke the mating bond, but it didn't. The King of Hybern's power level is something that's really wonky throughout the book. He's very powerful when the plot needs him to be, but he's also very weak and stupid when the plot needs him to be, so he's kind of all over the place, much like a lot of the aspects of this book. Anyway, Jurian shows up with two freaky-ass twin commanders from Hybern. Oh, I didn't look this up. Dagda and Branna? Let me look that up. Okay, so the video I just watched called them Branna and Dagda, so that's what I'm gonna call them, but I mostly just refer to them as the creepy twins, and they're not gonna be around for very long, so don't worry about it. The king is their uncle, so they are the prince and princess of Hybern, even though we were also told they were commanders, so I guess they're both. There are also princesses and stuff in Prythian, despite the whole High Lord thing, which is stupid and confusing, but whatever. The creepy twins are being extra creepy to Feyre, so Tamlin snaps at them to back off. And Jurian says they're just curious about Feyre because she almost caused a war between the Spring Court and the Night Court, and she also has super weird powers, and so she's just so interesting. Feyre claps back with, perhaps if you'd bother going to war over Miriam, she wouldn't have left you for Prince Draken. And if you don't remember who Miriam and Draken are, well, back in the other war, Draken was a fairy, and he, stole Miriam from Jurian, except allegedly that's not true, and apparently Miriam just left Jurian for Draken. It's whatever. It doesn't matter, really. Feyre really thought that she ate with that one, but it doesn't really make any sense because Jurian was already at war to help liberate human slaves, which included Miriam, so I don't really know what else Feyre expected him to do, go into a second war? What did she mean?
What do you mean by that?
Jurian halted at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of cruel death as I took the last steps to him. Careful what you say, girl. I smiled, breezing past. Or what? You'll throw me in the cauldron? Oh, come on now. How does anyone believe that Feyre is on their side after all these little sly comments? What the fuck? Feyre is not actually a very good spy, which is part of what makes this part of the book so delightfully cringe, because she just thinks she's eating up with all these lines, and it just makes her look so stupid. Feyre is also now a body language expert, and she constantly narrates what other people must be thinking, even though she can literally just read their minds with her powers and see for sure what they are actually thinking. But she never does that unless the plot specifically calls for it, because otherwise she would know a bunch of information that she can't know too early because it would ruin how the plot progresses. It's just really stupid. But body language expert Feyre is fucking hilarious. Anyway, the group all sit down for a meeting, and Feyre quickly realizes that the creepy twins are also Daimati, they also have the mind control powers. The twins say that they are there to scout the wall and figure out how to bring it down. If you don't remember, there is a magical wall that separates the fairy world from the human world, and Hybern wants to take it down. Feyre is quick to say, oh, me and Lucian will go with you guys, and it's clear that Tamlin does not want her to, but he's still pretending that he's not an abusive piece of shit, so he keeps his mouth shut. Jurian randomly brings up Lucian's missing eye and wonders what Amarantha did with it after she gouged it out, which, what the hell, Jurian? What a weird thing to say. So I shifted in my seat, studied the table. Lucian merely leveled a hard look at Jurian as the two Hybern royals watched with impassive faces. I have an old friend at the Dawn Court. She's skilled at tinkering, blending magic and machinery. Tamlin got her to craft it for me at great risk. Excuse me, sir? Machinery? The fairy world has machinery? What the fuck does that even mean? How do you define machinery? I think Lucian's weird steampunk metal eye is the only machinery we ever even see, so this is weird. The world building does not get any better as the series goes on, it just gets more confusing as per usual. Jurian then changes the subject to once again remind Lucian that Elaine, his mate, is probably getting banged by the entire Illyrian army. He made a similar jab in the last book, which is why I said he did this again, because this is not the first time, which is weird. I don't know why this man is so obsessed with Lucian being cucked. Like, what the hell, Jurian? Jurian has issues.
Weird. Buddy, you're weird.
Tamlin snaps at Jurian to behave, but he just can't help himself and reminds Tamlin he's also a cuck because Feyre fucked Rhysand. Despite his rage, Tamlin doesn't literally explode and kill everyone, which I guess is character development. Side note, the reason why Feyre has been able to avoid sleeping with Tamlin now that she's back is that she's pretending that Rhysand assaulted her at the Night Court, which I don't even know how to unpack this. And Feyre, like, something that's so weird about this is that Feyre is very weirdly offended when anyone actually believes that Rhysand would do something like that, as why would she be upset that people are trusting what she's saying? This is so weird. I don't even know how to talk about this. It's almost as if Feyre forgot the first book happened and that whole thing under the mountain where Rhysand would make her drink the fairy wine and black out and then, like, sexy dance for him, and Tamlin was there and watched it all happen. So she's, like, entirely ignoring that context, and, like, of course people are gonna believe Rhysand assaulted her because they watched him do it before. Like, this is so weird. I just really don't like the implications of her making up a false story and then being upset when people actually believe her story. I'm uncomfortable with all this, so let's just move on. Feyre realizes that all of Jurian's shit-talking is just a ruse to rile everyone up so that the twins can use their mind control powers unnoticed, so she shields Lucian and Tamlin's minds. Even though I don't think we've ever seen her shield another person before, like she's only ever shielded her own mind or tried to break through other people's shields, I've never seen her shield someone else. And as I said before with the whole, like, mind casting out thing, suddenly she's a total expert at using her mind control powers, even though she's expressed guilt at using them before, so I would think she wouldn't have a lot of practice, but she's just randomly good at using them now. Nobody else at the table realizes what's going on, like, mentally, because of course they don't, and then the chapter ends. We then skip to the group minus Tamlin out on their scouting expedition at the wall. They inspect one of the holes in the wall while Feyre monologues about all the stuff she's been doing to be extra sneaky, like pretending to be weak in front of the creepy twins, even though she's clearly not weak and everybody knows it. Like, I don't know what she's doing here. She's basically trying to be like a damsel in distress, as if everybody didn't watch her, like, totally kick ass in the 3 trials in the first book, and it just is so weird. Feyre is like, hey guys, you know there's also other holes in the wall, and we should go see those too. But apparently that was a weird thing for her to suggest because it's going to take a while to get to the holes in the wall since the creepy Hybern twins aren't very good at teleporting and neither is Feyre, so they're all going to have to go on foot. Jurian can't teleport at all since he's a human, and Lucian can teleport, but he can't really teleport the entire group with him, so they're going to have to go on foot. Side note, the word they actually use is winnow, and just like in the last video, I am going to be replacing that word with teleport because I hate the word winnow. Teleport is easier to say. Also, shout out to the commenter who told me what winnow meant in this context and why they chose this word. Thank you for educating me. Genuinely appreciate it. Anyway, Feyre is like, yeah, it's a long journey to the other hole, but fuck it, let's go. Why not? And Lucian is like, dude, this is really weird that you're suggesting these things. He kind of pulls Feyre aside and is like, what are you doing? I know you're up to something and you're gonna land us in some deep shit. Feyre plays dumb and tries to change the subject by, like, looking at his metal eye and going, what do you even see with that thing? He doesn't answer, and Feyre is like, what, you don't trust me? As if it isn't extremely obvious that he doesn't trust her and that he shouldn't trust her. Like, Feyre is really playing it up here. And it's just really funny to see her just do way too much. They talk about the war. By that I mean the past war, not the war that is about to happen. And Lucian says that he was not there. I guess he's too young to have been there. But if he was, he would have been on the human side. So no wonder he's uncomfortable working with Hybern, because he would not have been with them in the first war. But he's too much of a puss to stand on his own convictions, and he just defaults to whatever Tamlin orders him to think and do. They keep talking, and it's clearer than ever that Lucian knows Feyre is still with the Night Court, but she just won't admit it, even though it's very clear he knows. But all they can agree is, like, their current situation is terrible, and neither of them really want to be there. I turned my face to him, resting my knee against his in silent demand. Why? I asked. Why does Hybern want to do this beyond some horrible desire for conquest? What drives him? His people? Hatred? Arrogance? Yes, Feyre, you really just hit the nail on the head there. This dude just wants slaves. I don't know what else to tell you. He really thinks he's entitled to free labor from anyone he views as lesser than because he's evil. And he hates humans. There's really nothing deeper behind this all. He really genuinely is just evil for the sake of being evil. Feyre and Lucian's conversation is interrupted by the Hybern creeps, and Jurian's cuck fetish pops back up when he implies that Lucian shouldn't get all buddy-buddy with Feyre when they're off alone together because Tamlin might get the wrong idea and then fuck him up. And like, oh my god, Jurian, knock it off with the cuck stuff. This is weird. They finish up their expedition and go back to the manor. They run into Ianthe, and we get a bunch of monologuing about how much Feyre hates her and how everything Ianthe does is all just a calculated act to look so holy and noble and pure, when really she's just an evil bitch and also a rapist, so yikes. And Feyre really looks down on her for calculating this whole second personality, as if she's not also calculating a whole personality to stay incognito as a spy, and Rhysand also has an entirely fake separate personality, but whatever, Feyre frequently justifies her own actions when she criticizes other people for doing the same thing, whatever. Well, I'll complain about it repeatedly, don't worry. Feyre pretends to be cordial with Ianthe, but Lucian is straight up rude to her, which cracks me up. Ianthe asks Feyre to meet up later to talk about the upcoming Solstice, and Feyre is like, yeah, cool, talk to you later, and then immediately pulls Lucian aside to ask why he hates Ianthe so much, as if it isn't obvious, like, maybe because she could have killed his mate by throwing her in the Cauldron? What is there even to like about Ianthe? Why are you confused about this? Oh wait, there is actually more to why Lucian does not like Ianthe. Lucian goes on to say that during Calanmai, that weird rapey festival from the first book, when that happened, Feyre was in the Night Court, so Tamlin refused to participate because he didn't want to cheat on Feyre, even though she'd clearly broken up with him, but he was delusional and thought that Rhysand kidnapped her, so he didn't want to cheat on her by doing the festival. So that job fell to Lucian, who was possessed by the evil spirit or hunter spirit or whatever it is. And then he slept with Ianthe, who, to be clear, was totally down for it, even though the spirit will possess someone and they will have sex whether the person wants it or not. Ianthe clearly consented to this, and it was Lucian who was coerced into the whole thing because he did not want to be involved, but somebody had to do the festival, and as the second in command, it was kind of up to him. Good lord, does everybody in this book have sexual trauma? I don't mean to make light of or joke about that stuff, but it really feels like SJM throws in some assault whenever she feels like giving someone a tragic story. It just comes off like a checklist item. There's not really any commentary being made about it or any deep purpose for it being here. It's just a checklist item to give someone a dark story. We already knew Ianthe was a predator with the stuff that happened with Rhysand, so this all feels so heavy-handed. Like, we did not need a repeat. We already knew Ianthe was bad. Justice for Lucian. I truly think SJM hates his character with how dirty she does him, especially in this book, but you'll see all that for yourself. The scene ends with this unintentionally funny line. Lucian squeezed our linked arms as we rounded a hedge, the house rising up before us. "You are a better friend to me, Feyre," he said quietly, "than I ever was to you."
You sure about that?
Is she though? I mean, I guess the bar is in hell with how badly Lucian treated Feyre and ACOWAR by trying to gaslight her into believing Tamlin's abuse wasn't that bad and all his actions were justified. Yeah, SJM definitely hates Lucian. His character went through such an assassination from the first book. We then get a weird scene with Feyre and Alice was, if you don't remember who that is, that was Feyre's personal servant at the Spring Court that we saw a lot of in the first book and then hardly at all in the second one. Alice was there when Mor walked in and carried Feyre away, like during the whole dramatic thing when Feyre fled to the Night Court. So Alice definitely knows that Feyre was not kidnapped and that Mor was actually helping her because Feyre was like having a panic attack for being confined in the house. But Alice chooses not to tell any of this to Tamlin because I guess she's more loyal to Feyre. And she says she's leaving for the Summer Court where it's going to be safer because most of the people in the Spring Court don't agree with the Hybern stuff. So Alice is on her way out. We then skip to the summer solstice, and remember in the first book that this is the wild party out in the woods that Tamlin busted out his fiddle for, which is still so cringe to me. I just cannot imagine him like shredding on a fiddle. It's just, I don't know, it gives me the ick. To be clear, men playing the fiddle does not give me the ick, it is specifically Tamlin playing the fiddle. A year ago he had kissed me on this day. A year ago I'd danced amongst these people, carefree and joyous for the first time in my life, and had believed it was the happiest I'd ever been and ever would be. I think this is a good reminder for all of us that things can change in ways we never expected and that we may be happy now, but there could be a hot shadow daddy out there waiting for us to make things even better. Anyway, Ianthe wasn't at the last solstice, but she's here now, and she demands that everybody gets up super early before they begin all the partying, so they can do some kind of religious ritual at sunrise. They ride out into the hills, and it's clear from all of Feyre's monologuing that she has some kind of trick up her sleeve that's gonna go down at this ritual. I swear her internal dialogue is just like Kira from Death Note, as she analyzes everyone's thoughts and motives and how she's gonna respond to them, and it's just all very Death Note to me. Back to the ritual, Feyre happens to be wearing white, so she thinks about her failed wedding to Tamlin because she needs more things to be angsty and bitter about. I glanced sidelong at Tamlin, but he was studying my hand, braced on his arm, the empty finger where that ring had once perched. What did he make of it? Where did he think that ring had gone, if Lucian had hidden the evidence? For a heartbeat I pitied him. Pitied that not only Lucian had lied to him, but Alice as well. How many others had seen the truth of my suffering and tried to spare him from it? Seen my suffering and done nothing to help me. Good Lord, Feyre, I get it already. Tamlin and everyone at the Spring Court sucks, and she's gonna get the revenge she deserves. To be fair though, she does have a point about everyone coddling Tamlin when Feyre clearly needed more support than she was getting, so I'll kind of let her attitude slide here. And if you don't know what Feyre is referring to with Lucian, in the last book when she left for the Night Court during that big dramatic exchange, her engagement ring dramatically melted off her finger and fell on the floor, and Lucian cleaned that all up so Tamlin wouldn't know that Feyre ditched her ring, and that's kind of probably why Tamlin was so delusional about the whole thing, is because he didn't know that Feyre blatantly left and people lied to him about it, but whatever. I can see why Feyre would be upset about all of that. Anyway, back to the ritual, they all gather at an altar while Ianthe starts dramatically praying and making a big show of conducting whatever this big sunrise ritual is even supposed to be. Apparently whoever the sun shines on as it rises will be blessed that upcoming year. I don't know what that means, blessed to do what. But Ianthe has conveniently been to this location before and knows where the sun will rise, so she has marked that spot so she can stand exactly there, so she's the one who's gonna get blessed. Oh, except Feyre moved the little rock or whatever Ianthe used to mark the spot, so now she's in the wrong place, and Feyre is standing in the right place where the sun is going to come up. So she starts glowing all dramatically because she's also using her glow stick powers that she got in the last book to really hype up this extra glow to show how she's so blessed and she's so awesome, and everybody is in awe of this happening, which totally pisses Ianthe off and ruins the whole day for her. This whole scene had me kicking my feet, screaming, laughing. It is so over the top and so goofy and ridiculous, and Feyre is so proud of herself. It is just so funny, and this is exactly what Ianthe deserves to humble her, but it's just so funny to me that Feyre orchestrated this whole thing when there's a war looming and there's more important things to worry about. This is just the beginning of her plan to destabilize the Spring Court, but it feels like a really childish way to do it. As I said, Feyre is super pleased with herself for how well she pulled off her entire stunt, and it's very much giving all according to Keikaku, if you're weeb enough to understand that meme. Translator note, Keikaku means plan. As I said before, all of this scheming and plotting is very Death Note to me, which is just so funny. Just to add insult to injury, Lucian comes over and dramatically kneels before Feyre like she's suddenly been crowned as Queen of the Spring Court. For in all of her preening ceremonies and rituals, never had Ianthe revealed any sign of power or blessing, but Feyre Cursebreaker, who had led Prythian from tyranny and darkness, blessed, holy, undimming before evil, I let my glow spread until it too rippled from Lucian's bowed form, a knight before his queen. When I looked to Ianthe and smiled again, I let a little bit of the wolf show. Just like in the last book, Feyre refers to herself as a wolf whenever she's particularly hyped up about how badass she is, which totally isn't cringe at all. If Feyre had a fursona, it would for sure be a wolf. Feyre basks in her victory of making Ianthe look like a total idiot, while Ianthe spends the day trying to justify what happened to anyone who will listen. Tamlin seems a little suspicious, but doesn't say anything, because of course he doesn't. He's still pretending to be changed. Everyone in the Spring Court basically thinks Feyre is a goddess now, as if they didn't already because of the whole Cursebreaker thing, and she's just so pleased about all of this. Even though they aren't really supposed to talk much, Feyre can't help but tell Rhysand about her genius little plan through the bond, and so she reaches out to him and they laugh about it before Feyre goes back to the partying. She really just had to tell everybody how proud she is of the stunt she just pulled. Feyre goes back to the party and puts on a big show about acting all meek and like a helpless little princess as she forces herself to dance with Tamlin. As the festivities continue, Feyre has a brief moment of self-awareness that this is probably going to be the last time anyone is singing and dancing after Hybern shows up and fucking ruins everything. and that she's playing a big part of that by destabilizing the Spring Court so that people will abandon Tamlin and Hybern can take over. Like, she is explicitly helping this process happen. Although I do want to be clear that even if Feyre hadn't decided to turn on the Spring Court, Tamlin did get the whole ball rolling by allying with Hybern in the first place in order to get Feyre back from Rhysand. That part is not her fault. She did not force Tamlin to make this deal, but deliberately undermining the Spring Court definitely is Feyre's fault, and it will come back to bite her in the ass later, but I will get into that later. Feyre stumbles back to the manor after a day of partying, and she asks Lucian to come with her so she can kind of avoid Tamlin's sexual advances, because she is still loyal to Rhysand, and she does not want anything to do with Tamlin in that kind of way. I asked Lucian to escort me, and he'd been more than happy to do so, given that his own status as a mated male made him uninterested in any sort of female company these days, and given that Ianthe had been trying to corner him all day to ask about what had happened at the ceremony. I guess Jurian isn't the only one with a thing for cucking, and all his comments must have given Feyre some ideas, because she puts on her skimpiest little nightgown and then lays in bed thinking about everything horrible that's ever happened to her, so she can smell like she's afraid. I don't know when SJM decided that the Fae can sniff out each other's emotions, because I don't remember this happening in the prior 2 books, but they can do it now, so Feyre has to put some extra effort in to sell her story to pretend she's really scared. She goes to Lucian's room all sweaty and stinky with fear in her skimpy little nightgown and tells him she had a nightmare and needs to be comforted, and ooh, I don't really like where this is going. I would think that Lucian should be skeptical about why she didn't go to Tamlin for comfort instead, but he does actually seem to believe her for once instead of questioning her. Lucian paused half a foot from me. He didn't so much as object as I threw my arms around his neck, burying my face against his warm, bare chest. It was seawater from Tarquin's own gift that slipped from my eyes, down my face and onto his golden skin. Lucian loosed a heavy sigh and slid an arm around my waist, the other threading through my hair to cradle my head. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm sorry." This might actually be a sweet moment if Feyre wasn't so conniving. The line about having to use seawater because she can't even convincingly fake cry is just so funny and over the top. What's not funny, however, is how outraged Feyre is by Ianthe's treatment of Lucian when he's clearly not interested in her advances, and then doing almost the same thing to him herself. Even if Lucian wasn't mated, and to Feyre's sister no less, he still wouldn't be romantically interested in Feyre because of her relationship with Tamlin, so Feyre is essentially forcing herself on him the same way Ianthe did, and has zero self-awareness about any of that. She's just using Lucian as a way to stir the pot and make things even worse with Tamlin and the Spring Court, and that is a horrible thing to do to your supposed friend, especially after they confided in you about their recent assault. Like, this genuinely is kind of upsetting, and I don't think SJM realized the implications of this happening, and it's just really gross. All according to Feyre's plan, Tamlin shows up so he can witness her being weirdly cuddly with Lucian. She quickly grabs Tamlin and pulls him out before he can actually murder Lucian, and I'm going to include a longer book passage than usual here so you can see just how pleased Feyre is with herself for coming up with this plan. I strode the few feet to my room, watching Tamlin assess the hall, the distance between my door and Lucian's. "Good night," I said, and shut the door in Tamlin's face. I waited the 5 minutes it took Tamlin to decide not to kill Lucian, and then smiled. I wondered if Lucian had pieced it together, that I had known Tamlin would come to my room tonight, after I had given him so many shy touches and glances today, that I had changed into my most indecent nightgown not for the heat, but so that when my invisible snares in the house informed me that Tamlin had finally worked up the nerve to come to my bedroom, I'd look the part. A feigned nightmare, the evidence set into place with my thrashed sheets. I'd left Lucian's door open with him too distracted and unsuspecting of why I'd really be there to bother to shut it, or notice the shield of hard air I'd placed around the room so that he wouldn't hear or scent Tamlin as he arrived. Until Tamlin saw us there, limbs entwined, my nightgown askew, staring at each other so intently, so full of emotion that we'd either just been starting or finishing up, that we didn't even notice until Tamlin was right there, and that invisible shield vanished before he could sense it. A nightmare, I'd told Tamlin. I was the nightmare.
It's not that serious. Trust me, I know that.
I am cackling. I was the nightmare is so cringe that it circles back around to being iconic, even though this scene in general is very gross, as I've said multiple times. It's just kind of funny to me that Feyre feels the need to narrate this whole plan to herself like we didn't just watch it all happen exactly as she explained it. As delightfully cringe as this part of the book can be, it does get annoying that SJM over-explains all of Feyre's plans like the reader is too stupid to follow what's happening, like we're literally reading it happen, we don't need it to be explained. But overall, Feyre's new badass sneaky spy personality is just way too funny. The next chapter opens up with a throwaway line that a set of keys to the estate gates have gone missing, but also that nobody really seems to care, so whatever, put a pin in that for now. The group is eating a tense breakfast when Ianthe comes in all dramatically, saying she has some announcement to make. Feyre is back to psychoanalyzing the whole interaction between Ianthe and the group, and how Ianthe is clearly just putting on a show for everyone, as she always does. Her white throat bobbed. My acolytes discovered that the land around my temple is dying. Jurian rolled his eyes and went back to his bacon. I guess Feyre isn't the only one who's catching on to Ianthe's bullshit. Actually, nobody really seems to care about whatever situation Ianthe is blathering about, including Tamlin, which seems weird considering how much we've been told that Tamlin cares about what Ianthe says, but whatever. Feyre pretty much immediately knows this is all some scheme for Ianthe to save face over not being the one who was blessed at the Solstice ritual. Somehow Feyre just knows that Ianthe is apparently poisoning the ground herself so that she can be the one who fixes it, and I don't know how Feyre knows this, but she just does. She doesn't even read Ianthe's mind to confirm it. I guess Feyre just has whatever magic powers Rhysand has, where he just knows things that he has no reason to automatically know. Anyway, they talk about the upcoming trip to look at the other holes in the wall, and Ianthe asks if Tamlin is going with them. Feyre is quick to jump in and speak for him and say that he isn't going, but Tamlin pushes back on that. They have a little argument about it, and Ianthe's trifling ass steps in to insist that Tamlin should go because you never know when the Night Court might come back to try to snatch her away again. Do they really think that Feyre is that important that Rhysand would try to kidnap her a second time? I don't even know why they think he kidnapped her the first time. Like, what did they think Rhysand's reason was? Just being evil? The Spring Court didn't know about how Rhysand needed Feyre to nullify the Cauldron, so as I just said, I guess they thought Rhysand stole her just to be evil, like, okay. So Tamlin agrees not to go on the trip, but not before he makes a very pointed threat at Lucian to be careful. I'm pretty sure he's referring to Lucian not getting too touchy-feely with Feyre after he caught them together and not threatening Lucian into protecting Feyre from a potential attack. I'm not really sure what his threat was, but the scene ends there and we jump straight to the trip to the wall. They've just set up camp for the night and Feyre and Lucian are sharing a tent because of course they are. Why didn't they bring enough tents for everybody? Lucian must have remembered Tamlin's threat because he offers to sleep outside on the ground, but Feyre is quick to tell him not to yield to every one of Tamlin's ridiculous paranoid demands or it'll just get worse. She has a point, but all I can think about is why they didn't just bring enough tents for everyone so they didn't have to share. Feyre asks Lucian if there really isn't a way out of their deal with Hybern, and he says that there isn't. Lucian's sigh ruffled my hair. It will claim his own powers, maybe kill him. Magic is all about balance. It's why he couldn't interfere with your bargain with Rhysand. Even the person who tries to sever the bargain faces consequences. If he'd kept you here, the magic that bound you to Rhys might have come to claim his life as payment for yours. Or the life of someone else he cared about. It's old magic, old and strange. It's why we avoid bargains unless it's necessary. Even the scholars at the Day Court don't know how it works. Believe me, I've asked. The only reason the scholars at the Day Court don't know how it works is because SJM couldn't be bothered to write a magic system that makes any sense. The whole magic bargain thing has the potential to be cool, but frankly, it isn't. It's just more plot-convenient nonsense to force characters to do or not do certain things because the bargain made them do it. Lucian goes on to explain that he knows this about the Day Court because he visited them to ask about breaking Feyre's bargain with Rhysand. Obviously that didn't work, which is why Ianthe pushed Tamlin to ally with Hybern instead, because apparently their king is just really good at nullifying magic, like that's his thing, I guess. He was frantic. The scholars at the Day Court worked too slowly. I begged him for more time, but you'd already been gone for months. He wanted to act, not wait, despite the letter you sent. Because of that letter you sent. I finally told him to go ahead with it after that day in the forest. I turned onto my back, staring at the sloped ceiling of the tent. How bad was it? I asked quietly. You saw your room. He trashed it. The study, his bedroom, he killed the sentries who'd been on guard. After he got the last bit of information from them, he executed them in front of everyone in the manor. Lucian doesn't really clarify what he means by the letter making Tamlin more desperate, but I said in the last video that the letter clearly wasn't going to help the situation. Tamlin had already made up his mind that Feyre was kidnapped, so there was nothing that she could say to convince him otherwise, and she was supposed to be illiterate, so why would they think she wrote a letter? Also, fuck Tamlin. Sure, the sentries didn't really fulfill their duties if the Night Court was able to waltz in and take Feyre, but did they really deserve to die over it? The Night Court is stupidly overpowered, so it's sort of unrealistic to expect some random peons to be able to stand up against them. Lucian said he begged Tamlin to spare them, but obviously Tamlin didn't listen because when he's in a blind rage, he doesn't care about the damage he does, whether it's to property or to people. Tamlin's total lack of self-control is really irritating to me given how old he is. I guess 500 years isn't long enough for a man to learn how not to be the absolute worst. Like, come on.
I hate the shit out of you!
The conversation ends with Lucian slipping up and accidentally implying there was some other benefit to allying with Hybern than getting Feyre back, but he doesn't clarify. As I'm going through this book and writing the script, I can't really remember what he's referring to, so I guess we'll all find out together if they ever explain this later on. Jurian rudely awakens them the next morning, and the creepy twins make a crude comment about how they'd choose Lucian over Tamlin too because, quote, Autumn Court males have fire in their blood and they fuck like it too? Ew, what the fuck? Why is everybody so gross? Feyre immediately thinks about Elaine, Lucian's mate, being subject to that fire, and I'm over here dry heaving. Good lord, was any of this necessary? The scene is mercifully cut short when 3 humans show up at the wall. They are children of the Blessed, which was established in the first book. They're basically a culty group of humans that worship the fairies like they're gods. The humans immediately drop to their knees and start worshipping the group, and the creepy twins are way too excited and are blatantly acting like predators who've just stumbled across some helpless prey. Seriously, the narrative cannot be more overt with how evil these two are, and it's about to get a whole lot worse. Jurian seems disturbed by the humans' reactions because he's never heard of the Children of the Blessed, and Feyre tells them to go back home to the mortal realm because it's too dangerous for them in the fairy realm. When they hesitate, Feyre is quick to jump into their minds and force them to turn back, even as one of the creepy twins continues to try and lure them in. The other twin demands them to come here, but Feyre must be better at mind control than them because the humans get scared and run off instead. Jurian covertly thanks Feyre for saving the humans, which makes it pretty freaking obvious that he isn't actually on Hybern's side given how clearly evil they are and how they're totally lying about their newfound respect for humans and still want to kill and enslave humans. What is happening here? Anyway, they search the wall all day and then set up camp for the night. Jurian and Feyre talk some more, and she's starting to realize that it makes 0 sense for him to be working with Hybern. So all of this is to get Miriam back? He stretched his long legs before him, crossing one ankle over the other. It's to draw her out of her little nest with that winged prick and make her regret it. You get a second shot at life and that's what you wish to do? Revenge? Jurian smiled slowly. Isn't that what you're doing? The fact that Jurian sees right through Feyre's little spy act and does nothing to alert Tamlin or Hybern to it is proof enough that he is not loyal to Hybern. But Feyre still thinks he's crazy from being stuck in jewelry for 500 years, so she's pretty quick to write him off. Sometimes Feyre knows exactly what people are thinking and what their intentions are, and other times she is completely wrong. She'd know for sure if she just used her mind control powers to check, but as I've said before, she almost never does for reasons? Feyre half-heartedly pretends that she wants revenge against Rhysand for her alleged kidnapping, and Jurian is quick to call bullshit. He says everyone else might think Rhysand is a sadistic murderer, but Jurian saw firsthand how Rhysand acted during the First War. He saw how Rhysand selflessly tried to save Miriam, which caused him and his legion to be captured and tortured by Amarantha for weeks on end, and clearly a soulless monster would never do something like that. Rhys was too smart to do anything but have the vilification of his character to be a calculated move. And yet here you are, his mate. The most powerful High Lord in the world lost his mate, and has not yet come to claim her, even when she is defenseless in the woods, Jurian chuckled. Perhaps that's because Rhysand has not lost you at all, but rather unleashed you upon us. I've been saying that this whole time! How has nobody realized that the whole villain thing is all just for pretend? Tamlin was also alive during the war, so he should also know Rhysand's true character. Yes, Rhysand's dad killed Tamlin's family, but that was only in retaliation after Tamlin's dad tried to kill Rhysand and ended up killing his mom and sister instead. Tamlin should clearly know that Rhysand isn't evil, but somehow Jurian of all people is the only one who knows. This makes no sense. The last line about Feyre being unleashed on them made me roll my eyes so hard they almost fell out of my head. We're really supposed to think Feyre is this bad bitch making serious moves to take down the Spring Court, but she's so petty about it that her actions are laughable at best. Feyre tries to play off Jurian's accusations, but all he says is, Hybern will kill all of you, and then the scene abruptly ends. I feel like the chapter and scene endings are a lot more abrupt and dramatic in this book compared to the other ones in the series, and sometimes it's fun and other times it's annoying. It's kind of a mixed bag. Like, a little drama is good, but it does it too much, so it kind of loses its effect. Anyway, Feyre is like, oh shit, maybe Jurian is right about Hybern killing everyone, because the next morning she wakes up to the smell of blood.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Lucian and Feyre go to investigate and find the splattered, ruined remains of the Children of the Blessed who ran off earlier.
I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Jurian is just kind of there and nonchalantly says that the creepy twins did it, and they just did it for fun. Feyre and Lucian realize it was retaliation for questioning the creepy twins' authority for letting the humans go in the first place, and so this was like a revenge killing? Why are they so evil? Feyre and Lucian decide that they're going to teach the creepy twins a lesson for being evil. Like, what is happening right now? We then hard cut back to the manor where Tamlin is lecturing Feyre and Lucian about whatever they did, and the scene comes off as extremely comical despite the horror in the last chapter of them finding the remains of 3 people who'd clearly been tortured. This whole segment was very weird, and the series ACOWAR has an issue with this tone shifting all throughout, but it is especially bad in ACOWAR. It is so weird. Like, we just went from tortured gross gore to, like, now this kind of funny scene with Tamlin, it's very weird. They are our allies, he growled at me, at Lucian, both of us seated in armchairs flanking the mantel. They're monsters, I countered. They butchered 3 innocents. And you should have left it alone for me to deal with, Tamlin heaved a jagged breath. Not retaliated like children. He threw a glare in Lucian's direction. I expected better from you. But not from me? I asked quietly. At this point, we still don't know what Feyre and Lucian did, but this confrontation is extremely weird to me. How is retaliating against 3 people getting tortured to death considered acting like children? Do children often get revenge on murderers? Also, the last line here cracks me up so hard. Of course Tamlin doesn't expect any better from Feyre when she's not an obedient little dog like Lucian. Tamlin tries to play it off like, oh, well, you were human, so of course you'd get revenge for your fellow humans, but Lucian should have known better. Feyre points out how utterly stupid that is, and how it's just perpetuating the divide between Fae and human. A life is a life, human or Fae. Tamlin is pretty much directly implying that he doesn't view them as equal, which isn't a good look. Of course Tamlin doesn't have anything reasonable to say to that. Tamlin stopped short and snarled at Lucian. Get out, I'll deal with you later. Don't you talk to him like that, I hissed, shooting to my feet. You have jeopardized this alliance with the stunt you 2 pulled. Good. They can burn in hell for all I care, I shouted. Lucian flinched. You sent the bogey-boggy whatever after them, Tamlin roared. There is so much I have to say about this. First of all, I'm not going to learn how to say bogey-boggy whatever. That's just, it's going to be what it is. Also, it's kind of annoying to see Feyre stand up for Lucian when he almost never does that for her. Like, he does not stand up for her at all. I've bitched about this extensively at this point throughout my other videos, but there's the word hell again. Why are they saying, burn in hell? They shouldn't have the concept of hell. I'm also pissed that there was some epic scene of Lucian and Feyre hunting down the bogey-boggy whatever to lure it to the twins to teach them a lesson, and we don't even get to see any of that happen on the page. We're just told about it after the fact, which is extremely annoying. I feel like every time SJM doesn't know how to write a scene, she just summarizes it later. Even stuff as important as Feyre and Rhysand's literal wedding is mentioned in passing instead of actually playing out on the page. As a writer, you're supposed to summarize some stuff for the sake of pacing, but SJM will write boring scenes out in excruciating detail and then skip over exciting stuff. She's not summarizing for pacing, she's summarizing the scenes she simply doesn't know how to write. Like, I wanted to see the bogey-boggy whatever fuck up the creepy twins and we just don't get to see it. Oh, and to be clear, the creepy twins aren't dead. The bogey-boggy whatever didn't kill them. It just freaked them out real bad, so I don't even really see why Tamlin's that mad. Lucian tries to argue that the creepy twins are clearly evil because they are, and Tamlin kicks him out of the room. He and Feyre keep arguing, and Feyre is a lot more aggressive than she ever was before, which is kind of nice to see. She lays into him for being Hybern's dog when they are clearly and obviously evil. You sold us out to get me back, I said, low and cold. You whored us out to Hybern. Forgive me if I am now trying to regain some of what we lost. Claws slid free, a feral growl ripped out of him. They hunted down and butchered those humans for sport, I went on. You might be willing to get on your knees for Hybern, but I certainly am not. He exploded. This is very reminiscent of the scene in the last book when Tamlin explodes after giving Feyre the painting set that she wasn't grateful enough for. But this time Feyre intentionally doesn't shield herself so that she'll be hurt in the blast and everyone else can see how Tamlin acts when anyone questions him. There's a lot of discourse around this scene and whether or not Feyre was being manipulative by arguing with Tamlin until he exploded and whether or not his outburst was justified. And I can't believe how many people are so quick to say Feyre is at fault for this. The language Feyre used by saying "hoard us out" and "get on your knees" made me uncomfortable, but it's not like she was standing there berating Tamlin over nothing. Allying with Hybern is an absolutely insane thing to do, and it's completely unreasonable to expect everyone to just shut up and accept it. Feyre wasn't picking at Tamlin's specific insecurities to force him into a rage. He was already angry, and she was criticizing a choice he made that literally nobody but Ianthe agrees with. Even if Feyre was throwing personal insults at Tamlin, that doesn't justify physical violence against her. You don't get to hit someone because they said something that upset you. Also, I want to be very clear here. You can't provoke someone into attacking you if they don't already have violence in their nature, and I stand by that. It's not like Feyre was up in Tamlin's space being physically aggressive with him and he felt like he needed to defend himself. She was simply saying things he didn't like and he exploded over it and got violent. I've had people say some vile shit to me, but I've never attacked anyone because violence isn't in my nature. Sure, I would fight back if somebody was physically aggressive with me, but being verbally aggressive does not justify a physical response. That's all to say that I don't think Feyre did anything wrong here, and I put the sole blame on Tamlin for freaking out and losing his shit over being criticized over a very reasonable point. I don't care what kind of stress he's under. Being stressed is never a justification for physical violence, especially against an intimate partner. Like, what? How is there any justification here? Lucian and the sentries run in to help Feyre, and her injuries aren't nearly as bad as I thought they'd be given how destroyed the room is around her. When Tamlin did this in the last book, I assumed Feyre would have died because of, how it was described, but in this scene, all she gets is a gash on her head. It's still a pretty nasty injury, though, and she definitely didn't deserve it, nor did she force Tamlin into inflicting it on her, and I stand by that. Feyre, Tamlin breathed from behind us. I halted, aware of every eye that watched. I'm fine, I whispered. I'm sorry. I wiped at the blood dribbling down my cheek. I'm fine, I told him again. No one, not even Tamlin, looked convinced, and if I could have painted that moment, I would have named it A Portrait in Snares and Baiting.
But that's really dumb.
Wow, what a way to ruin a dramatic moment. The portrait name had me cackling, and I'd like to think that Feyre names all of her portraits this way. I feel like this is SJM kind of pointing a joke at herself with her A Court of Blank and Blank naming convention. A Portrait in Snares and Baiting, come on. But I do think the word order needs to be flipped, though, because you need to bait before you can snare, so it should be A Portrait in Baits and Snaring instead of A Portrait of Snares and Baiting, and now it all just sounds stupid. Whatever, Feyre, name your painting whatever you want. Anyway, the scene ends there, and the next scene opens up with Feyre and Rhysand communicating through their bond. He sensed that Feyre was hurt and is checking in on her. We're supposed to see how much better Rhysand is because he didn't teleport straight to the Spring Court to absolutely wreck Tamlin for what he did to Feyre, but I still hate Rhysand and won't be giving him any credit for this. The scene ends with Feyre thinking about Rhysand eating her out. Ew. I can't believe I just wrote that so directly in the script. Good lord. It's very weird and uncomfortable after the violent scene we just got, but I guess nothing can stop the horniness between these two.
Disgusting!
The next scene opens up with Feyre taking a ride around the court with the sentries so she can essentially show off her injuries to everyone. I think this is the part where people really say Feyre is being manipulative, and she kind of is because she's delaying her own healing to make Tamlin look extra bad, but she'd have no ammo to use against him if he hadn't hurt her in the first place. Feyre's injuries have delayed them from scouting the wall anymore, and Tamlin feels too bad to tell them to go without her, so they've just been hanging out as Feyre continues to sow seeds of discontent through the Spring Court to turn everyone against each other. Apparently some Naga, the creepy scaly fairies from the first book, got into the grounds because of that gate key that randomly went missing a few chapters ago. I don't know how a locked gate was all it took to previously keep the Naga out, because I think they just bust the gate down or jump over it, but whatever, I guess the locked gate was enough. I've been yapping too much already, so I'm going to breeze through this part. The group gather in the barracks to deal with the sentry who allegedly lost the keys, and Tamlin is going to physically punish the guy by beating him with a whip. The other sentries are clearly uncomfortable and angry about this, and it makes me wonder if whipping isn't a standard punishment for this sort of thing, and if Tamlin is putting on a show because Hybern is there. I mean, I guess he did execute those guards before, so I think they should be used to physical punishment, but they seem very disturbed by this. Before Tamlin can start whipping, the sentry shouts that it was Ianthe who took the keys. This part is a little confusing, but bear with me. Feyre put this all into motion because she somehow knew that Ianthe really had stolen the keys and then directly gave them to the Naga to cause this attack so she could then save them to regain some of her street cred after not being blessed at the Solstice Festival. So if she's going through with this whole Naga thing, I don't know why she did the whole, poisoning her grounds thing. Ianthe's out here doing too much. I don't know how Feyre knows all of this, but she does, so she went to the sentry and placed a false memory in his head of Ianthe taking the keys, even though it's not really a false memory because she did take the keys, he just didn't see her take them. It's weird. Feyre says they should listen to the sentry's story, but Ianthe is quick to jump in and say that they should trust her, a high priestess, over him, and that offends all of the other sentries, which is exactly what Feyre wanted. Even though it's clear that Tamlin has kind of realized that Ianthe was behind it all, he still blames the sentry for it and commences with the whipping, which completely destroys all of his trust with the other sentries. They think he's very out of line for doing this. The next chapter is pretty much a yada yada summary chapter. The whole gang is going to go back to the wall, including Ianthe and Tamlin for some reason. Also, that servant Alice is now going to leave for the summer court, even though she talked about it earlier. She's going to go now when they go to the wall, so bye-bye Alice. Even though Feyre goes to the summer court later in this book, we never see Alice ever again, so again, bye-bye. So they leave for the wall and set up camp, because they're always setting up camp. Feyre asks to share a tent with Ianthe instead of Tamlin, and if that isn't the biggest red flag that Feyre is up to something, I don't know what else she could do to tip them off, because that is such a ridiculous thing for her to request. As they settle in for the night, Feyre can hardly sleep because all she can think about is how badly she wants to slit Ianthe's throat.
Stop it. Get some help.
While I understand her anger, it is a little disturbing sometimes how badly Feyre wants to physically harm Ianthe, especially because I don't think Feyre thinks such explicit violent thoughts about harming the male characters who have wronged her. Like, she's not fantasizing about slitting Tamlin's throat even after he physically assaulted her, and there's something about this whole situation that rubs me in the wrong way that I can't exactly articulate. It is just very weird to me that she only thinks explicit violent thoughts about the female character and not about the male characters. I don't know what that says or what comment I'm trying to make, it's just weird to me. Ianthe wakes up to Feyre basically sitting over her with a knife, which terrifies her exactly how Feyre wanted. And again, Feyre is being way too obvious that she isn't on the Spring Court's side, but nobody ever really acknowledges it. Lucian and Jurian kind of do, but they never do anything about it, which is extremely weird. They all go to the wall to continue their inspection, and the creepy twins start strategizing while Feyre nonchalantly starts peeling and eating an apple. The way Feyre is so focused on eating the apple reminds me of the "I'll take a potato chip and eat it" scene from Death Note, and I know I keep referencing that anime, but this beginning part of the book with all the scheming and monologuing and body analysis and all that stuff from Feyre is so unbelievably like Kira, even down to justifying actions that are morally wrong because she's starting to develop a god complex. Like, this is very Death Note. Anyway, Feyre butts into the creepy twins' conversation to criticize their strategy, which obviously pisses them off. "This exact spot," Dagda said, a hand on the hilt of his sword, "exists because a person or object of mighty power passed through it. The Cauldron will study the work they've already done and magnify it until the wall collapses entirely. It is a careful, complex process, and one I doubt your mortal mind can grasp." Probably, though this mortal mind did manage to solve Amarantha's riddle and destroy her. Feyre, girl, this is not the flex you think it is. That riddle was exceptionally easy, and you weren't even the one who killed Amarantha. Tamlin did. Sure, Feyre completed the trials, which is kind of impressive, but she never would have been able to do it without Rhysand's help. She would have died in the second trial if Rhysand hadn't cheated and given her the answer. Feyre deserves some credit for what she did under the mountain, but it's annoying when she gets all high and mighty about it given how much help she had. Through their arguing, the twins reveal a lot of crucial information to Feyre, and it's incredibly stupid of them to tell her anything. They explain exactly how they're going to use the Cauldron, the size of their army, their allies, where they plan to attack, like, etc. It goes on. It's so obvious that Feyre is a spy that they should have fed her a bunch of false information, but they tell her their real plans because of course they do. God, I hate this book. Now that Feyre has thoroughly destroyed the Spring Court and has all the information she needs, she decides it's about time to head back to the Night Court. Everybody is conveniently off somewhere else doing something else, so it's the perfect time for Feyre to make her escape. Her disappearance would be the final nail in the Spring Court's coffin because now everybody loves her and hates Tamlin and Ianthe, so they would not want to see her go. For good measure, Feyre places another false memory in one of the sentries about how the creepy twins tried to kill her and how Tamlin did nothing to help her, so that's why she was forced to run away back to the Night Court. Like, she's doing too much. Feyre used to feel bad about meddling in people's minds, but I guess now she doesn't, as long as it's a random unnamed side character and not someone who's actually important. Anyway, Feyre is all packed up and ready to leave when we get one of the most bizarre and out of left field scenes I've read in this series so far. Feyre overhears Lucian telling Ianthe to back off, and Ianthe simply laughs as she talks about how she essentially assaulted him at the Calanmai festival. Lucian is clearly uncomfortable and blatantly tells Ianthe to get away from him, and Feyre sneaks a little closer to see that Ianthe has somehow managed to chain Lucian to a tree with the weird magic nullifying stone chains from Hybern. Wait, what?
I don't understand, bitch. Don't understand.
I have no idea how Ianthe was able to trap Lucian like this, and we never get any explanation for it. Feyre seriously considers leaving Lucian behind before coming to her senses and stepping in to rescue him, and it's like so messed up that she even had to consider whether or not to go save him. Instead of physically attacking Ianthe like she's been fantasizing about for the entire book, Feyre uses her mind control powers instead, and I don't even know what is happening, this is so random to me. She makes Ianthe unchain Lucian before demanding her to pick up a rock and smash her own hand into dust like something out of Saw. What is happening? Oh my god! I guess we're supposed to excuse Feyre's vindictive act of violence because Ianthe technically did it to herself? But I can't really sit here and say that Ianthe didn't deserve it. I don't really know. This scene feels really weird because in the last book we learned that Rhysand had already crushed Ianthe's hand once when she tried to come onto him, and I guess she learned nothing from that experience. Feyre lectures Ianthe about not being a creep anymore as Ianthe fairly graphically destroys her own hand with the rock. You are allowed to see a healer to set the bones, but not to erase the scarring, and every time you look at that hand, you are going to remember that touching people against their will has consequences. And if you do it again, everything you are will cease to exist. You will live with that terror every day and never know where it originates. Only the fear of something chasing you, hunting you, waiting for you the instant you let your guard down.
What will you learn? What will you learn? That your actions have consequences!
Well, Feyre, Ianthe didn't learn the first time her hand was crushed, so I don't see how it's going to be any different this time. I think we're supposed to be cheering for Feyre for punishing a rapist, and while I'm not sad to see Ianthe get injured, the glorification of violence in this moment is very much at odds with how Feyre demonizes Tamlin and other characters for their own violent acts. The narrative is from Feyre's perspective, and it's kind of wild to see how she justifies her actions while criticizing others for doing similar things. The creepy twins show up right when Ianthe finishes dusting her own hand, which definitely throws a wrench in Feyre's escape plan. The twins must have noticed Feyre is all packed up because they ask where she's going, and Feyre vaguely says, "Oh, I have places to be." The twins make it clear that they've known she's been a spy this whole time, which makes it even weirder that they gave her real information earlier about their strategy instead of trying to throw her off. It's clear that the twins have no intention of letting Lucian or Feyre live because of their evil monologuing, and Feyre starts to feel weak and sick because they poisoned her food, because of course they did. "What apple?" I bit out. "The one you shoved down your throat an hour ago," Branna said. "Grown and tended in the king's personal garden, fed a steady diet of water laced with Feybane. Enough to knock out your powers for a few days straight. No shackles required. And here you are, thinking no one had noticed you planned to vanish today." She clicked her tongue again. "Our uncle would be most displeased if we allowed that to happen." No wonder the narrative put such a focus on Feyre eating that apple. It came off super weird, and that was so that the reader would remember the apple for this reveal later on. The fact that Hybern wastes time growing poisoned food is incredibly stupid to me, when they could just sprinkle some Feybane dust into whatever they're cooking, like their stew or their chili or whatever they're eating at the fire. Why would they go through this effort to grow poisoned food? It seems silly, and what if they accidentally eat one of the poisoned apples? How can they tell the difference between the poisoned apples and the regular apples? And when they're growing all this poisoned food, are they just throwing a bunch of it away if they don't have any enemies to feed it to? This whole thing is so weird and makes me ask so many questions that are so unnecessary. Anyway, Feyre yet again considers leaving Lucian behind before deciding to fight. "Leave him. I should and could leave him, but to a fate perhaps worse than death." His russet eye gleamed. "Go. I made my choice." I exploded into night and smoke and shadow, and even 1,000 years wasn't enough for Dagda to adequately prepare as I winnowed in front of him and struck. There's the classic "I exploded into night and smoke and blah blah blah" line Feyre gives whenever she's about to do something badass. She repeats this ad nauseum throughout the entire series. Even though the twins are 1,000 years old and Feyre has been poisoned with magic nullifying dust, she and Lucian take down the twins fairly easily, way too easily for it to make any sense whatsoever. I would think that as commanders of Hybern's army, the twins would be very powerful and Lucian and Feyre would have at least some trouble taking them down, but I don't even think they sustain any injuries from this fight, which is absolutely wild. Even though Feyre ate the magic nullifying apple, she can still use her powers, so she mind controls Ianthe to tell everyone that the twins were killed in self-defense, which isn't even a lie, so I don't know why she wasted time doing that. Lucian realizes that Feyre is finally going to go back to the Night Court and says he's going with her. Feyre is like, "Oh, hell no, you're not coming with me." But he reminds her that she's going to need him whenever that apple finally kicks in and she loses her magic. And he also wants to get his mate back, Elaine, so he's like, "I'm coming with you no matter what." Feyre reluctantly agrees to let Lucian come with her, and off they go. They hike off into the woods, and now both of their magic is gone, so I guess Lucian must have gotten poisoned too. We then get a weird world-building detail that feels really important and like it should have been explained before the third book in this series. I stepped northward, swaying. Lucian gripped my arm. "You're taking a door?" I slid, aching eyes toward him. Yes. The caves, doors they called them, in these hollows led to other pockets of Prythian. I'd taken one straight under the mountain. I would now take one to get me home, or as close to it as I could get. No door to the Night Court existed, here or anywhere. "Excuse me, what?" Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember any mention of doors before this. This would have been helpful to know before now, but I don't think they ever mentioned using these doors ever again, which is a weird thing to throw in and then immediately abandon. Like, I know they have used these doors in the past book, but they never explained it to the best of my knowledge. Like, they did not explain it at that point, so it just felt confusing, and they're not going to do anything with it now, so why explain it now? Feyre and Lucian decide to go to the Autumn Court because of the whole blood ruby thing with Feyre and the Summer Court, so they want to avoid going there. If you don't remember, Lucian is originally from the Autumn Court, where his father is the High Lord, and he's super evil, and so are Lucian's brothers, so if I were them, I would take my chances with the Summer Court. Tarquin is such a nice guy that he probably wouldn't actually kill them on sight like Feyre claims the blood rubies mean, and they got the blood rubies because they stole the book from him. Like, go watch the last video if you don't remember that. Regardless, they choose the Autumn Court and try to find a cave to hang out in until their magic comes back. Feyre thinks about what she's done to the Spring Court and how she felt like she only had two choices. The first is letting the Spring Court fall to Hybern, which is what she did, and the second would be to have the Night Court claim the Spring Court for themselves. But considering the Night Court is all the way to the north and there are 5 courts between them, it didn't make sense for the Night Court to try to occupy the Spring Court, so Feyre essentially handed the Spring Court to Hybern on a silver platter. The next chapter opens up in the Autumn Court, and it's a shame it's ran by douchebags because the place sounds really nice. If I had to pick a court based on vibes alone, I'd definitely go for Autumn. It's my favorite time of the year. I am one of those spooky bitches who loves Halloween. I love the orange leaves. I would for sure go Autumn Court, no doubt in my mind.
It's freaking bats. I love Halloween.
Of the Solar Courts, I guess I'd choose the Night Court. However, there is a Dawn Court, which implies there should also be a Dusk or Twilight Court, but there's not. But if there was, I would choose that one, just for vibes. Anyway, Feyre and Lucian tiptoe their way around the Autumn Court until they find a cave to hide in. They settle in for the night and finally have somewhat of an honest conversation, even though Feyre really doesn't want to talk and is trying to blow Lucian off. Lucian was having none of it. I knew you were lying the moment you unleashed that light in Hybern. My friend at the Dawn Court has the same power. Her light is identical, and it does not do whatever horseshit you lied about it doing. You know what, Lucian? Pop off, do what you're gonna do, but this would have been real great if you brought this up like, I don't know, 100 fucking pages ago. Even Feyre is kind of annoyed by this and calls Lucian out and is like, you're just Tamlin's faithful dog. And I'm like, but no, if he was faithful, he would say something about Feyre being a spy. Like, this isn't faithful. This is being, like, feeding into delusion. Lucian snorted. I didn't tell him for 2 reasons. 1, it felt like kicking a male already down. I couldn't take that hope away from him. I rolled my eyes. 2, he snapped. I knew if I was correct and called you on it, you'd find a way to make sure I never saw her. My nails dug into my palms hard enough to hurt, but I remained seated on the bedroll as I bared my teeth at him. And that's why you're here. Not because it's right and he's always been wrong, but just so you can get what you think you're owed. Bro, what the fuck? Where do I even start with this? The reason that it felt like kicking a man, yes man, because I refused to say male and female like a damn incel, while he was down is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Let me repeat that. The reason that it felt like kicking a man while he was down is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Lucian would really rather sit there and let Feyre destroy the court from the inside out because telling Tamlin she's a spy would make him feel bad? Seriously? I'm sure Tamlin feels a whole lot worse now that Feyre is gone anyway and his court is now in shambles, so he doesn't get Feyre or his court. Lucian didn't save him from any turmoil at all. He just kicked that can down the road and now it's twice as bad. I'm also a little bit confused why Feyre is mentioning Elaine right now, because she's trying to kind of imply that, like, Lucian is being territorial over Elaine, and so he's willing to get rid of the entire Spring Court if it means keeping contact with Elaine, which is kind of a weird accusation to make. From what we've seen, Lucian isn't nearly as territorial over Elaine as we've seen both Rhysand and Tamlin act towards Feyre, and Tamlin isn't even Feyre's mate, so it feels really, like, contradictory of Feyre to be criticizing someone else for being territorial when Lucian hasn't even done anything that bad. Like, Lucian has only even looked at Elaine 1 time. How is Feyre judging all of this from 1 interaction 1 time? Side note, I guess Lucian can't speak to Elaine telepathically like Feyre and Rhysand speak to each other. I thought that they were able to do that because of their mating bond, but maybe they're only able to do it because they both have mind control powers? Except I do think there are scenes that establish that other mated pairs are also talking telepathically to each other, so I don't know why Lucian isn't able to do that with Elaine. And it's not because Feyre formally accepted the mating bond with Rhysand, because they were able to talk telepathically long before they ever made it official, so I'm just kind of confused about the whole mechanics behind the mate thing and the telepathic talking. It doesn't matter, we're not going to get clarification, so I don't know why I'm even bitching about it. Feyre assures Lucian that Elaine is safe, and Lucian asks why he's supposed to believe that, even though it makes no sense that he should even question that. Feyre even is like, dude, why are you questioning that? If I thought that they were in any danger whatsoever, I would have left months ago. Like, don't play me like that. I would not leave my sisters somewhere I thought they were in danger. Except now on second thought, I do kind of think Lucian has a point here, because he did watch Feyre lay on the ground and do nothing while Nesta and Elaine were dragged into the Cauldron. Like, Feyre really did nothing to try to help or stop that situation at all. And also remember, he's been conditioned to believe that the Night Court is evil, even by Feyre herself. Remember that Feyre's been saying this whole time that Rhysand kidnapped her and assaulted her, and even though Lucian never believed her, she's still been saying that this whole time, so of course Lucian is going to have to take a little bit of time to realize that he's not actually evil. Lucian then finally says what's actually bothering him and asks Feyre what her plans for him were in all this scheming. Was their friendship ever real, and would she have just left him behind if she hadn't stumbled across Ianthe creeping on him? What was her plan for Tamlin? Why didn't she just kill him instead of doing all of this? You know what, Lucian? Those are all really valid questions, but of course Feyre isn't going to give you any answers. She just kind of vaguely says that she had no plan for Lucian and that letting Tamlin's court collapse was a better punishment than outright killing him. Also, killing Tamlin would make Feyre and the Night Court look really bad, and it would just make them look like they were actually truly evil, so no courts would want to ally with them in the future. So this was all strategy, and basically she didn't consider Lucian and their friendship at all, which, oh my god, Feyre, you suck. I don't even particularly like Lucian, but everybody else sucks so hard that I just find myself rooting for Lucian, and he's being done so dirty. Naturally, Lucian isn't very pleased with those answers because he says, like, oh, you know what, let's just go to bed, which, thank God, let's end this conversation. Feyre is not going to tell you anything helpful. So they go to bed, and the next morning they start their hike off into the woods again, and they're going to pass right by the Forest House, which is the palace in the Autumn Court, because they're not in good enough shape to afford taking another detour to go really far around the palace. At this point, they haven't eaten in days, and because there are a million scenes of them eating in this series, it's kind of hard to remember that fairies can in fact starve to death, so they can, I guess, starve to death or die of thirst or die due to the elements, so they really need to get where they're going and stop hiking. Except apparently the Autumn Court must be huge because they hike for 5 whole days, and they pass the Forest House, which as I said is the palace where the High Lord and his family live. I'm not really sure why that manor gets an official name while I don't think the others are named. Like, I don't think the palace in the Spring Court has any special name like the Forest House, which kind of seems more like a Spring Court thing than an Autumn Court thing. I'm ranting too much. Let's move on. We get some exposition about Lucian and how he's the youngest of 7 sons, so nobody really paid much attention to him. He said he doesn't want to be High Lord and that the people of the court also don't want him to be High Lord because they don't really like him. And the reason why is because they blame him for the fact that he didn't protect his girlfriend from his evil brothers, but I think they should blame his evil brothers and not him. If you don't remember that whole situation, Lucian has severe trauma because at some point his family murdered his girlfriend for reasons I don't remember. I guess they didn't like her? I don't know, she got murdered and he couldn't save her. And now everybody hates him and he especially hates himself. Oh my god, Lucian, I want to save this poor baby. You know what? I'm going to stand right here and now and say Lucian is the only person in this book that I like. And that's a pretty bold claim considering I've complained multiple times about how much Lucian pisses me off. So that should say a lot. Justice for Lucian. They hike through the day and make it pretty close to the Winter Court border. It's really cold now, so they're at risk of freezing to death. So they finally make it to another cave and they light a fire, even though that's probably a bad idea because the smoke might signal people, but they have no choice because they might freeze to death, because apparently fairies can freeze to death, which feels weird, but they can. Unfortunately, Feyre and Lucian don't get much sleep before they're awoken by Lucian's evil brothers. I'm going to mostly breeze through this encounter because it doesn't really matter to the plot. I mean, most of this book doesn't actually matter to the plot, but this part isn't even interesting either, so we're going to kind of breeze through this. Oh, except I would be remiss to skip this wonderful interaction. That knife pressed a fraction harder into my skin as he let out a humorless laugh. Right, rumor has it you two have run off together, cuckolding Tamlin. His grin widened. I didn't think you had it in you, little brother. He had it in her, it seems, one of the others sniggered. Oh my god, it's not Jurian that has the cuck fetish. It's SJM! I actually screamed when I read this. Like, what the fuck is happening? ACOWAR is so wild. It is so bonkers. I don't know how a book can be so wild and so bonkers, but also so boring at the same time. Reading this book is truly a baffling experience, and you have seen nothing yet. Anyway, the brothers intend on taking Feyre and Lucian back to the Autumn Court, or back to the Forest House or whatever. Eris is there, and we're hopefully reminded that he's the super evil brother, like the most evilest of all the brothers, who was once Mor's fiance, except then Mor went and boned Cassian so that Eris wouldn't want her anymore, and that was like a whole thing because Mor knew that Eris was super evil and did not want to be with him. It was a whole thing. Go watch the other video if you don't remember. Anyway, Lucian's super evil brothers start to haul them away, and Lucian and Feyre lock eyes and know that they have no choice but to fight, so they, make a signal together and then start fighting. Feyre shoots a wall of flames at Lucian's evil brothers, which is important because she's supposed to be keeping it a secret that she can use all the High Lord's powers, and the fire thing is the Autumn Court's thing, so they're for sure going to know that something wacky is going on. Rhysand and the Night Court already know about Feyre's powers, and also Tamlin and Lucian know about it too, but it's a pretty big mistake to reveal that fact to Lucian's brothers. Feyre and Lucian managed to escape, but they had to leave all their gear behind in the cave, and Lucian doesn't even have his cloak, so they're kind of screwed. Feyre and Lucian hike through the snowy mountains, and the only reason they don't die is that they have just enough fire magic to keep themselves warm. It's been at least 5 days since Feyre's eaten the poisoned apple, so it makes no sense to me that her powers are still mostly gone. Shouldn't she have digested and shit that thing out days ago? Not to be vulgar, but does she have, constipation? She should have processed that a while ago. Later on in the book, there are times when the characters inhale Feybane dust, and it doesn't take them nearly this long to get their powers back. So the Feybane is this very convenient plot device that makes the characters sometimes have magic and sometimes not for whatever time duration the plot needs it to happen. So this whole Feybane thing is just another sloppy world building detail that SJM didn't care enough about to actually set rules about how it worked. The duo find another plot convenient cave to hide out in, and they're forced to cuddle for warmth so they don't freeze to death. But to be clear, there is nothing sexy about this whatsoever. Lucian asks Feyre to tell him about Elaine, and surprisingly she does, even though she's been very protective about Elaine this whole time. Feyre talks about how Elaine loves to garden, before breaking the news to Lucian that Elaine is already engaged. Oh yeah, this is a plot point from the last book that I didn't really remember at all. But I guess it's good for Lucian that Elaine's fiancé is from a family of fairy haters. These people hate fairies more than anybody has ever hated fairies, and now that Elaine is a fairy, they're not going to want anything to do with her, so that's good for Lucian, I guess. My mate is engaged to a human male. He spoke more to himself than to me. I'm sorry if... I want to see her, just once. Just to know. To know what? He hitched my damp cloak higher around us. If she is worth fighting for. There's something weird about this that I can't articulate. I really hate the concept of fighting for someone that doesn't want you, regardless of the reason why they don't want you. If someone turns you down, just move on. Don't be weird about it. Don't fight for them. Leave them alone. Lucian continues to make it weird, though, by saying he'll ask Rhysand for advice on how to deal with this situation of his mate being with another man, clearly referring to Feyre being with Tamlin. Yikes on bikes. Lucian goes on to demand Feyre to tell him exactly when she stopped loving Tamlin and started loving Rhysand instead. Ooh, double yikes on bikes. Lucian is acting like a kid whose parents just divorced. He's like, Mommy and Daddy, whose fault is it for the divorce? And oh my god, why is he acting like this? I know I just said I liked Lucian, but I'm starting not to like Lucian again.
Can you behave yourself, please? Don't be a foolish idiot.
What?
None of this is any of his business whatsoever, and he probably wouldn't believe anything that Feyre told him anyway. He wanted to know if the affair with Rhysand started before Feyre left the Spring Court, as in Feyre, were you cheating on Tamlin? And again, none of his business, Lucian, butt out. You kissed under the mountain. I had as little choice in that as I did in the dancing. And yet this is the male you now love? Oh my god, are we finally going to address the assault stuff? No! No, we're not. Feyre deflects by saying that Lucian should be happy that she was able to leave her current partner, meaning Tamlin, for her mate, meaning Rhysand, because that's exactly what he's hoping that Elaine will do by leaving her fiancé for him. That feels like a really weird thing to say in this already very weird conversation, and I don't know what Feyre is trying to accomplish here or what they're even arguing about. This whole thing is so stupid. Can we just get to the plot already? Why are we doing any of this? Lucian reveals that he's really just mad that Feyre abandoned them, and she points out that he abandoned her a long time ago by never sticking up for her to Tamlin and not being a good friend, so what did he expect? Also, remember that they've been cuddling for warmth this entire time, so that makes this whole thing even more awkward and just so uncomfortable. They argue for a little longer before finally going to sleep, and they miraculously survive the freezing night. So the next morning they start hiking again, and they pass the border into the Winter Court. So now that means they have to worry about being killed by polar bears, or whatever the fairy equivalent to polar bears are, so god, that sucks. They travel for another whole day and night, and thankfully don't run into any bears, because apparently they don't have their magic back yet, and it's been like over a week now? Feyre and Lucian have reached a huge frozen lake, and they have a lot of ground to cover, because there's no way they can set up camp on the lake, because they're definitely going to freeze to death if they have to do that. Feyre and Lucian make it a pretty good distance out onto the lake before realizing that Lucian's brothers have been following them this whole time and now have caught up to them. This doesn't really make that much sense to me, considering that Lucian's brothers all still have their magic and can teleport, so they should have caught up to Lucian and Feyre, who are traveling on foot, much sooner than this, but whatever. Eris, the oldest and most evilest brother, dramatically lifts his hand and flashes his fire powers like all evilly to show them that he plans on melting the ice they're on. It's a whole-ass lake, so I don't know if he intends to just melt it all or what. Like, I don't know how powerful he is. Is he just gonna melt this entire lake at once? But either way, Feyre and Lucian are terrified. They take off running as the ice melts around them, so I guess Eris is pretty powerful because this lake is huge. They didn't even think they were going to be able to cross it in one day. The plot requires that Feyre uses her magic, so she starts blasting ice around to refreeze it as they run, even though that doesn't really seem to be that helpful. Like, it seems like that's wasting time rather than doing anything to help them, because why would they need to freeze the ice they were just on if they're running forward? I'm thinking about this way too hard. It just doesn't make sense to me. It especially doesn't make sense since Feyre is supposed to be hiding her powers, and Lucian's brothers have already seen her use fire, and now they're seeing her use ice, so they're gonna put 1 and 2 together and figure out what's going on. I also don't understand why Feyre is using her power to refreeze ice when she should just grab Lucian and teleport away, or he should grab her and teleport away. I don't know why they're doing that instead of just teleporting. I guess Lucian's brothers managed to flank them somehow, and so Feyre and Lucian are surrounded, and they start shooting arrows at them, and one goes straight through Feyre's arm, which is kind of gross, but ultimately doesn't matter. Throughout this series, there are various characters that are wounded at various times, and it literally never matters. It does not ever matter when they get an injury. It causes no consequence whatsoever. It really looks like it's the end for Feyre and Lucian as Eris captures Feyre and wraps her up in fire chains that somehow aren't burning her. I don't know how the fire is physically restraining her, since fire isn't really a tangible material like rope or actual chains. But I guess it works that way because SJM couldn't be bothered to write a magic system that makes any sense. Just as all hope is lost, we get a dramatic entrance from some characters we haven't seen in a hot minute. A shadow slammed into the earth before us, cracking the ice toward every horizon. Not a shadow, an Illyrian warrior. 7 red siphons glinted over his scaled black armor as Cassian tucked in his wings and snarled at Eris with 5 centuries worth of rage. Aw shit, Bat Boy's to the rescue! Asriel is there too and ready to throw down to save his High Lady. Oh yeah, remember Feyre is the official High Lady of the Night Court? Yeah, I already forgot that too, considering we didn't even get to see the ceremony. Cassian and Asriel immediately wreck Eris and Lucian's other brothers, and it's like not even a close fight, they just destroy them. Cassian and Asriel are straight up about to kill Lucian's brothers before Feyre commands them to stop and let them go. Even though Lucian's brothers are evil and attack them first, it would look really bad for the Night Court to kill them all and would just make them look more evil before they're trying to get allies for this war. It's just not good optics. Cassian and Asriel are good little dogs, so they go straight to Feyre's side and just listen to her commands. I think Feyre is quick to judge Lucian for being so loyal to Tamlin, but all of Rhysand's inner circle are just as, if not more, blindly loyal to their High Lord and now their High Lady, so it feels a little hypocritical of Feyre to point that out about Lucian. Feyre dramatically removes the glamour she's had hiding her tattoo that she got when she became High Lady, and she shows it off to everyone, which is very confusing.
Wait a damn minute. Wait a damn...
Did the Feybane not neutralize the magic that she was using to maintain the glamour? Shouldn't it have been showing this whole time? Was Feyre really wasting her limited magic on hiding her tattoo when she should have used it to teleport to escape? What the fuck is even happening? I am High Lady of the Night Court, I said quietly to them all. Even Eris stopped sneering. His amber eyes widened, something like fear now creeping into them. There's no such thing as a High Lady, one of Lucian's brothers spat. A faint smile played on my mouth. There is now.
Ew, this is so cringe. Guilty.
This is supposed to be a badass Feyre moment, but I'm still annoyed about the plot hole with the tattoo glamour. Feyre decides to spare Lucian's brothers and commands the Bat Boys to take her and Lucian back to the Night Court, so they do. Except you'll remember that the Illyrians apparently can't use the teleporting magic, so they're gonna have to fly. Feyre has kind of a touching reunion with Cassian as she hugs him and they fly off into the sky, but it would be more touching if I wasn't laughing my ass off thinking about how awkward it must have been for Azriel to carry Lucian off as they flew away. Like, that's gotta suck for all of them. They fly back to the Night Court and Mor runs out to greet them. She says that Rhysand isn't there but doesn't specify where he is, but that he knows that Feyre is back and he's racing home as quickly as he can to see her. There's an awkward moment when Mor sees Lucian because remember the last time they all saw him, he was on Tamlin's side. But Feyre is like, no, he's on our side, don't worry, so they all go to the Townhouse to hang out. Feyre is overjoyed to be home while Lucian is just kind of vaguely confused about it all. Remember that he's been conditioned to believe that the Night Court is mega super evil and it's all about the Court of Nightmares, that thing under the mountain, and that there is no cities like Phalaris. None of them know that this exists, so he is very confused to see that the Night Court is actually kind of nice. According to my Kindle, we are now 18% through this book, and Rhysand finally makes his first appearance, which seems really long for a romance novel to have the male lead, not show up until now, but he's here now, so can we get the plot going, please? Feyre and Rhysand have an emotional reunion, and I couldn't care any less about that, and everyone else makes themselves scarce because they know what's about to go down. Do you want to go over what happened at the Spring Court? I asked, voice raw, as I studied my mate's face. No amusement, nothing but that predatory intensity, focused on my every breath. There are other things I'd rather do first. Oh God, where do I even start with this? Get used to them saying mate 1,000 times, because it only gets worse from here. Also, why are we using the phrase predatory intensity when this is a man reuniting with his wife? Like, when Feyre became High Lord, they also essentially got married and they refer to each other as husband and wife. So the phrase predatory intensity is very odd, and it makes it sound like Feyre stumbled across some guy in a dark alley and not like she's reuniting with her husband. Also, it seems really weird that Rhysand wants to get straight to boning instead of doing any decompressing or talking about anything that's happened since Feyre's been gone. I think it's been 2 months at this point that they haven't seen each other, and Feyre is clearly injured, dirty, and starving after her week-long journey through the wilderness, and Rhysand doesn't even seem to notice or care that she's, clearly all fucked up. Despite what Rhysand just said, he and Feyre do actually talk about what happened, so I don't know why that interaction even happened just now. Why would he say that if he didn't mean it? Rhysand tells Feyre that the Spring Court is in total ruins and that Tamlin's sentries have abandoned him, and over half of the Spring Court residents didn't show up for the tithe, and many of them are leaving for other courts. Feyre feels like a girl boss for doing all of that, but really all she did is force Tamlin closer to Hybern because now he has no other choice. His court is gone. All he can really do is stick with Hybern now, which seems like a bad thing to set into motion. And yes, Tamlin is kind of evil and made some mistakes, but his court is innocent. The residents are innocent, and now they've all been fucked over too. And Feyre doesn't even seem to recognize that or care at all. Feyre asks what happened to Ianthe and Jurian, and of course Rhysand knows all of that too, because he knows everything. Rhysand's powerful chest heaved beneath my hand as he blew out a breath. Reports are murky on both. Jurian, it seems, has returned to the hand that feeds him. Ianthe, Rhys lifted his brows. I assume her hand is courtesy of you and not the commander's. She fell, I said sweetly. I don't even know what to say. Feyre really has girl bossed too close to the sun with this one. I'm in no way saying Ianthe is a good person who didn't deserve to get roughed up for what she's done, but Feyre using the language of abusers by saying she fell just really rubs me the wrong way. There's no reason for Feyre to lie to Rhysand, so she should have just told him what happened instead of going, oh, she fell, tee-hee. Why would she say that instead of just saying the truth? I just don't think it's okay for Feyre to sit on her high horse and judge Tamlin for his physical violent rages when she does stuff like this. It's crazy to me how the narrative clearly wants us to see Feyre as a super cool badass for all she did in the Spring Court when she's really just a violent, spiteful, mean girl. I feel like the longer Feyre spends in the Night Court, the more, just bitchy she is. I just don't like her, and I'm increasingly not liking her. Rhysand says that Ianthe is laying low for now, and this is Feyre's response. It was my turn to murmur, good. Perhaps one of those pretty acolytes of hers would get sick of her sanctimonious bullshit and smother Ianthe in her sleep. Good lord. Again, I am not trying to defend Ianthe in any way whatsoever. She has definitely done wrong, but it's disturbing to me that Feyre really only thinks these extremely violent thoughts about another woman, and not about any of the men who have also wronged her. Throughout the book, she has had various thoughts of injuring Ianthe, such as banging her head into a table, slitting her throat, the list goes on. It's just really uncomfortable for me to read a woman wish such violence on another woman in the name of revenge, while not holding that same energy for the men she also wants to get revenge on. That's enough of that ranting because Ianthe really doesn't show up for most of the rest of the novel, so let's move on. They talk a little more, and it looks like they're finally able to get down and dirty when Feyre suddenly remembers she has sisters she's supposed to care about. She's like, oh shit, where are my sisters at? Like, how are those hoes doing? And Rhysand tells her that they are staying at the House of Wind. If you don't remember, that's his second house in the city that's like on top of a big mountain. So I guess Feyre's sisters are essentially trapped there considering they can't fly. There is technically a staircase to like climb up the mountain, but it's so impossibly long that it's basically like not usable, so I guess they're just stuck there. Rhysand offers to take Feyre to see her sisters, even though he doesn't really seem to want to do that. I guess he really wants to bang Feyre, even though she's still all dirty and unwashed and unfed from spending a week out in the woods, but you know, he'll let her see her family if that's what she wants. But he would, I realized. He'd shove down his need for me and take me to them, if that was what I wanted. My choice. It had always been my choice with him. I shook my head. I wouldn't see them. Not yet. Not until I was steady enough to face them. That's it. Roll the credits. We're ending the video here. I've had enough. We're done. Video's over. Bye, guys.
I'm done. No!
Seriously though, the bar is in hell if Feyre is really gonna sit here and praise Rhysand for offering to let her see her family instead of having sex, even though that he really wants to have sex. It is the absolute bare minimum that your partner gives you a choice when it comes to sleeping with them or seeing your family or anything really, but especially sleeping with them. That is not like a good thing to be like, oh, you know, he gives me a choice. Well, yeah, he has to give you a choice or that's illegal. Also, if I've just gone through a bunch of trauma and I haven't seen my sisters in months after they've also just gone through a bunch of trauma, there is not a man on this earth that can lay good enough pipe for me to choose him over seeing them. I'd demand to see my sisters the moment I was in the Night Court, but Feyre kind of just forgot they even existed. I know different families have different dynamics, but I can't relate to this at all. My sisters, I would ride or die. There's not a chance on this earth I would forget about them. Anyway, Rhysand confirms that Feyre's sisters are safe, and that Cassian and Azriel have also healed up nicely, because of course they have. If you don't remember from the last book, like Azriel got poisoned and Cassian's wings got shredded, and they're both fine now. God forbid we nerf any of these overpowered characters to make them more relatable. I think it'd be super cool if Cassian actually had lost his wings, and then he has a character arc of learning to accept his new life without them and how he has to change his fighting style, but we don't get any of that. Feyre asks Rhysand where he's been, and he's immediately back to his vague nonsense and dances around the question because of course he does. No, I said, lifting my head to scan his eyes, the guilt dampening them. I didn't mean it like that, I savored the feel of him beneath my palms. Where were you? Rhys stilled, and I braced myself as he said casually, I couldn't very well let you do all the work to undermine our enemies, could I? I didn't smile. Where were you? With Az only recently back on his feet, I took it upon myself to do some of his work. I clenched my jaw. Such as? He leaned down, nuzzling my throat. Don't you want to comfort your mate who has missed you terribly these weeks? Bro, I can't. I really can't do this. This video is over for real this time. Bye, guys. See you next time.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
Okay, I'll stop doing that gag now, but for real, I'm on my last straw with this book right now. I can't believe Feyre was just praising Rhysand for the whole choice thing, and not 2 pages later, we immediately get Rhysand withholding information, meaning that Feyre can't make informed choices. And I know this is about a different topic, but he's just, I hate Rhysand. I fucking hate Rhysand. This is so stupid, and this couple is so toxic. I hate them together. I hate them both individually. I just hate them all. Feyre thankfully realizes that she's being played and tells Rhysand he can get his comfort after he fesses up. In response, he calls her a cruel, beautiful female, which makes me want to yeet him straight into the sun, because why is she cruel for wanting information? He finally realizes that Feyre means business, so he tells her that he's been in the human realm scoping out the queens, which feels like it should have been Azriel's job, but I guess he was healing, so he couldn't go do that himself. Rhysand says it's been too quiet in the mortal realm, and it doesn't look like they're preparing any troops or anything, which is really weird given that the war is going to be happening soon, so that's why he went and checked it out. That answer is good enough for Feyre, so they start getting spicy again, and it gets real weird real fast. Feyre starts crying, and oh my god, I don't even want to read this. Rhys leaned in to lick them away, one after another, as he'd done under the mountain. You have a choice, he murmured against my cheekbone. Either I lick every inch of you clean, his hand grazed to the tip of my breast, circling lazily, as if we had days and days to do this. Or you can get into that bath that should be ready by now. I pulled away, lifting a brow. Are you suggesting that I smell?
What the fuck is this? I don't know.
Was SJM on crack when she wrote this? Like, no, for real. I genuinely feel like I'm on some kind of bad trip right now. Like, what is happening? It was cringe enough when Rhysand licked Feyre's tears away in the first book, but my flabber is gasted now that it's happening again. Like, why is this happening? Oh, and Feyre definitely stinks. There's no way she doesn't, considering she's been in the woods for a fucking week and hasn't been bathed. She's been sleeping in dirt and she stinks. Feyre considers asking Rhysand to give her that tongue bath, and he seems really into that idea, which is foul. I'm so disgusted, but she ultimately settles on getting a real bath because apparently God truly exists and has spared me from this torture. We then get an absolutely baffling world-building detail when Rhysand snaps his fingers and Feyre is just magically clean, except she doesn't feel clean, she just looks clean, so it doesn't really count because the essence of dirt, is still there. Why are we wasting time on this weird little detail instead of progressing the plot? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. So they have a nice sexy bath together, and then we get a really long spicy scene that makes me want to claw my eyes out. I'm really not anti-erotica like these videos make me seem, but I hate this couple so much that I don't want to read their love scenes. The spice is absolutely not good enough for me to forget how much I hate these characters. And also the spice is kind of cringe, it's very cringe. I'm not going to read any examples, but just take my word for it. Once they're done boning down, they call everyone else back to the house and they go downstairs to meet them. I fought my cringe as I halted in the threshold. Lucian was still in his travel-worn, filthy clothes. His face and hands at least were clean, but I should have gotten him something else. Remembered to offer him... The thought rippled away into nothing as Rhys appeared at my side. Remember earlier when Lucian said that Feyre was a way better friend to him than he was to her? Cap. Full cap. The only reason Feyre didn't freeze to death was because Lucian was there to cuddle her for warmth, and the second she gets back to the Night Court, she could not give less of a fuck about him. She gets a nice bath and clean clothes, and he's just left there in his own filth. All self-awareness of how shitty of a person she is goes straight out the window when Rhysand shows up, because Feyre is definitely the type of girl to abandon all of her friends the second she gets a boyfriend. Tell me I'm wrong. I'm not. Lucian is extremely uncomfortable to see Rhysand and Feyre together because he probably hasn't really come to terms with the fact that Feyre was never mind-controlled and it was all a trick from the beginning. He does know that is what happened, but he hasn't really come to terms with that. Feyre seems irritated that Lucian doesn't just suddenly accept them after all the fuckery that's happened, which most of that has been perpetuated by her and Rhysand, so I'm just kind of at a loss of words here. Feyre gets to deceive Lucian for months, and then all of a sudden is like, okay, here's the truth, just accept it right now, just get over everything that's already happened. How is he supposed to just forget everything? Rhysand threatens Lucian that he better behave or he'll send the Illyrians after him, and Asriel and Cassian are all cocky and smirking as they stand around being vaguely menacing. Lucian hasn't done anything wrong and is currently the only reason Feyre even made it to the Night Court, so meeting him with that energy is so wrong. Feyre really needs to stand up for Lucian and tell the Night Court that he's not a bad person, he's just kind of a pussy who listened to Tamlin when he shouldn't have, but he's not evil. Rhysand kind of backtracks and pretends to be nice. He tries to pretend like he's empathizing with Lucian. He's like, oh, things must have been hard for you these last few months, but don't worry, Elaine is safe, she's well cared for, we kept your mate okay, don't worry about it. He goes on to explain the whole thing with Feyre and him again, and that there wasn't any overlap between her relationship with him and her relationship with Tamlin, so there was never cheating, and there was never any mind control business, and he's only been pretending to be evil this whole time. Don't worry, everybody in the Night Court is totally cool. Lucian doesn't really seem to buy it, because of course he doesn't. He's seen Rhysand act evil for years, and how could you ever really trust someone who can do freaky mind control stuff? How can you ever truly know that you're not being deceived? You can't. Rhysand is furious at not being immediately believed and tells Lucian if he doesn't start acting more respectful, then he will rip out his fucking throat. Verbatim, that's what he says. Personally, I think Lucian is entitled to be a little snarky, considering he's just been through a week of hell, and he's also dirty and stinking, and he hasn't even had the opportunity to get a bath yet. Of course, Lucian's gonna be a little snarky and disrespectful. And I'm sure that all of these repeated threats from Rhysand are definitely helping Lucian see that Rhysand is only pretending to be evil, and that he's not actually some violent sociopath. Yeah, Rhysand, that's definitely working in your favor. He's so stupid.
I hate the shit out of you!
Anyway, Lucian behaves, so they finally decide to go see Feyre's sisters, and Feyre invites Lucian to come up with them. Rhysand grabs Feyre, and Cassian awkwardly carries Lucian as they fly up to the House of Wind. Everyone else gives Feyre and Lucian some space so they can talk yet again, and I could not relate to Feyre any less. Fuck Lucian. Like, he's the only character in this book that I kind of like now, but still, fuck Lucian. I'd be running through the house trying to find my sisters. There is nobody else that I would stand around and talk with if they were there. Like, that's not happening. They have yet another conversation about how Rhysand and the Night Court aren't evil, and Lucian finally seems to believe it. They stand there talking for hours on end, like literally as they're standing there the sun starts to go down, so they've been there for a long time. And I'm just so irritated for Feyre not being more interested in seeing her sisters. I guess it makes sense because they weren't exactly the kindest to her for the last several years, and she feels hesitant to see them because she kind of feels like the whole Cauldron thing was her fault, but I just can't relate to this. I'm running straight for my sisters, there's nothing stopping me. They finally decide to go inside, and we get a very awkward, cold reunion between the sisters. Feyre comes across Nesta first, and she's now like extra super beautiful as a fairy because of course she is. With her hair styled like that, it hid the pointed ears, but there was nothing to hide the ethereal grace as she took one step, as her focus again returned to Cassian and she added, "What do you want?" I felt the blow like a punch to my gut. At least immortality hasn't changed some things about you. Nesta's look was nothing short of icy. Is there a purpose to this visit, or may I return to my book? Okay, scratch everything I just complained about with Feyre not wanting to see her sisters. If this is all my sister has to say to me after everything that happened, I wouldn't want anything to do with her either. I'm still a supreme Nesta hater, and I don't see how anything is going to be able to change that at this point. Like, Nesta is so mean for what? Everyone else seems kind of done with Nesta too, and I can see why. She's always on the attack, which is exhausting to be around, and must be exhausting for Nesta too, to always be in that heightened state. Feyre tries to talk to her, but Nesta has snappy responses to everything, so the conversation doesn't really go anywhere. I understand anger is probably Nesta's trauma response, and she's been through a lot, but so has everyone else, and so her constant bad attitude makes her very unlikable when everybody else is also suffering around her. Nesta is still overly protective of Elaine and doesn't want Lucian to be allowed anywhere near her. Nesta starts to throw out threats, and Cassian is quick to call her out on that. He's like, "Nesta, what exactly do you plan on doing? You haven't been coming to combat training with me, so really how do you plan on fighting anybody? You don't know how to fight. Knock it off." Nesta continues to mouth off, but they tell her she can't keep mates apart, so she needs to back off. This is not her business, even though it's not, well, you know what, it isn't her business, really. It's really only Elaine and Lucian's business, and I think they should just ask Elaine what she wants if she wants to see Lucian, but everybody treats her like a baby, even though she's older than Feyre. Like, Nesta is the oldest, then it's Elaine, and then it's Feyre. Feyre is the youngest. But they treat Elaine like she's a child, and they never let her make any choices for herself. They go see Elaine, and she's basically catatonic from trauma, but I stand by what I just said, because even if she was fully conscious, they still wouldn't have asked her for her opinion. We learn that she's been like that this whole time, and she just keeps talking about wanting to go home and missing her now ex-fiancé. Lucian is clearly devastated by how much Elaine still wants to be with her nameless ex-fiancé, but he doesn't say anything about it or even talk to Elaine, because I think Lucian kind of knows his place and he's not pushing boundaries, which makes him one of my favorite characters because he doesn't act entitled to her, even though people try to act like he does. He really doesn't. The scene abruptly ends, and the next chapter opens with Rhysand giving Lucian a tour of the house. He's told to stay away from Elaine because Feyre has decided to keep them apart, even though Nesta was just ripped to shreds for saying the exact same thing. Like, why does Feyre get to make this choice and not Nesta? Like, they agree, but they vilify Nesta for that, but not Feyre. Lucian isn't exactly a prisoner in the House of Wind, but considering he can't fly and the only way out is through that incredibly long staircase, that he's basically trapped. He's allowed to explore Valaris if he wants, but it's going to be a huge pain in the ass to climb down like 10,000 stairs. I think it's literally 10,000 stairs. Feyre and Rhysand leave them there, and they fly over to Amren's apartment where the rest of the inner circle are already waiting for them. They all agree it was a terrible idea to leave Lucian alone with Feyre's sisters, but of course nobody does anything about it or like goes so they're not alone. They just like, yeah, that was bad, and do nothing about it. They start talking about the upcoming war and how Hybern has a ton of allies in different fairy countries and how that's going to be a huge problem. They tried to contact Miriam and Draken for their assistance because apparently they have a huge army of their own, but the island they were supposed to be on was totally abandoned. This plot point is incredibly stupid, but I'm not going to spoil that now. Rhysand then explains something that confused me in the first book. Miriam is half Fae, but was also described as made with a capital M, like Feyre and Nesta and Elaine, so that's all explained now. Miriam was killed during the final battle of the last war, but Draken brought her to an island where there was some undisclosed item made by the Cauldron that he used to bring her back to life. Okay, so that really didn't actually explain that much, and I don't think they even ever say what the item was that brought Miriam back to life, but that's what we get. She's made with a capital M, and it doesn't matter to the plot at all. The gang thinks that the Cauldron was able to track whatever that item was that brought Miriam back to life, and that Hybern must have been able to, use that to figure out where the island was, and so Miriam and Draken ran away or something. That's not what happened. We'll get to that later. It's so dumb. Rhysand tells Feyre that he took a trip to Hybern to do some recon. He wanted to see if there was some kind of internal conflict he could exploit to make them collapse from within before the war could even happen, which is kind of what Feyre did to the Spring Court, but Rhysand wasn't able to find any leverage that he could use against them. He says that the people of Hybern are desperate for change because they have little trade and opportunities, and that the economy was much better back when they had human slaves. So they want to make Hybern great again by getting their slaves back, even though none of this makes any sense whatsoever to me. How does Hybern have so many allies in different fairy countries if there's little trade between them? Wouldn't allies trade with each other? Why are they not trading if they are allies? I don't understand how the slaves have any effect on trade. Why does Hybern even need slaves in the first place? Prythian seems to be thriving without slaves. They were thriving before the whole Amarantha thing. That kind of put a damper on things, but Prythian seems to be pretty well off without any slaves. Oh, except they do actually kind of have slaves. Remember how they essentially have a servant class of lesser fae, like the people like Alice who are more monster-like? They're not the high fae who look like people. Yeah, all of those lesser fae are essentially slaves, or at least indentured servants, or just servants in general. To me, there's no difference, really. There's definitely a caste system, and the high fae comfortably sit on top. In the last book, the High Lord of the Summer Court, Tarquin, he mentions that he wants to abolish that class divide, and Rhysand claims that he wants to do the same thing, but nobody's really doing anything to work towards that goal. They're all just talking about how they want to end fairy racism without doing anything to, stop fairy racism. Does Hybern just not have lesser fae, or are they considered equal to the high fae and thus can't be slaves? I'm very confused by this. Hybern's motives for the war are so simple and straightforward of we just want slaves, but it just somehow makes everything so confusing because it doesn't make sense that they even need slaves. Through all of this conversation, they kind of imply that the king may have deliberately not developed new trade routes so that his people would suffer and one day support this new war to get their slaves back. And this is so bonkers to me that I don't even know what to say about it. Why would you purposefully sabotage your own country to justify getting slaves? Why this makes no sense. It's straight up cartoonish how evil and stupid Hybern is. This is so dumb. I saw a really great TikTok about this, and I'm not really educated enough to speak on it myself, so I'll just briefly mention this, and please check the screen now for the creator who came up with this TikTok so you can go view it themselves. They are very articulate and knowledgeable about this subject where I am not. But the gist is that if you look at the map of the ACOWAR world, it's basically just a fantasy version of the United Kingdom, and so Hybern would correlate with being Ireland. This isn't ambiguous either because an ancient name for Ireland is Hibernia, so this is a pretty direct parallel. This is not reaching, it's pretty clear to me. And it's really strange how far SJM goes to describe the people of Hybern as evil, lazy, selfish, ignorant, and basically anything else negative. They're the only people who are described as being ugly, even though the Fae are described as being otherworldly beautiful. Of course, Hybern just happens to be the only ugly fairies, which is such a strange little detail. And considering the persecution that the Irish have gone throughout their existence, it just seems really weird that SJM has potential anti-Irish sentiments, and it's just very weird to me, and I can't really articulate it. Again, I'm not really educated enough on the strife of the Irish people, so please look at the screen for this TikTok creator. You can go check out them and get actual real information about this. I just couldn't not bring it up because it's so bizarre. And to be clear, I do think it is okay to take real-world inspiration for your fantasy world, but if you are referencing a group of people who do actually exist, and you are making kind of disparaging remarks against them, you need to be prepared to back up why you're doing that, because it is odd. Anyway, apparently a bunch of other countries want their slaves back too, so that's why Hybern has so many allies. So the Night Court has been trying to spread misinformation through those countries to get them to turn against Hybern, and I'm kind of shook that the Inner Circle is straight up using CIA tactics to turn this war in their own favor. Seriously, look it up. The CIA does wacky shit like this all the time. It is kind of crazy. Don't come for me, CIA. Like, you know what you did. They start talking about the human queens, and we learn that they've pretty much just locked themselves up in a palace and kept to themselves since the end of the last book. They then talk about the wall and how Hybern plans to blast it down with Cauldron somehow through one of the existing holes, and that's why they were going to go look at those holes earlier in the book. Amarantha says she's researching spells to patch up those holes, and they can't just try to nullify the Cauldron again because it'll kill whoever tries, so that's out. Oh, and that's why Feyre failed to nullify the Cauldron in the last book, because it would have killed her if she was successful, and I guess they realized that, so they stopped her. I thought it was weird that she failed and they didn't explain it, but now this is the explanation. Not that it really matters with the whole Cauldron anyway, because now the King of Hybern has it super locked up, so they're not going to be able to get to it anyway to nullify it, so they have to come up with something else. The group figures that Feyre and her sisters are the key to fixing the wall since they've been made with a capital M, and apparently the wall has been made with a capital M, so they're related, or I don't know. That's their rationale. However, Feyre is quick to say that she doesn't want her sisters involved with any of this, and that sounds very Tamlin of you, girl. And even Rhysand, like, he also kind of holds Feyre back a little bit, but not as much as Tamlin. But it's pretty rich coming from Feyre that she does not want her sisters involved at all, and she doesn't even want to give them the choice. I think what she needs to do is sit them down, tell them the full situation, and let them decide for themselves with all of the information, not withholding anything, and let them choose. But no, Feyre is allowed to withhold information for the sake of safety, but when Rhysand does it, he's an asshole. Like, why is Feyre allowed to do things and nobody else is? Amren straight up tells Feyre that she sounds like Tamlin, which has me screaming because that is what I was thinking this whole time. But Moore is like, treats this as a terrible, terrible insult, which it kind of is, even though, like, in this case it is very applicable that she is acting like Tamlin. But Moore, however, is just so offended and just tears into Amren over this, even though Amren is not saying anything wrong. Like, usually Amren is a bitch, but right now she's just telling the truth. Things are really starting to get heated when Feyre speaks up to say, like, no, Amren is right. I should let my sisters make their own decisions. I shouldn't do what Tamlin does. So, like, thankfully Feyre is at least being self-aware in this moment, unlike many others in this book. The chapter ends with Rhysand saying they're going to need more allies if they stand a chance in the war, so he's invited all of the other High Lords of Prythian to a meeting in 2 weeks' time to discuss the whole war situation. It's going to be a while before we get to that meeting in this book, like it's going to be several hundred pages, but it's absolutely some of the most wild stuff I've ever read, so stay tuned for that. The next chapter opens with Cassian bringing Feyre back to the House of Wind. Side note, the narrative says that Cassian is still building up his wing strength after they were shredded in the end of the last book, but I don't think we ever see him struggle to fly in this novel, so that whole detail seems kind of pointless. Like, most of the things in this book are pointless. But why even bring up that he's recovering from that wing injury if we never see him struggle to fly? Anyway, the whole time Feyre is beating herself up in her inner monologue, she feels kind of gross, because apparently sometime during that last conversation I just yada-yada'd through, she questioned Rhysand's authority, and I don't even know what she had said for that. Like, in writing the script, it was so minute I don't even register it. But regardless, she feels like she's stepped out of line a little bit as the High Lady and that she should back up Rhysand no matter what. I'm not even really sure why Feyre is worrying about any of this, because every member of the Inner Circle has directly challenged Rhysand or questioned him or outright said he was wrong many times, so I don't really see why she feels worried to do that. Anyway, we get some stupid little throwaway detail about how Feyre isn't wearing a dress because she's not like the other girls, and instead she's wearing Illyrian leather pants and a shirt. Vaguely just a shirt. Except she's not wearing boots like that would go with this outfit because that would make her dogs hot, so she's got cute little slippers on instead because she's just so quirky in herself. Cassian clearly wants to make fun of the slippers, but he doesn't because, quote, I've been living with Moore for 500 years. I've learned the hard way not to question shoe choices.
What the fuck is going on in here on this day?
What the fuck is happening? Did someone put crack in my Alani new energy drink in the flavor Juicy Peach # non-sponsored? I feel like I'm fully losing my mind with all the random stuff that happens in this book. Like, I can't even believe that in a book about fairies we get the whole, tee-hee, girls are stupid for caring or even thinking about shoes. Like, what are we doing? Why are we talking about shoes right now? Anyway, Cassian and Feyre are still flying up to the House of Wind, so we get another conversation between them. They talk about Nesta, and it's very clear that Cassian has romantic feelings for her, but he seems like he hasn't quite realized that yet himself, even though, like, he's kind of denying it. Feyre asks if he also thinks that there's something different about Nesta, and she's referring to what she said in the last book about Nesta taking more from the Cauldron than it was willing to give, and so clearly Nesta has some special power because everybody has special powers, and so she's like, "Hey Cassian, did you see anything, like, weird about Nesta?" Cassian confirms that there's definitely some secret power lurking in Nesta, but whatever it is hasn't manifested or awoken yet. I've kind of gotten vague spoilers as to what this power is, but I don't think it really fully comes up again in this book, so we'll just have to stick a pin in that, and I don't really know what her powers are, but I don't think they cover it yet. Cassian mopes over how Nesta will never forgive him for what happened in Hybern because he'd previously very cringily declared that he would protect the humans with his lives no matter the cost, but then he couldn't save Nesta and Elaine from being turned into hot fairies, which means that he failed, and oh boy, nothing is hotter than a man who mopes about things that can't be changed and that are not his fault. Oh god, I hate Cassian. Anyway, they finally get to the House of Wind, and we get an awkward dinner scene with everyone except Elaine, who still won't leave her room. Lucian is dressed for a formal dinner while the rest of the gang are all dressed randomly in whatever they choose to wear. The Illyrians are in their sick leather pants, Amarantha is wearing her typical gray night court fashion, and Mor is in her signature red flowy dress that she always wears. Lucian is very confused by the dress code because he's from the stuffy-ass spring court, and just like Feyre in the last novel, he's thrown off with everyone acting so casual with each other, and like they're all actually friends and not just like political allies working together for like running the court. Feyre tries to be polite and asks Lucian what he did all day, and his response is a curt, quote, "Slept, washed, sat on my ass." Honestly, Lucian, what else more could you want? That sounds like a dream day to me. Feyre kind of feels bad for Lucian, so she offers to give him a tour of the city, even though she's very clearly busy with preparing for the war, so this is what Lucian has to say about that. As if sensing my thoughts, Lucian said, "You don't need to waste your time convincing me. I get it. I get that we were not what you wanted, or needed. How small and isolated our home must have been for you, once you saw this." He jerked his chin toward the city, where lights were now sparking into view amid the falling twilight. Who could compare? Lucian, I say this with the utmost kindness, but shut the fuck up. Moping and sulking is just about the most irritating thing someone can do, especially when they are clearly the person who's in the wrong. Doesn't he understand that the whole point Feyre left for the Night Court is because they literally isolated her inside the manor at the Spring Court? Like, that was the whole problem? Feyre openly begged to anyone who would listen to just let her go anywhere at all, and nobody ever listened. Of course she'd choose to come to a cool city where she can go out on her own and do whatever she feels like, and she's not being confined to a manor. Sure, a really fancy manor, but she can't go anywhere, so why would she want to be there? Everybody would choose Valaris. Like, I don't think anybody would choose to stay in the Spring Court, given Valaris as an alternative. Lucian's pity party is interrupted as Nesta makes her grand entrance, and we're reminded yet again how absolutely drop-dead gorgeous she is as a fairy. She's got on a super beautiful blue dress, and Mor runs over to grab the fabric and fawn over it all dramatically. We get a weird throwaway detail that Rhysand is the one who finds and buys all of their clothes for them, so I guess he's got really great tastes in women's dresses. Mor says it's a good thing that she and Nesta aren't the same size or she'd steal the dress from her, and Cassian chimes in. He's like, "Yeah, you'd probably take it right off her body." Which, like, ew, Cassian, shut up. Mor's answering smirk wasn't reassuring, but Nesta's face remained blank, cold. She looked Mor up and down, noting the dress that exposed much of her midriff, back and chest. Then the flowing skirts with sheer panels that revealed glimpses of her legs, scandalous by human fashions. "Fortunately for you," Nesta said flatly, "I don't return the sentiment." I am straight up screaming right now. I've said it 10,000 times already, but I feel like ACOWAR is so much more unhinged from the other two books that came before it. Everyone is acting up, and I can't say that this casual shaming from Nesta is making me hate her any less, but I also feel that Mor is really acting out of line here. Comparatively speaking, I don't really know how Nesta and Mor's bodies stack up. Like, I don't know who is meant to be skinnier or whatever, but the whole "you're lucky we're not the same size" thing, it kind of comes off as negging, and I don't know if that's me being sensitive. But it kind of seems like Nesta also took it as negging with her snappy comeback. Then again, she views everything as a personal attack, so maybe Mor didn't actually mean this in any way that's insulting, but like, what are we doing here right now? Everybody's flabbers are gasted by that statement, so someone quickly runs off to get a bunch more wine to get them all through the dinner. I really wish I had some wine right about now, but I don't, so we must carry forward. Running off to get the wine was kind of a dig at Nesta, and she feels kind of uncomfortable for being teased, and Feyre's like, "No, don't worry, like, they mean well." But then Amarantha comes out like a wrecking ball and shows that no, they don't all mean well. She looks Nesta dead in the eyes and just straight up calls her a piece of work. Weirdly enough, Nesta's only response is to ask Amarantha why her eyes glow, which Amarantha thinks is amusing. So now these two are friends, I guess, on account of their mutual random bitchiness. They're a pair made in heaven. Amren reminds us all that she's also made capital M, because remember, she's actually some ancient interdimensional being trapped in her ooh-woo little tiny fairy body. She says a bunch of random creepy nonsense before dinner is finally served, and Lucian is very confused that Rhysand isn't sitting at the head of the table. The whole Rhysand treats people like equals thing is really laid on thick in this scene, and it is incredibly annoying because when it really comes down to it, Rhysand does expect everybody to respect his authority and listen to his commands, but nobody ever really does because they're so used to doing whatever they want. And so really they just walk all over Rhysand and they're not equals, and it's just so annoying, but we'll get into all of that later. They all banter as they eat their super yummy fairy food, and Nesta does admit that fairy food is way better than human food. That's a reference to the last book if you don't remember. It's supposed to show some kind of character growth for Nesta because she was like, I'll never try fairy food, and now she's like, oh, you know what, fairy food's actually kind of good. Like, it's whatever. Feyre and Cassian work out their training schedule, and Feyre wants to sleep in while Cassian wants to start early, and we get this absolutely baffling exchange. Cassian's wings rustled. Daylight is a precious resource. We live in the Night Court? Moore countered. Cassian only grimaced at Rhys and Asriel. I told you that the moment we started letting females into our group, they'd be nothing but trouble.
Excuse me, bitch?
Oh my god, if this video was 10 hours long, then I hope you see why. I can't just read something like this and not comment on it. Why is Cassian suddenly so red-pilled? Isn't the Night Court supposed to respect women? Like, isn't that their whole deal? Isn't that their whole thing? I mean, Rhysand sure pretends to respect women, but the fact that Cassian feels comfortable enough to say this out loud in front of him tells me all I need to know about how Rhysand actually cares about women. And don't go commenting, oh my god, Senti, it's just a joke, because jokes are supposed to be funny, and Cassian's comment did not make me laugh. It only gets worse when Rhysand reminds Cassian that he, as in Cassian, was in fact the one who wanted women in the group in the first place because he wanted some eye candy to stare at. Deadass, that is seriously what he says. I officially hate Cassian more than Rhysand. He has jumped many levels on my shit list. At least Rhysand has the sense to at least pretend that he respects women, but Cassian's like, nope, women, right? Like, fuck you, Cassian. They all then literally stick their tongues out at each other because they are actual children and not 500-plus-year-old fairies that should all know and act better and act like adults. What are we doing? There is then a really awkward tone shift as they talk about the war and the upcoming meeting with all the High Lords. Lucian finally speaks up to offer a suggestion and says that Feyre should hide her powers at the meeting, because his father, who is the High Lord of the Autumn Court and is very super evil, will definitely ally with Hybern in order to kill Feyre to get his power back, so it's better if she just keeps that to herself. Except the Autumn Court should already know about Feyre and her powers because she shot a wall of fire at Lucian's brothers, but I guess they're all just blind or assume that Lucian was the one who shot the fire. Except that would be a complete plot hole because Lucian can't shoot fire. He does not have fire powers. They established that in the first book. Feyre kind of points that all out, and Lucian says that they need Asriel to go do his spy thing and figure out if the Autumn Court really does know about Feyre's powers or not, which seems weird that they're waiting for confirmation. I feel like they should just assume they already know. Moore jumps in to say that there's no point in having Asriel go do any spy things because if Eris knows about it, he's going to lie about it. Like, does Moore think that Asriel is just going to march up to the Autumn Court and directly ask questions to them about what they know, like giving Eris a chance to lie? Does she know what spying is? Anyway, the narrative randomly reminds us that Lucian's skin tone is several shades darker than his brother's, and it does this very pointedly and very randomly throughout the book, and you'll see why later on. But it's real weird. I wonder if Lucian's dad isn't actually his dad, and that's why Lucian isn't genetically evil like his horrible brothers. Guess you'll just have to keep watching to find out. Anyway, Rhys is like, yeah, that's a good idea. You and Asriel should meet up and figure out how to do that whole spying thing. It's supposed to be a nice moment because it's showing that Lucian is starting to find his place in the Night Court, but then Rhysand immediately ruins it by vaguely saying that they need to have another meeting soon, and then the chapter abruptly and ominously just ends right there. The next chapter opens up with Rhysand saying that they need to meet with the Court of Nightmares because they need Moore's father's army. His name is Kier, by the way, so that I don't have to keep referring to him as Moore's father. He's the guy in the last book who insulted Feyre, so Rhysand broke his arm in that really weird scene. Nesta is as confused as I am about all of this, and asks why they even have to ask Kier for his help. Nesta's brows narrowed. Why not just order them? Don't they answer to you? Cassian set down his fork, food forgotten. Unfortunately, there are protocols in place between our two subcourts regarding this sort of thing. They mostly govern themselves, with Moore's father their steward. This whole divide in the court has always confused me. What's the point of Rhysand being the High Lord if a seemingly substantial portion of his court doesn't answer to him? The Illyrians don't really listen to him, and the Court of Nightmares don't really listen to him, so where does he roll? Like, it seems like he's just the High Lord of Valaris, not of the Night Court in general. Rhysand explains this, but it doesn't really make me any less confused. The steward of the hewn city is legally entitled to refuse to aid my armies, Rhys explained to Nesta, to me. It was part of the agreement my ancestor made with the Court of Nightmares all those thousands of years ago. They would remain within that mountain, would not challenge or disturb us beyond its borders, and would retain the right to decide not to assist in war. Huh? Why is this all so complicated? Also, side note, the Hewn City and the Court of Nightmares is like the same thing. I mostly just say Court of Nightmares, but they use both of them interchangeably. I still think Rhysand should just mist the entire Court of Nightmares and be done with it, and just not tell any of the other courts that he killed the Court of Nightmares because nobody goes there anyway. And then he can just keep on pretending to be evil, and nobody comes to his court anyway, so how would they know any different? We get some throwaway line that the Court of Nightmares has refused to give aid in 2 other wars, and this is the first time I'm hearing that there's been more than one war. Like the war 500 years ago? What were the other wars about? How do they differentiate them if they don't have names? Like, how do they know which war is what? I thought there was only one war, so it didn't matter, but no, there's other wars, I guess. Rhysand says that they definitely need Kier's army, but Mor is like, no, don't even bother, he's definitely gonna say no, like, you might as well not even ask, which is just so defeatist. Like, homegirl, there's a war coming up, you need all the help you can get. And Rhysand says as much, and he's like, well, we're just gonna have to find some way to convince them then, because we need them. Mor is clearly uncomfortable with all of this, given her traumatic past with the Court of Nightmares, but nobody else will really stand up to her because Rhysand has a point, and so they just move on. Feyre randomly changes the subject and says that she wants to learn how to fly because remember she can summon wings with her shape-shifting powers. Everyone acts like this is a totally ridiculous idea and that it'll be way too hard for her to learn how to fly, but Rhysand's like, no, you know what, we should at least try. This is clearly a parallel to the last book where Tamlin refused to let Feyre train with her powers in general, and yet again we are hit over the head by how much better Rhysand supposedly is. Supposedly, because I don't think he's any better, but whatever. Asriel agrees to train Feyre because he didn't learn how to fly until much later in life than Cassian and Rhysand due to his traumatic past that I don't really care to explain, but he's the one who's going to teach Feyre how to fly. We then abruptly shift topics yet again as Feyre explains the whole cauldron and wall thing to Nesta. Nesta simply asks why they can't just roll up to Hybern and kill the king before the war can even start, which is pretty naive considering how poorly everything went the last time they confronted the king in Hybern. Nobody really answers that question, so Nesta asks what's up with the queens, and they tell her they don't really know what's going on with them at all. Even though Nesta has been given basically zero information, she agrees to help with the war as long as they can promise that the king of Hybern and the mortal queens will all be dead by the end of it. I'd say that's kind of the point of the war, so that's a pretty easy promise for them to make. Feyre asks Nesta to come to the meeting with the High Lords to tell them everything about what happened in Hybern and how she was dipped in the cauldron, but Nesta refuses. Feyre acts like Nesta is being ridiculous for not wanting to relive the most traumatic moment of her life in front of a group of strangers, and then the scene abruptly ends as Nesta storms off. I don't really see why it's important for Nesta to tell her story because that's not really relevant as the war is going to happen regardless, so I think Feyre really needs to lay off. And this really was a very traumatic moment for Nesta because being put in the cauldron was like extremely painful, so forcing her to retell that story for really no reason is kind of cruel coming from Feyre. The next scene is of Feyre and Rhysand taking a stroll through Valaris. The city is still rebuilding after the attack in the last book, but it doesn't really seem any different to me. Like, it doesn't really seem like any different from the intact city. They talk about Nesta, and it's pretty clear that Rhysand doesn't like her, and I've heard enough spoilers to know that this only gets worse in later books, and despite hating Nesta, I still hate Rhysand more, so he needs to lay off. They have a conversation about how Feyre feels uneasy for undermining Rhysand's authority that one time, and he tells her not to worry about it and that she should always question him if she doesn't agree with what he's saying. Again, this is another obvious parallel to how Tamlin would get violent when criticized, but this feels very performative of Rhysand to me because he just expressed how much he dislikes Nesta and she's the most critical person of all of them, so I really think he doesn't like being criticized and he's just trying to pretend he's cool with it. They then talk about the upcoming meeting with the High Lords. Apparently there's some kind of spell set up around the meeting to keep them from attacking each other while they're all together, so they don't have to worry about Tamlin using that as his opportunity for revenge. They couldn't just not invite him to the meeting because it would look weird and like they were trying to hide things, and they really don't think he's going to show up anyway. They then talk about Lucian and how Rhysand mostly trusts him but not fully, which I guess is kind of fair considering how much Lucian went along with the Hybern stuff. Rhysand admits that he knows Lucian will stay loyal as long as they have Elaine as a bargaining chip, which is a pretty messed up thing for him to say. I'm sure Rhysand wouldn't like people using his bond with Feyre to manipulate him, but he's totally fine doing that to Lucian. They change the subject yet again and get all sappy about how much they love each other and how hard they're going to fight in the war to ensure they have a bright future together. If that's not a big red flag that something is going to go horribly wrong, then I don't know what is, but I'm getting ahead of myself and we'll get to the war when it happens eventually. The next chapter is Feyre training with Cassian, but Feyre is distracted as she thinks about the morning delight she had with Rhysand. Of course, Feyre doesn't care about the war as much as she cares about boning Rhysand. It's clear Cassian is angry about something, and he finally says that he's angry that Rhysand didn't tell them right away that he made Feyre his High Lady. She was already sworn in as High Lady when they went to Hybern, and as you'll recall from the last video, the whole Hybern visit was a big shit show. Cassian weirdly says that they all would have fought harder to protect Feyre if they knew she was High Lady, and I don't care to unpack all that nonsense, because what the fuck is he even going on about right now? That is such old news. Nesta shows up, but she doesn't really seem interested in training. Cassian extended a wrapped hand, his fingers curling in a come-hither motion. Scared? I wisely kept my mouth shut as Nesta stepped from the open doorway into the blinding light of the courtyard. Why should I be scared of an oversized bat who likes to throw temper tantrums?
Damn!
Wait a minute, do I like Nesta? Oh my god, is this how my road to being a Nesta stan starts? Is it just because I hate Cassian so much more? Oh, please send help. Anyway, Azriel shows up and whisks Feyre off so they can practice flying. This is a long scene, so I'll mostly breeze through it. Apparently it takes a lot more muscle control than Feyre currently has in order to even keep her wings from dragging on the ground, let alone flying, so they don't make very much progress. The next chapter randomly opens up with Feyre and Rhysand visiting a library that's under the ground beneath the House of Wind. Feyre has never been to a library before, and we get a weird detail that humans aren't allowed in fairy libraries. He nodded, the dim light gilding his blue-black hair. Prejudices aside, the fear was that the humans would find dangerous spells and use them on us. But they don't have magic. Humans don't have magic. Some do. Usually the ones who can claim distant Fey ancestry. But some of those spells don't require magic from the wielder. Only the right words or use of ingredients. Wait, what? So humans can randomly do magic? I don't think this goes anywhere, so I won't harp on this too much, but it feels like a really stupid thing to set up and then never use. We then randomly learn more about the half-breed fairies, because apparently humans and fairies can reproduce, which is something I was confused about in the last book. Apparently after the war was over, the half-fae didn't really fit anywhere between the fairy world and the human world, and were randomly told that many had to, quote, resort to selling themselves. Which, yikes, but oh, don't worry, because Rhysand's father was still High Lord back then, and Rhysand definitely would have helped them if he was the High Lord at that time, just like he's helped the Illyrian women and the women in the Court of Nightmares since he's gained power. Oh, wait. It's all just more performative bullshit. We're supposed to give Rhysand ass pats for simply thinking that people deserve to be helped, even though he never follows through on actually helping them. It's performative activism at its finest, and things are gonna get a whole lot weirder with the library. We're introduced to Clotho, and Rhysand calls her a priestess, but she's basically a librarian. I don't know why she's also a priestess, but she's a librarian at the library. Feyre notices a random big-ass pit in the middle of the floor and asks what's down there. Rhysand vaguely says that Cassian flew down there once to check and came back up absolutely terrified and refused to tell anybody what he saw. Rhysand doesn't seem to care about that and admits he has no idea what's in the pit and that the priestesses won't tell him either what's down there, so as long as whatever is down there stays down there and doesn't bother anybody, then he's cool with it, I guess. What the hell is happening? Seriously? I won't complain about the pit too much now because we do end up learning what's down there later in the book, but the whole plot point with it is so stupid, but we'll get to the pit later. Rhysand and Feyre talk telepathically as Clotho leads them around the library, and it seems kind of rude to have a whole conversation behind her back. But we're told she's mute, so I guess it's okay because she wouldn't be talking to them anyway. It still feels very rude. We learn that Rhysand comes to the library to relax and it's a safe place for him. Clotho hands them a book or something, and we're told that her hands are all mangled and her fingers are pointing the wrong direction, and it's clear she wasn't just born that way because she's covered in scars. This reminds Feyre of what she did to Ianthe, and she actually seems a little disturbed by that, which is progress, I guess, because she doesn't really seem to care that she had mutilated Ianthe before. Regardless of whether or not Ianthe deserved it, that's still kind of a horrifying thing to do. Clotho walks off and Rhysand immediately launches into her story before she's barely out of earshot. And I think he's actually talking out loud this time instead of telepathically, which is also weird. Because every character in this book has a horrifying backstory, we're told that Clotho was attacked by a group of men who cut out her tongue and broke her hands, so she couldn't speak or write about whatever they did to her. They didn't kill her because it was, quote, more entertaining, and eventually Morrigan found her and brought her to the library. Moore then hunted those guys and killed them, even though the Court of Nightmares is just as evil as these, like, random rapist men, and all of them are allowed to live. Like, I don't understand who gets justice and who doesn't. We're told that they can't fix Clotho's hands because the injuries are permanent, because the men healed her hands as they broke them. They could have just re-broken her hands and fixed them, but Rhysand said that'd be too traumatic, even though they could block all of the pain and all of the memories and stuff out with his mind control powers, so they just left Clotho that way. What is even happening? How does any of that even make any sense? Like, good lord. I complained about this in the last video, but all of this violence is so unnecessary to me. This is a random side character that really isn't plot important, so why are we spending all this time going into such extreme detail about the horrific things she endured? There was no reason for her to endure any of them. She's hardly a character in this book. Why would you create a character just to do this kind of thing to them? It seems very, like, weird. It comes off like SJM likes to torture her characters, even side characters that are totally inconsequential, for no reason other than to just give them tragic stories that never pay off or go anywhere, so it just seems very gross and unnecessary. Also, I don't really know how to bring this up, but are we just going to ignore the obvious parallel here with Feyre making Ianthe smash her own hand because she touched people without their consent, and now this person was touched without their consent and her hands were broken? Is this supposed to be related in some really weird way, or does SJM only know how to write torture if it involves somebody smashing their hand? Or their bones in general, given that Rhysand broke that guy's arm in the last book. This feels too specific with the hand crushing to not be related, but I don't know what the message is. If it is related, it's just very weird, and this whole thing is very weird. We learned that the entire library is ran by survivors like Clotho and that it's a safe haven for them. That's also why Rhysand likes to relax in the library, because he himself is a survivor of all that Amarantha forced him to do. It's kind of unclear when Rhysand established this library and how long it's been around, but we're supposed to give him lots of credit for setting it up. Not to minimize Rhysand's good deed, but of course it's easy for him to slap a library under the house he owns and let survivors run it. Anything that takes effort, like changing things for the women in Illyria and the Court of Nightmares, doesn't get followed up on. I need to see him make more progress on that stuff before I give him any ass pats for being such a good ally to women. He's only an ally when it's convenient. And especially because of all this nonsense that happens next. I'm not being dramatic when I say that I personally find this one of the most egregious things to happen in this series, and it fills me with actual rage. Like, truly a lot of these videos are me being fake outraged because who actually cares about this book about fairies this much? But like, genuinely, this part truly makes me angry. Feyre and Rhysand don't actually get down and dirty in the library, but they get too touchy-feely for my liking as they graphically fantasize about how they could get all spicy, and how Feyre would have to stay quiet because it's a library and somebody might catch them. I'm actually so mad that I don't even really know what to say. We were just told a horrible story about what happened to Clotho, and then we get a spicy scene immediately after? In a library for assault survivors? Seriously? What if Clotho or another priestess or librarian or whatever stumbled across them during the act? Wouldn't that re-traumatize them? As a survivor himself, shouldn't Rhysand know better than to sully the sanctity of the library? Imagine walking through a women's shelter, hearing one of their horrific stories, and then not 5 minutes later getting horny and fantasizing about boning down in the shelter bathroom and how you might get caught by the very person you've just learned has been through absolute hell. It's so disgusting and inappropriate that I'm genuinely upset at SJM for writing this. I really don't understand how she didn't see the negative implications of writing this kind of spicy interaction of voyeurism in a sanctuary for assault victims. Like, that is so weird. Oh god, where do we even go from here? Now the vibes are all weird. I might edit in a cute puppy or something as a palate cleanser so we can forget this and move on, because oh my god, we have so much more to talk about. Anyway, they don't end up boning and actually do the research they went there to do, but don't learn anything helpful about the wall, so this whole library thing was pointless, just like most of the other nonsense in this book. Feyre and Rhysand talk about the war, and Rhysand says that even if they can find more allies, their chance of winning is slim. This makes literally no sense to me because we're told the whole reason Hybern is starting the war is because they're struggling without slaves. Sure, they have other countries allied with them, but they must also be struggling without slaves to have agreed to help them with the war. How is it that these struggling nations are so powerful? I understand that Prythian is still kind of rebuilding after the mess with Amarantha, but they don't seem so weakened that they'd easily fall to Hybern, who's been struggling for the last 500 years rather than the last 50. This is also stupid and confusing. How do they have the resources to wage this large-scale war, but they're struggling as a nation? That makes no sense! Rhysand basically straight up says he'll sacrifice himself in the war if that's what he has to do to ensure victory, and he's waving his death flag so hard his arms are about to fall off. The narrative really couldn't be more obvious about what's going to happen in the war, but clearly we know Rhysand can't actually die because then ACOWAR the series will be over and there's like 2 or 3 more books. So there's definitely some fuckery that's going to happen around that, but you'll see that when we get there. Feyre begs Rhysand not to just sacrifice himself and to let everyone else help him. He kind of sarcastically asks if she has a plan, and surprisingly she does. Feyre suggests that they should befriend some monsters to help them, starting with the Bone Carver. That's actually not a bad idea, considering Feyre clearly has an affinity for monsters.
You're gonna live with me now. Huh? I'm gonna take care of you.
The Suriel obviously likes her, and she was able to wrangle the Boggy Bogey whatever to terrorize the creepy Hybern twins, so it's worth a try to get some monsters on their side. The next chapter opens with Feyre checking in on Amren and Nesta. Amren is training Nesta to shield herself and how to generally use magic and all that jazz so Nesta can patch up the wall if they can ever figure out how to do it. Feyre indirectly asks Amren about the prison because she was once imprisoned there. Feyre doesn't directly state she's thinking about allying with the Bone Carver because she's just as bad at selectively withholding information as Rhysand is, and she thinks that Amren won't want to work with her if she thinks that the Bone Carver is going to get out of prison or whatever. But it doesn't really matter because Amren doesn't really tell her anything helpful, so Feyre just leaves Amren and Nesta to their training. We then get a random scene of Feyre having a nightmare where Amarantha tortures her sisters before leading Rhysand into the bedroom and good lord, I thought I had bad nightmares. Feyre wakes up and Rhysand comforts her because we need yet another reminder of how much better he is than Tamlin. I've said it before, but I'm sure the Tamlin fans are pissed about his total character assassination. I really don't think it was necessary to nuke Tamlin's character to justify Feyre leaving him for Rhysand, but whatever, what's done has been done. The next chapter opens with them getting ready to go to the prison to try to talk to the Bone Carver. Rhysand is going to teleport Feyre and Cassian there because apparently the Illyrians can't teleport even though I swear they have before. Rhysand drops them off at the prison and we get a long scene that I'm mostly going to breeze through. It's clear that Cassian doesn't really think trying to work with the Bone Carver is a good idea, but he escorts Feyre anyway because he's a good loyal dog to Rhysand. I guess we're supposed to look down on Lucian for following orders from Tamlin that he doesn't agree with, but we're supposed to praise the inner circle for being so loyal. The hypocrisy littered throughout this book is staggering. Cassian goes on to say that the Bone Carver is some kind of ancient god that may even predate the Cauldron somehow, and nobody even knows why he's in the prison. They don't really know how to get him out of the prison, and even though Amren managed to escape the prison herself, she won't tell them how for whatever reason, so I guess Feyre has some work to do. Feyre realizes this actually might be a bad idea, and then they meet the Bone Carver. Remember that he, or it rather, since it's not really like a person, I'm going to call him he for the sake of simplicity, but he looks different to everybody who sees him. Feyre doesn't know what Cassian sees, but here's what she sees. It was Rhysand's face, the coloring, the eyes, it was my mate's face, but the Carver's full wide mouth curled into that hideous smile. That was my mouth, my father's mouth. The hair on my arms rose. The Carver inclined his head in greeting and in confirmation, as if he knew precisely what I realized, who I had seen and was still seeing. The High Lord's son, my son, our son. Should we survive long enough to bear him? Oh great, there's the confirmation I was dreading that we are eventually going to have to deal with the whole pregnancy trope nonsense. I knew it was coming due to some spoilers I'd already received, but we're not going to get to any of that in this video, thank God. Feyre gives the Bone Carver a piece of bone from the adder that she killed in the last book in the battle in Valaris. I don't know why her creepy ass kept some of his bones as a trophy, but here we are. The Bone Carver randomly reveals that the Weaver is his sister and then says randomly weird vague things about Nesta and her mysterious power that hasn't awakened yet. If you don't remember who the Weaver is, that's the random side quest Feyre had to go on in the last book to go get a ring from her to prove she could track magic items. So apparently the Weaver and the Bone Carver are related somehow. Feyre tells the Bone Carver that they have the Book of Breathings and that they probably have a spell to send him back to wherever his home is as long as he agrees to help them in the war. He turns her down and says his original world is long gone and that he'd prefer to stay in the prison. The Bone Carver says that the Weaver isn't just his sister but his twin and calls her Striga, but for clarity's sake I'm just going to keep calling her the Weaver. They also have an older brother who's, quote, on a little lake by the continent, whatever that means, and I don't remember if they ever clarify who this third person is. The Fae who established Prythian couldn't control these old gods and so they sealed them away, and the Bone Carver willingly went to the prison to hide from his siblings. I don't know why he had to hide if they were sealed away as well in different locations, but whatever, here's what he has to say. They are death gods, girl, the Carver hissed. You are immortal, or long-lived enough to seem that way, but my siblings and I, we are different, and the two of them, stronger. So much stronger than I ever was. My sister, she found a way to eat life itself, to stay young and beautiful forever thanks to the lives she steals. Cool, 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 except they can't really be that strong if Feyre was so easily able to escape the Weaver in the last book, so whatever, sounds just like yapping and excuses to me. Anyway, the Bone Carver refuses to help them, and Cassian's like, fine, Feyre, let's go, we have business in the Court of Nightmares. And then the Bone Carver is suddenly interested in negotiating, which is weird. He says that his sister once owned a mirror called the Ouroboros, and that now the Court of Nightmares has it for some reason. If they can bring him the mirror, then he'll help them in the war. I guess the Court of Nightmares has a MacGuffin collection, because in the last book they had the Truth Orb, and now they have this magic mirror. This plot point with the Bone Carver and the magic mirror takes so long to play out though, that for a while I thought SJM straight up forgot about it, but it does eventually come up again and play out. Just stick a pin in this one for now. We then cut to a scene of Feyre and Cassian waiting at the prison for Rhysand to teleport to them and pick them up again. They start talking about Nesta, and it's pretty clear that Nesta's powers are related to death in some way, and Cassian says that as a warrior he's used to dealing with death, so that doesn't really scare him and he'll stand by Nesta regardless. This is supposed to be sweet, I guess, but I hate Cassian so much that I don't care, and yes, I am being petty over that one comment, but honestly, fuck Cassian.
I said what I said, and
always.
I'm not changing on it, okay?
The chapter ends with Rhysand coming and picking them up and then taking them back home, just like a mom coming to pick up his kids at the school drop-off. The next chapter opens with everyone at the House of Wind getting ready to go to the Court of Nightmares. It's been decided that Azriel will stay behind to babysit Elaine because they can't leave her on her own because she's just a little baby. Feyre goes to talk to her sisters, and Nesta is as cold as usual, and Elaine is still basically catatonic, except now she keeps saying weird, vague stuff that doesn't make any sense and is kind of creepy. She says something about a firebird, but everyone just kind of writes her off as being crazy, because God forbid anybody ever take Elaine seriously. Feyre's like, hey, Nesta, we gotta go look for a book or something. And they walk a short distance away before Feyre put up a windshield so they can openly talk about Elaine without her overhearing. Oh yeah, and that's how they get away with a lot of the conversations they have in private because of the super Fey hearing. They put up like windshields so that nobody can hear them talk. So they start talking about Elaine, and they don't know why she's suddenly out of bed and talking in weird riddles. It's like something has happened and they can't figure out what. Nesta suggests that Elaine probably has some special power because of course she does, but Feyre is like, you know what? I don't think that's the case, even though it clearly is. Again, nobody really takes Elaine seriously, and it's so frustrating to see how much they all baby her when she's not even the youngest sister, Feyre is. And I won't get into what Elaine's powers are, but it's pretty obvious in hindsight, so you'll see later. Feyre changes the subject to ask why Nesta won't train with Cassian, and Nesta is immediately defensive because of course she is. She asks why she's expected to train because she's not a warrior and doesn't want to be, which is valid, but Nesta did say some bold stuff about wanting a bunch of people dead, so I think she should kind of take some responsibility and maybe kill the king of Hybern herself. And Feyre even kind of says this, but Nesta counters by saying, why bother when somebody else will do it for me? Which shouldn't surprise Feyre given the fact that Nesta sat on her ass and did nothing while they were all starving back in the human realm. Like, Nesta is not known to stand up and take action. Their conversation is cut short when Lucian shows up and sees that Elaine is more conscious than usual. Feyre accidentally slips into his mind because sometimes she's really good at her mind control powers and sometimes she isn't and she can't control them. She slipped into somebody's mind in another book in the past, and I think it actually might have been Lucian, but I don't really remember. This section is weirdly long and mostly pointless, so I'm not going to really cover it. It's mostly a bunch of Lucian feeling guilty and upset about his dead girlfriend and the prospect of being in love again even though Elaine doesn't want anything to do with him. Elaine straight up calls Lucian out for betraying them in Hybern and says she was supposed to be getting married in a few days, which maybe is why she's lucid all of a sudden, I don't really know. Except when Elaine says all of this, it's very matter of fact instead of angry or defensive, which only makes Elaine kind of come off as even creepier than she already is with all the weird stuff she's saying.
Just want you to stop saying odd shit.
Nesta demands that Lucian leave them alone, but he stands his ground and says that Elaine needs fresh air because he's now joined the list of people who think they know what's best for her without asking her what she needs. I do think this is pretty reasonable. Fresh air tends to make people feel better, but like, just ask Elaine what would make her feel better instead of deciding for her. Feyre isn't done making decisions for everyone else though, and she decides that they should move her sisters out of the House of Wind and into the Townhouse where they'll have more freedom to come and go. Because remember the House of Wind, the only way to get down if you can't fly is like 10,000 stairs, so the Townhouse they would be able to freely access the city, which would give them a lot more freedom and shows more goodwill that they're not like prisoners. So they start the move right away, even though they're supposed to be busy getting ready to go to the Court of Nightmares. No, they have time to pack up and move their sisters over to the townhouse right now. So they're at the townhouse now, and Azriel takes Elaine out to see the garden. There's surprisingly a little chemistry between them, so Lucian better watch out. Like, Elaine actually seems to kind of like Azriel and want to spend time with him, and there is genuine chemistry there, which is not there with Lucian at all. Like, poor guy. There's apparently a new ACOWAR book coming out next year sometime, and people speculate it'll be about Elaine choosing between Azriel and Lucian, but I don't really like her with either of them in ways that we'll see later on throughout this book. Like, she just has no chemistry with Lucian, and there are reasons I don't like Azriel we'll get into later. But if that is the next ACOWAR book, I guess we'll just have to see how it all plays out. I skipped over it before, but Feyre tried to fly herself down to the townhouse to practice flying, and mostly she just fell, so she teleported herself down, because sometimes she's good at teleporting and control it really well, and sometimes she can't do it. So we get this weird line about how Rhysand carried Nesta to fly down to the townhouse, even though he also probably could have just teleported, and is powerful enough to have teleported everybody to the townhouse at once, so I don't know why anybody is flying. So Feyre gets to the townhouse first and is waiting for everybody, and Nesta stumbles into the house ready to throw up, and she looks really sick. And Rhysand kind of slyly says, he's like, oh, she said I was flying too slow, so I flew a little faster for her. As Nesta, runs to the bathroom and starts throwing her guts up. I think this is supposed to be funny, but I think it's a little disturbing how Rhysand has no problem physically punishing people who annoy him. Did Nesta deserve this? Yeah, probably, but it's also kind of weird to physically punish people that just because you're annoyed at them. I just don't like this behavior. Nesta finishes throwing up, and she looks extra terrifying, and her eyes are glowing a little bit, maybe her weird powers might be manifesting. She's about to charge at Rhysand when Cassian steps in to defuse the situation. Lucian ruins everything by being visibly confused and perhaps scared, which embarrasses Nesta, so she rushes off to her room for privacy. Now that Nesta is gone, they all speculate about her powers, which seems like something they should talk to her about, but whatever, they're just gonna all talk behind her back. The scene ends, and the next scene is more of them preparing for the Court of Nightmares. Good lord, can they just go already? They've been talking about going forever, and they just need to go. Realistically, how much do they even need to prepare? They can just, show up. What are they even doing? Rhysand and Feyre look out the window to spy on Azriel and Elaine out in the garden, and Feyre then asks what we were all thinking this whole time. Why not make them mates? I mused. Why Lucian? I'd keep that question from Lucian. I'm serious. I turned toward him and crossed my arms. What decides it? Who decides it? Rhys straightened his lapels before plucking an invisible piece of lint from them. Fate, the mother, the cauldron's swirling eddies. I'm glad to see that Rhysand still picks invisible dust off himself whenever he wants to avoid talking about something. Good lord, can someone get this man a lint roller? Anyway, I think it makes sense for the Archeron sisters to all have their own Batboy because they all call themselves brothers. They're not literally brothers, but they call themselves brothers, so it makes sense to have 3 sisters, 3 brothers. And throwing Lucian into that mix feels kind of random, but whatever. I guess we might see how that plays out in the next ACOWAR book if speculations are correct. Feyre goes on to say that mates aren't always well matched because we've heard stories of Tamlin's parents I don't think got along very well, and Rhysand's parents didn't get along very well. So maybe the Cauldron made a mistake and Elaine should be with Azriel and not Lucian. Rhysand says that Elaine can reject the mating bond and vaguely says that sometimes the bonds don't make sense, and that it seems more like the bond is set up to pair 2 people together who will bear strong offspring rather than making an actual soul love connection. I don't know how Rhysand knows any of this, but it furthers my theory that there aren't gay mates because a homosexual couple can't naturally have children, so if they're being paired to have offspring, that doesn't make sense. Except later in this book, we do actually see a couple that is gay, and I don't think they are officially mated, but they imply that they could have a mating bond soon. So I'm very confused by how all of this works. It's like SJM wanted to be inclusive, so she threw a gay couple in, even though it directly contradicts how the mating bond is supposed to work, and it's just don't set up world buildings to be non-inclusive, and then try to force inclusivity in there. It just comes off as weird. Anyway, we get even more exposition from Rhysand about the mating bond. Even so, Rhys went on, there will always be a tug. For the females, it is usually easier to ignore, but the males, it can drive them mad. It is their burden to fight through, but some believe they are entitled to the female. Even after the bond is rejected, they see her as belonging to them. Sometimes they return to challenge the male she chooses for herself. Sometimes it ends in death. It is savage and it is ugly, and it mercifully does not happen often, but many mated pairs will try to make it work, believing the Cauldron selected them for a reason. Only years later will they realize that perhaps the pairing was not ideal in spirit. Oh boy, I'm so glad that even the fairy world suffers from the violence of the patriarchy. This is all so tiring. I wish SJM hadn't tried to switch things up and just made the mates unambiguously perfectly matched soulmates instead of doing like this weird, like, oh, you might be mated with somebody that you don't even like. Like, what the fuck? That's really not appealing at all, but I think a more skilled writer could have made this imperfect match thing kind of interesting, but SJM just can't pull it off. Rhysand assures Feyre that in his court women have choices, even though they don't, and that Lucian isn't legally allowed to challenge the bond being rejected, but it's totally legal in other courts. Whenever they mention laws, I get really confused about who makes the laws and how they all agree on them, and is there like federal Prithian law? Like, are the courts, do they have their own state laws? Like, what is happening? I don't think it ever gets clarified. Feyre seems to be pretty clearly on Team Azriel for some reason, even though Lucian is also supposed to be her friend. And Rhysand is quick to remind her that Azriel has been hopelessly in love with Mor for the last 500 years. I mentioned the whole weird pseudo-love triangle between Azriel, Cassian, and Mor in the last video, but that's a whole can of worms we'll get into later, and it's something that is a nothing burger. It doesn't really go anywhere. I don't know why SJM even bothered setting up that tension between them, because it really doesn't play off in any satisfying way. We randomly switch topics, and Feyre says she feels guilty for reading Lucian's mind earlier, like she probably did that one time in that other book that I can't remember, but I swear she's done this before. Rhysand basically shrugs it off and is like, you know what, you shouldn't feel guilty, because Lucian broke the rules first by trying to talk to Elaine, so you know what, you shouldn't feel bad either. I love that they can just justify whatever they want while looking down on others for their own bad behavior. Like, I hate them. Anyway, I guess it's time to finally go to the Court of Nightmares, except we have to get descriptions of everyone's outfits first. I won't bore you with all that, just know that everybody is dressed up all super fancy and hot, and I know some people really love the outfit descriptions, but I am not that girly, I just don't care. So they go to the Court of Nightmares and they walk into the throne room, and we are reminded that there's only one throne. They make a big show of Rhysand leading Feyre to the throne and letting her sit there while he just kind of casually sits on the throne's arm and tells everyone, like, dramatically, he goes, bow before Feyre. I'm like, ugh, it's supposed to be hot or whatever. I'm not into this at all. This is supposed to be like such a super badass moment, and yet another parallel to Tamlin, who made Feyre sit in like a really shitty throne compared to like his super nice throne. Like, she kind of just got a chair. But now Rhysand is like, oh, Feyre gets the throne, and like I'll sit on the side, and it's too heavy-handed. It is too much. Like, I get it. And it also doesn't really make sense, because in the last book, Rhysand brought Feyre to the Court of Nightmares, and he acted like she was his pet and dry-humped her in front of everyone on that very throne because she sat on his lap all sexy. But now that they're coming back again, he suddenly expects them all to respect her as their high lady, like none of that happened and he didn't objectify her in front of everybody. Like, alright, I guess we're supposed to just forget about all of that. Rhysand is like putting on his extra super evil act, so he threatens to rip all the skin off of everyone's bones if there isn't a second throne for Feyre the next time they come and visit. Even though he's supposed to just be pretending to be extra super evil, that sounded like a pretty convincing threat, and people believe that he's actually going to do that, so I guess the Court of Nightmares better find a second throne real quick. Feyre makes a big show with her mind control powers to show everyone how strong she is, so I guess their plan is to intimidate Kier into letting them use his army. Kier is Mor's dad. That's like a reminder if you didn't already remember who he is, because like I kind of forgot who he was. The party awkwardly begins as Amarantha and Nesta make their way to the magic MacGuffin room to practice some kind of magic nonsense. This also is a plot point that gets abandoned and goes nowhere, so like whatever. It doesn't really matter. The rest of the gang meet with Kier in the council room to discuss the whole army thing and the whole war that's coming up. Kier comes straight out and says that he sympathizes with Hybern because the Court of Nightmares is essentially trapped under the mountain. And I guess Hybern is like trapped in their island. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about. Like, I'm so confused. Didn't the Night Court like mutually agree to splitting up the court into like the Court of Dreamers and the Court of Nightmares like 1,000 years ago? Like, this was established long before Rhysand's time and maybe even Kier's time. Like, I don't know how old he is, but this deal was set into stone long before Rhysand. I guess the current residents of the Court of Nightmares are resentful of that, which kind of makes sense with how much it sucks down there, but they caused that themselves by being horrible. They made their own city suck. They could just make it a better city if they all just stopped sucking. Rhysand reminds Kier that he rules all of the Night Court, even though he really doesn't, because it's like explicitly stated that he like doesn't rule the Court of Nightmares like Kier does. I'm confused. But Kier is like, Rhysand, that attitude of yours is exactly why I relate to Hybern. And like, yet again, Rhysand's fake evil act is back to bite him in the ass. Like, he could just be a little nicer. I mean, not that Kier really deserves anybody being nice to him, but you win more flies with honey than vinegar. Kier does eventually agree to lend his armies, but on one condition, and then he says some really out-of-pocket shit. What would you give me for a shot at this war, Rhysand? You hoard yourself to Amarantha, but what about your mate? He had not forgotten how we'd treated him, how we'd humiliated him months ago. He might not have forgotten his humiliation, but he sure didn't learn his lesson. Rhysand is weirdly calm about this that should have clearly sent him into a rage, but he says that even though the agreement with the courts being split up, it lets Kier control the army, but it doesn't prevent Rhysand from killing Kier, so he's like, you better rethink your conditions. And yet again, I'm sitting here asking why Rhysand doesn't just mist the entire Court of Nightmares. If this is such a problem, why are they even doing any of this? Just get rid of them. And I still don't understand why Rhysand isn't in charge. I'm just so confused. Rhysand then dramatically pulls his trump card that he conveniently has not told the rest of his inner circle or Feyre about, and Eris, of all people, walks in. Bro, what is even happening? What are we doing right now? If you don't remember, Eris is Lucian's older brother and Mor's ex-fiancé. He's so super evil that when the engagement was announced with Mor, she was so like, oh no, fuck this, I cannot marry this guy. So she went and screwed Cassian and lost her virginity to him so Eris wouldn't want her anymore. And then as a result, her family at the Court of Nightmares were so enraged that they tortured her as punishment, which caused her to then permanently leave the Court of Nightmares and go live with Rhysand, I guess. So why would Rhysand invite Eris to this meeting without warning Mor or anyone else first? Why? Because reasons! Rhysand always withholds information, so this shouldn't surprise anyone, even though it's super messed up and Mor is clearly traumatized and is not wanting to see this person out of the blue with no warning. That is so messed up. Also, this whole plot point with Eris doesn't really go anywhere in this book, so I'll breeze right through this. I've come to realize that a lot of these plot points kind of just don't play out, they're set up and go nowhere. Okay, we'll see this in another book, I guess. Anyway, Rhysand says that Eris agrees to ally the Autumn Court with the Court of Nightmares if Kier lends his army in the war, which is a big deal, I guess, since the Court of Nightmares was trying to get some allies with the Autumn Court, and that was what the marriage with Mor and Eris was supposed to achieve, but that all fell through, so now this is a big offer. I don't know why they want this particular allyship to happen, but they do, and it's important. I don't know. Kier says that that's not enough for him, and that he wants his people to be free from under the mountain and to have access to other parts of the Night Court. They know about Velaris now for some reason. I guess, they know because of the attack on it. I don't know. They know. I don't know why Rhysand can't just mind control them not to know, but they know. And they know how cool Velaris is, and they want to be able to go up there, even though it goes against the entire agreement that was set up 1,000 years ago that they would stay in their court. Mor is clearly horrified by all of this, but Rhysand agrees to let Kier to have access to Velaris, but with certain restrictions. It becomes clear that Kier doesn't actually want to go to Velaris because it's cool, and he's only doing it to spite Mor, who I will remind you is his daughter, because he's just an asshole like that. Rhysand then casually says that he also wants the magic mirror that the Bone Carver wants. He doesn't say the stuff about the Bone Carver, obviously. And Kier cryptically says that they can have it if they can take it, which is kind of ominous. He goes on to explain that to claim the mirror, you have to look into it, but it drives everyone who's ever looked into it crazy beyond all repair, so good luck with that. Then Kier conveniently leaves, so they can all talk to Rhysand about the total bullshit he just pulled with marching Eris in there. I'm very confused by all of this, and as I said, it doesn't even fully play out in this book, so I'll do my best to explain. Remember a long time ago when Lucian told Azriel he should send some spies to the Autumn Court to see if his brothers knew about Feyre's powers? Okay, so he did that, and he wiped their memories, except for Eris for some reason, because I guess he knows how to shield, mind control people out. And I don't know, does Azriel have the mind control powers? Because I thought he didn't, so I'm just kind of confused by all of this. But the only way to keep Eris from running his mouth was to make a deal with him. And so they made this deal with him that they would help him become the High Lord of the Autumn Court if he was able to convince Kier to, lend the armies. Mor accuses Eris of wanting another bride to torture, which is kind of a weird thing to say because I didn't think it was Eris that tortured her. I think it was her family that tortured her. And Eris vaguely hints that there's more to their arranged marriage in that story that we know, but none of that gets resolved in this book, and I don't think it's actually ever resolved in the series based on some spoilers I've read, so I have no idea what Eris is talking about. Feyre then accuses Eris of being evil because he attacked her and Lucian earlier in the book, but he says that he had no choice but to follow his father's orders. Eris then goes on to say that he only disobeyed his father one time, and that was to help Lucian escape to the Spring Court, so maybe he's, not that evil? We're getting all of these little seeds that maybe Eris is also just pretending to be evil and he's way more convincing at it than Rhysand. But as I said before, none of that really goes anywhere in this book, so I don't know if Eris is actually secretly a nice guy. Anyway, as I said before, the deal that they made is that the Night Court will help Eris take power of the Autumn Court. And Eris goes so far as to say that if they kill his father right now, then he'll pledge the entire Autumn Court troops to them in the war. That's too risky though, because it will make the Night Court look extra evil, like they're staging a coup in another court, so like they just can't interfere like that. We then get another not so subtle reminder that something is fishy between Eris and Mor, even though we never learn what that is. Eris looked between them, smiling faintly, secretly, as if he knew something that Azriel didn't. I wouldn't have touched you, he said to Mor, who blanched again. But when you fucked that other bastard, a snarl ripped from Rhys's throat at that, and my own, I knew why you did it. Again, that secret smile that had more shrinking. So I gave you your freedom, ending the betrothal in no uncertain terms. SJM had to throw the word secret in there twice just to really hammer the point home that something weird is going on. Except as I said, we never find out, so why even set this up? I think people are also speculating that this will show up in the next ACOWAR book that's coming out next year, but I guess we'll have to see. Eris leaves, and then this hot mess of a chapter mercifully ends. The gang go back to the townhouse, and Mor is practically inconsolable as she screams at Rhysand. He pretty coldly says that Eris caught Azriel spying, so they were forced into making this deal, and nobody's really happy about it, but they just have to deal with it. Just kind of like how Tamlin was saying, like, oh, you know what, we had to ally with Hybern, and nobody's happy about it, but you just have to deal with it. Like, Rhysand's pulling a Tamlin right now. And whether allying with Eris was their only option or not, he could have at least warned everybody in advance about it. There was no reason to keep it secret. Springing it on them out of the blue is totally messed up, especially for Mor to have to see somebody that traumatized her so much without any warning. Like, that's just wrong. Oh, but let's not forget that Azriel was also in on this whole time, and he kept his mouth shut because he's a loyal dog to Rhysand. Apparently they were worried that Mor would have tried to stop the deal, and that would cause a lot of problems with all the Alliance stuff, and they really need Kier's army for the war. I do kind of see his point, but if Mor is still so affected by her trauma that she'd have an emotional outburst that could cause them to lose the war because they lost allies, then she shouldn't be in the inner circle. If the group can't share information freely because they are worried one of them might impulsively react and mess things up, then that person should not be in the inner circle. They cannot be trusted. They don't have the maturity for that. Then again, literally all of these fairies who are hundreds or even thousands of years old in Amren's case all do impulsive and stupid things at some point in the series, so by my own logic, none of them should be in the inner circle. You know what? I'm gonna stand by that. There just shouldn't be an inner circle. Anyway, Cassian is as angry as Mor is and says that they should have just killed Eris. Lucian is there because, remember, he's just kind of there, and he chimes in to agree, like, yeah, you should have killed him. Eris is a snake. You just should not have done anything with him like this deal. That's so dumb. Mor clarifies that she isn't angry about the whole Eris thing, and that she's actually furious that Rhysand gave Kier access to Valaris, which is supposed to be her safe place away from her awful, terrible family. Rhysand tells her that he took precautions and ensured that none of the local businesses will serve Kier and his goons, so eventually they'll get bored and stop coming because they can't enjoy the city. What the hell? Seriously? Like, this is all so stupid I don't even know what to say right now. Like, truly, what is happening? Cassian slid his arm around her shoulders, his face harder than I'd ever seen it as he studied Rhys, then Azriel. You should have warned us. I should have, Rhys said, though he didn't sound sorry for it. Azriel just remained a foot away, wings tucked in tight and siphons glimmering. Rhysand can't even be bothered to care about any of this. He's probably putting on like some tough guy act and like deep down he cares, but you know what? I feel like he doesn't actually care. He has been repeatedly told by Feyre how upsetting it is when he withholds information, and sometimes he pretends to be sorry, but he never stops doing it. You know what? I've just been reminded why I hate Rhysand so much, and he's back at the top of my shit list. Move over, Cassian. Rhysand went low doing this all behind their backs, so Mor goes even lower and asks how Rhysand would feel if Amarantha was still alive, and Mor decided to work with her behind Rhysand's back. If Amarantha offered us a slim shot at survival, Rhys said, his gaze unflinching, then I would not give a shit that she made me fuck her for all those years. Cassian flinched. The entire room flinched. If Amarantha showed up at that door right now, Rhys snarled, pointing toward the foyer entry, and said she could buy us a chance at defeating Hybern, at keeping all of you alive, I would thank the fucking Cauldron. Mor shook her head, tears slipping free again. You don't mean that. I do.
Alright, let's everybody just calm the fuck down.
How am I going to unpack this? I don't think resand actually means that, but like, okay, pop off, bestie. These situations are very different though, and like, I don't mean to victim blame here, but Moore had zero agency when it came to her arranged marriage with Eris and was literally tortured by her own family for trying to get out of that arrangement. And again, I don't mean to victim blame or minimize Rhysand's trauma. Please correct me if I am wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that he was the one who initially started a sexual relationship with Amarantha so that he could keep tabs on her and make sure she wasn't going to learn about his secrets, like Valaris. And while he definitely didn't consent to everything that happened, he kind of set that into motion, at least by my recollection of how that story went, and Moore never really had any choice, so yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there. I don't think these situations are comparable. But also, it's not fair for Moore to throw Amarantha in Rhysand's face like that. Like, that is messed up. She should not have said that. I'm absolutely not defending her actions at all. That is just as wrong for her to bring that up. But it wasn't fair for Rhysand to expose Moore to her past abuser Eris without any warning either. If everyone would just sit down and talk to each other reasonably, then they could have avoided this mess. Why are they fighting over this stupid shit when they should just all be able to speak to each other? Amren steps in and tells everyone to take a chill pill. She tells Moore to suck it up and deal with Kier and Eris until the war is over, and then she'll even help Moore butcher them himself, but until then, cool it. Then Amren turns on Rhysand and tells him that while his hands were tied with making the deal, which I don't really believe was the case, but anyway, that doesn't excuse him for not talking to everybody about it first and just revealing things the way he did by just dropping shit on them. Rhysand actually seems kind of sorry now, and he probably is, but I still hate Rhysand. They all agree to calm down and work together, and then they start talking about the mirror again, even though this really goes nowhere for a long time. Cassian's stupid ass brought it up because he totally forgot that they didn't tell Amren about going to the bone carver and like how they were going to need to get the mirror. So that causes a whole other argument. Oh my god, these people are so immature and stupid. As I've said a million times now, if they can't share information freely amongst the inner circle, then what's the point of even having one? I wouldn't trust any of these losers with all the shit they pull and all the secrets they have. Lucian straight up just stands up and leaves the room, and I wish I could too. Maybe he was better off in the Spring Court after all. Tamlin was dysfunctional, but so is the Night Court, just in a different way. The rest of the inner circle strategically place themselves around Amren like she's a feral dog who might lunge and attack them. And if they are truly that scared of her and believe she would commit violence against them, then she shouldn't be in the inner circle. I don't know how much I can harp on this, but they just need to get rid of the inner circle at this point because clearly it doesn't mean anything because they don't actually trust each other. Or respect each other either, but that's a whole separate issue. Rhysand orders Amren to tell them about how she escaped the prison, which is a line he never dared to cross before of like forcing her to reveal that secret. Amren hesitates but eventually answers, and honestly her explanation is pretty confusing and doesn't really have any plot significance even though they will try to pretend it does later on. I've said before that Amren is some kind of interdimensional being, and I read somewhere online that it was confirmed somehow that she's like a biblically accurate angel from like Christianity. I didn't fact check that, and I'm not a Christian, so I don't know anything about that, so take that with a grain of salt. That's just what I've heard she's supposed to be. Amren goes on to say that in her previous world there was some kind of hole in the sky that she flew into and ended up in Prythian, but she doesn't know how she ended up in the prison, and I don't think we ever find out. Amren explains that she had to give up her former self to bind herself into her current body, which then somehow allowed her to escape the prison. I don't really understand. Her original form, like the biblical angel, if that was what she was supposed to be, was much, much stronger than her current form, especially because in that form she didn't have any emotions to hold her back. And she says in order to get the bone carver out of the prison that he'll also need to get made into a new body. She seems kind of disappointed and says she would have just told them all of this if they'd asked instead of going behind her back, but considering that she never shared any of this information before, I'm a little doubtful about that. Amren says that she's not able to return to her original form, and if she did, she would be incredibly dangerous because she'd go back to having no feelings and she wouldn't care about the inner circle or anything that she had cared about before. Even though she kind of doesn't really seem to care about them now, she does have some emotions even though she's not great at showing them. The conversation is cut short when Elaine randomly shows up to say some more cryptic nonsense. Feyre offers to make her some hot milk like she's an actual child, and she tries to bring Elaine back to bed, but Elaine just keeps babbling.
Don't say weird shit!
Feyre and Nesta make eye contact, and it's clear they both think Elaine has fully gone crazy, but Azriel is kind of acting like what Elaine is saying actually means something. So the whole situation is very weird, and the scene abruptly ends with Azriel teleporting away to God knows where. Good lord, what an absolute mess of a chapter. It felt like a barrage of random information and conflicts, and like the chapter isn't even over yet, actually. That was just a scene break, not a chapter end, so like we're still gonna keep this weird train chugging along. The next scene is Feyre talking to Nesta about her magic training and how that's going. They then talk about Elaine and agree that the Cauldron probably made her crazy, except Nesta isn't crazy, so Feyre asks like, well, how are you not crazy? Like how did the Cauldron affect you? That's obviously way too touchy-feely of a conversation for Nesta, and she doesn't want to talk about it, so she runs away. And Feyre half-heartedly tries to follow her, but then gives up when Lucian shows up. They sit down to talk, and he says he wants to help Elaine by finding a healer to check her over to try to figure out if she's actually crazy. I'm not sure why they didn't have a healer come check on both Elaine and Nesta, especially since they had just had, like, that trauma in Hybern. Like, they didn't have anybody check on them already? Like, there should have been healers around already to work on Azriel and Cassian because of the terrible injuries they sustained, but they just, like, never checked on Elaine and Nesta? Okay, whatever. Feyre calls a healer to come the next day and then goes to bed to cry herself to sleep. I guess they don't have therapists in the fairy world, even though literally every single character needs one, so I guess they're just gonna have to make do with crying themselves to sleep and whatever this healer can do. The scene ends, and this godforsaken chapter still isn't over because we get a conversation with Feyre and Rhysand, like, as the next scene. Feyre basically says she's depressed because, like, of fucking course she is, and Rhysand is like, you know what, I'm not okay either, which, of course he's not. He takes back everything he said earlier about Amarantha because he didn't actually mean it, because of course he didn't mean it, and he would never agree to work with Amarantha no matter what, which is all hypothetical because Amarantha is dead, but, like, you get the point. He goes on to say he takes everything on himself because he doesn't like upsetting people like he did with Moore, but that makes no sense because the whole reason she was upset was because she wasn't involved. Rhysand would actually upset people less often if he was just more honest and actually trusted his inner circle with the jobs he appointed them to do himself, but I've bitched enough about all of that. Let's just move on to the next chapter. Feyre goes to the House of Wind for more training, and we see that she's still not any good at flying. She trains with Cassian and Azriel before returning to the townhouse where Moore is eating breakfast. Feyre straight up takes the pastry right out of Moore's hand and gobbles it up like some greedy little monster. I would have bitch slapped her, but Moore just magically summons some more food, like whatever. Moore shows Feyre a letter that they got from Helion, High Lord of the Day Court, saying that he'll attend the meeting that might eventually happen in this book. The Dawn Court and the Winter Court will also show up, but they haven't heard from anyone else, so things aren't really looking so good with them for finding allies. Feyre tries to talk about what happened last night with, like, everything that went down, and Moore tries to dodge the subject. She reiterates that she's not angry about the deal with Eris and understands why that had to happen, even though I don't understand why that had to happen, and says yet again that what she's really mad about is that Kier now has access to Valaris. Moore and Feyre agree that war just kind of sucks and they're just going to have to get over it, and then the healer shows up for Elaine. The healer doesn't find anything wrong, and Feyre trusts her judgment because she's the first visibly old fairy that Feyre has ever seen, so she's probably got thousands of years of experience. All the other fairies are described as being like 20s or 30s, but this fairy is like 100, so she's definitely super old and knows what she's talking about. Nesta doesn't care about any of that though and gets snappy with the healer because that's just who Nesta is. The healer says that physically Elaine is fine, but she can't actually get into Elaine's mind since Elaine is Cauldron made, so this whole plot point is kind of useless because the healer was never going to be able to find out if Elaine had mental health issues. The healer says that Elaine probably isn't insane and she's just traumatized, but if anybody can actually figure that out, it would be her mate Lucian, who might be able to sense something through their soul connection. Nesta absolutely despises Lucian, so she's like, oh hell no, he's not going to do anything. Call another healer, we need a second opinion. Feyre finally puts her foot down and tells Nesta to shut the hell up, and that it's worth a try if Elaine is willing to talk to Lucian, and that Nesta isn't the one who gets to call all the shots. We then hard cut to the next chapter directly into the most awkward interaction of all time. Feyre and Moore are sitting nearby, like in the sitting room of the townhouse, and they're pretending to drink some tea while Amren and Nesta are also sitting nearby pretending to work on their magic stuff. Like everybody's sitting there trying to look casual and not like they're eavesdropping, which they definitely are. Feyre spots Rhysand and Cassian through the window, like walking up to the house, and she telepathically tells them not to come in because it'll make things even more awkward and bad, so they turn around to walk away. So Lucian and Elaine are also in the room doing something. I guess they're like standing and everybody else is just like sitting around them pretending not to see. It's very weird, but Lucian is trying to talk to Elaine and she just is still talking cryptic nonsense and she's talking about ravens for some reason. So Nesta is like, yeah, this is not working, and she takes Elaine out to the garden to like give her some fresh air. The narrative then gives us yet another reminder out of nowhere that Lucian is much darker skinned than his brothers, in case you forgot that already. Spoiler alert, this is like a big reveal later that is another thing that goes nowhere, but stay tuned. The scene kind of just awkwardly ends right there, and then the next scene is more training with Feyre and Asriel, so like that whole thing didn't even go anywhere, so they still don't know what's up with Elaine. This part of the novel feels really directionless to me, and there's not a good flow from one event into another. It's all just random stuff crammed together, and it's not very cohesive. This whole time I'm waiting for the war to start, and there's a lot of cogs moving behind the scenes to get the war going, but Feyre isn't really involved in any of that stuff, so this part of the book is super boring and very just disjointed and random. Anyway, Feyre and Asriel are training, and Feyre basically still can't fly at all, and so she just repeatedly smashes into things, which is kind of funny. We get a bunch of random exposition about Miriam and Draken, which I guess is relevant because Draken also has wings, and they're talking like about flying stuff, but he's not Illyrian. Draken is a seraphim, which means he has fluffy feathered wings like bird wings, instead of leather ones like the bat wings that the Illyrians have. Oh, and also unlike the Illyrians, in Seraphim culture, the women aren't horribly oppressed and they're allowed to even be in the army and stuff, so fuck the Illyrians, go Seraphim. Like, I want a Seraphim guy. Why are we dealing with these stupid-ass Illyrians? Asriel isn't done yapping, and he tells a really long story that's mostly irrelevant, so I'll just summarize it, but I do have some commentary about it that I think is important. During the final battle in the war, the humans were trying to escape the Blackland, which I think is an island, so the Seraphim with their wings parted a sea so that Miriam could evacuate all the humans, like parting the Red Sea style. The fairy army was basically chasing them across the seafloor, and Miriam got skewered by a spear, and so she died, and that's how she was, like, remade later on. When Miriam fell, Draken didn't see any of that happen, and he was about to let the sea fall back down, but then a young Seraphim warrior named Neffel saw and went to go rescue Miriam. Even though Neffel was in the army, she was not a soldier, she was a cartographer, and that's because her wings were too small and malformed to be a soldier. Her body was also kind of frail, and she was too weak to carry the big-ass shields, so she couldn't march in the formation, so she was not a soldier, she was a cartographer. Despite all of that, Neffel was able to fly to Miriam and save her, even though it was just said that her wing deformity made it so that she couldn't fly very well. Due to her narrow wingspan, she was able to navigate the rocky seafloor while the other Seraphim couldn't fit down there, but they never really explain how she was able to carry Miriam, who is much heavier than a shield. Like, whatever, try to justify the whole wing thing allowing her to fly, but the whole carrying Miriam, they never justify how she was just magically able to do that. Anyway, this heroic event gave rise to the Neffel philosophy, which is something that the Illyrians will reference sometimes. And this is the belief that one's greatest weakness can become their greatest strength, and that the most unlikely person can alter history. This is exactly the inspiration Feyre needed to keep on trying to fly, but there's something about this story that really bothers me. This is a prime example of the throwing off the disability trope, in which a disabled character suddenly regains use of their disabled organ or body part. In this case, Neffel regains use of her malformed wings, even though it was stated that she's not able to fly. She somehow overcomes this through sheer heroic willpower and temporarily overrides her physical limitations to save Miriam. Except that's not how disabilities work at all. Someone who's paralyzed from the waist down can't willpower their legs into working again because they need to heroically save a puppy from a burning building. This whole trope implies that disabled people just aren't trying hard enough to not be disabled, which is just so wrong and offensive and ableist. Disabled people don't exist to serve as inspiration to able-bodied people, and to relegate them to that role is condescending. I'll cut this rant short, but just know that the whole Neffel story is just, it's virtue signaling, but it's actually offensive and ableist. It's just stupid. I don't really think SJM knew what she was doing when she wrote this. Side note, Neffel was not only an attempt at disability representation, but also queer rep, as it's stated that she has a wife. SJM kind of pretends to be inclusive by throwing in random queer side characters because she doesn't know how to write a queer main character, but we'll get into all of that later. The training scene wraps up and Rhysand gives Feyre a sexy massage for her sore muscles. That turns into something spicier, and that's all I'll say about that. The next chapter opens with Feyre being too sore to train, so I guess Rhysand's massage wasn't very effective despite how much Feyre seemed to enjoy it. Nesta is still doing research into fixing the wall to no avail, and now Lucian has also joined in that research. I don't know why they think the answers they need will be in a book somewhere, especially after it was stated earlier that many libraries were destroyed during the war, so a lot of information was lost, but they keep trying that anyway, even though it's not working. We get a breakfast scene, and while everybody is trying to enjoy their muffins, Elaine starts saying weird and unsettling stuff again. Nesta's nostrils flared, but Elaine peered up at Cassian, blinking twice. He snapped your wings, broke your bones. I tried to shut out the sound of Cassian's scream, the memory of the spraying blood. Nesta stared at her plate. Elaine, at least, was out of her room, but... It'll take more than that to kill me, Cassian said with a smirk that didn't meet his eyes. Elaine only said to Cassian, no, it will not.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Alrighty then. As per usual, nobody takes anything Elaine says seriously, even though she clearly knows things that she shouldn't know, and it's kind of bizarre. Asriel takes her out to the garden to placate her, because again, everybody treats her like she's a toddler. Feyre, Nesta, and Cassian go to the House of Wind and then down to the library so that they can continue their futile research into the wall that is still going nowhere. So they start looking through the library for any book that might help them, and we cover something that's been bothering me since the first book. I didn't know you couldn't really read, Nesta said as she paused before a nondescript section, noticing the way I silently sounded out the words of a title. I didn't know where you were in your lessons when it all happened. I assumed you could read as easily as us. Well, I couldn't. Why didn't you ask us to teach you? I trailed a finger over the neat row of spines. Because I doubted you would agree to help. Nesta seems taken aback by what Feyre said, as if she didn't sit on her ass and watch Feyre struggle for years to feed their family single-handedly. If Nesta wouldn't help take care of basic life necessities to even keep herself alive, then why would she go out of her way to help Feyre? Why would Feyre ever expect Nesta to teach her how to read? Feyre was too busy keeping them all alive to have time to read anyway. At least Nesta seems to feel bad about the whole reading thing, which is progress, because she rarely seems to show remorse for her actions. Feyre boldly asks why Nesta only cares about Elaine, and Nesta even shockingly starts to answer that question before they are dramatically cut off by what seems to be some kind of earthquake. The lights in the library dramatically flicker and shut off as Feyre and Nesta take off running from whatever evil presence they suddenly sense. Two fairies from Hybern intercept them, and one blows Feybane dust into Feyre's face to knock out her powers, which I guess it's awfully convenient that whoever deployed the dust didn't inhale any of it themselves when they were doing that. Anyway, this scene is kind of inconsequential despite how it seems like we're finally getting some action, so I'm going to breeze through it. The creepy Hybern fairies say that they snuck in using mind control powers to confuse the priestesses/librarians, and they say that they are the king's ravens, whatever that means. They're there to kidnap Nesta because she took more from the cauldron than she should have, and that's why Hybern hasn't been able to use the cauldron, so they want that power back. Feyre can't get a hold of Rhysand to come save them, so she's gonna have to figure this one out on her own. Feyre grabs Nesta and they run deeper into the library where the scary, mysterious pit is. As they run through the dark, the ravens taunt them about how the mortal queens didn't survive being tossed in the cauldron, as if Feyre, and especially Nesta, didn't already want those bitches dead. Like, why are they using that to be scary when that's exactly what Nesta and Feyre wanted to happen? But not all of the queens are dead, so the Archeron sisters still have some work to do if they can survive this encounter, which, spoiler alert, of course they do. Despite the utter chaos of the situation, Feyre can somehow think coherently enough to realize that all of the creepy stuff Elaine has been saying wasn't random babbling, but psychic predictions. Elaine had said something about ravens, and now here they are. I don't know how Feyre even remembers what Elaine said, considering they were so quick to write her off, so why would they remember something that they think is just crazy rambling? Like, I wouldn't put thought into that. And I especially wouldn't be able to recall that if I was running for my life. But whatever, Feyre needs to know it because the plot needs her to know it, so here we are. As they're running, Feyre shoves over a bookshelf that dominoes a bunch of other bookshelves to separate Nesta from the ravens, and then she runs off to draw their attention away from her. I'd think that a bunch of bookshelves wouldn't be enough to keep super powerful fairies away from their sole target, because they don't seem to be there for Feyre at all. They're just there for Nesta, so I don't know how some bookshelves are gonna stop them, but it does, and they run after Feyre. Feyre keeps running until she reaches a dead end, so I guess we're supposed to assume that she's at the bottom of the scary pit. Even though the pit is like a bottomless pit, she's like down there now. I don't really know what's happening. I don't really understand the geometry of this library. But since Feyre is at the bottom of the pit, there is some spooky monster down there that scared the shit out of Cassian, so we're kind of supposed to be scared of like, oh shit, what's it gonna do to Feyre? But because monsters really seem to like Feyre, it offers her a deal to help her out of her situation. Feyre knows that taking deals is a super bad idea, but all the scary monster wants is a friend to chat with, which kind of sounds ominous, and maybe she shouldn't do that, like there's some kind of double meaning to that. But because SJM isn't a very good writer, there is no double meaning to that. Like, it doesn't really go anywhere in this book. So Feyre agrees to make this deal. It's pitch black, so we can't see the scary monster and whatever it's doing, but the ravens start screaming and Feyre can hear them being torn to shreds. Cassian and Rhysand show up to save the day just a little too late since the deal's already been made and the ravens have already been dealt with. But just like many other things in this book, the deal plotline with the pit monster doesn't go anywhere and it doesn't matter. The next chapter opens up with Cassian, Feyre, and Nesta in the library that's in the House of Wind, not the one below it that they were just in that's underground. This gets kind of confusing sometimes about what library they're in and why they even need two libraries in the same building, but whatever. Cassian has given Feyre and Nesta big glasses of brandy and orders them to drink it because everybody knows that consuming alcohol is the best way to deal with trauma. Rhysand waltzes in with his hands dripping in blood like he tore the ravens apart himself, even though Feyre's scary pit monster friend was already taking care of business and had it handled. I guess Rhysand had to be the big bad tough guy and take care of it himself. Side note, Feyre has a new magic tattoo to signify her deal with the scary monster, and now I'm confused by the Illyrian's tattoos. I haven't mentioned it a ton, I think, but Cassian, Asriel, and Rhysand are all covered in tattoos, and it's supposed to be like, ooh, sexy tattoo boy. But now I'm confused because are all of their tattoos meant to represent deals they've made, or did they just get those tattoos for vibes, or what do they mean? Are they a different kind of magic tattoo? And if they are just for aesthetic, are they also magic, or did they actually physically have to put the ink in their skin like a regular tattoo? I have questions. But those are never answered, so let's move on. Anyway, Rhysand says that he read the Ravens' minds, which wasn't necessary because they already directly told Feyre their evil plans, so I don't know what Rhysand needed to confirm outside of that. Nesta says that she doesn't know what power she supposedly took from the Cauldron, and she seems really shaken up by the whole thing, especially the part where Feyre sacrificed herself to save her, despite Nesta being a bitch to her this whole time. Which is character progress, I guess. Luckily everyone else is safe, and they're working on fixing the wards that the Ravens broke to get in. Rhysand is furious over the whole situation, while Feyre is weirdly nonchalant about it all because nobody got hurt. She's like, well, nobody got hurt, and those dumbass ravens gave us some useful information, so win-win, calm down. She also doesn't seem very worried about her deal with her creepy monster friend, so I guess Feyre herself knew that SJM would kind of drop that plot point. We get a weird segment where Rhysand beams Cassian's memories into Feyre's mind to show her how desperate Nesta was to get help for Feyre after they were separated after the whole bookshelf thing. I think we're supposed to view this as character development, but I think caring about the person who sacrificed themselves for you is a bare minimum expectation, especially from family members. The chapter ends with Rhysand putting Valaris under lockdown so that Amren can hunt to make sure that nobody else from Hybern is lurking around. We then cut to a scene at the townhouse with the rest of the inner circle so they can all discuss the attack. Elaine creepily says that the cursed queen might show up, and even though Feyre came to the realization earlier that Elaine isn't crazy, it's Asriel who confirms it when he says that the Cauldron made her a seer, and I hope I'm saying that right, seer, because of course it gave her special powers. God forbid we have regular characters with regular powers in this book, everybody is special. Side note, this whole Elaine situation is another potentially problematic trope called the Cuckoo Lander was right. It's where a character who's been deemed as crazy actually has it right all along. In this instance, it stigmatizes mental illness because even people who are supposed to care about Elaine immediately disregard her as being crazy instead of actually listening to her and figuring out what's happening. Anyway, everyone's like, oh yeah, the whole seer thing kind of makes sense, and then nobody even apologizes to Elaine for treating her like she was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Instead, Feyre comes to this conclusion. You stole from the Cauldron, I said to Nesta, who seemed ready to jump between all of us and Elaine. But what if the Cauldron gave something to Elaine? Nesta's face drained of color. What? This implies that the Cauldron has some level of sentience, which is interesting, and I think we already knew that because I think we've heard the Cauldron talk, but I might be confusing that with the evil talking spellbook that they also have. Regardless, the Cauldron's potential sentience doesn't go anywhere else plot-wise, so just forget about it. They talk about Elaine's visions, and we finally learn about the sixth mortal queen that was missing in the last book. We were told that she was sick, which is only kind of true. She's actually cursed. Elaine shifted her face toward him. Another blink. They sold her to some darkness, to some sorcerer lord. She shook her head. I can never see him, what he is. There's an onyx box that he possesses, more vital than anything, save for them, the girls. He keeps other girls, others so like her. But she, by day she is one form, by night, human again. Hold up, a sorcerer? Is that what they're calling humans who can do magic? I'm confused because they've never used this term before now. Like Rhysand kind of mentioned earlier that humans can do magic if they have specific spells, but he didn't call them sorcerers. Anyway, we learn the queen is named Vasa, and she's being held captive by this sorcerer dude at some lake somewhere that Elaine can only vaguely see. It seems like the other queens played some role in cursing Vasa, so the gang assumes that she must be important and that finding her will help them gain some allies in the human realm. I don't really know that it's worth the effort to track down the missing queen and find a way to break her curse just for some lousy human soldiers, and Cassian even says as much. Moore thinks that they should try anyway because clearly Elaine is having these visions. Moore thinks they should try anyway because clearly Elaine is having these visions for a reason, and this very well may be their key to winning the war. Lucian steps up to say he'll go look for the queen because he's kind of just been sitting around this whole time and he wants to be useful. Rhysand asks what makes Lucian think that he can find the queen, and this is what he says. This eye, Lucian gestured to the metal contraption. It can see things that others can't. Spells, glamours, perhaps it can help me find her and break her curse. He glanced at Elaine, who was again studying her lap. I'm not needed here. I'll fight if you need me to, but he offered me a grim smile. I do not belong in the Autumn Court, and I'm willing to bet I'm no longer welcome at the Spring Court. Home, he had almost said. But I cannot sit here and do nothing. Those queens with their armies, there is a threat in that regard too. So use me. Send me. I will find Vasa, see if she can bring help. So I guess that's how Lucian immediately knew Feyre was a spy. Not because she was acting sketchy as hell, but because he could literally see the Night Court tattoo on her arm through the glamour. I guess Feyre just got lucky that nobody else in the Spring Court can see through glamours and that Lucian was the only one and kept his mouth shut, but that is so dumb! They agreed to let Lucian try to find Vasa and arranged for him to leave the very next day. The meeting then kind of abruptly ends so we can get another bath scene, but this time Feyre is the one washing Rhysand. He's cold and detached and kind of moping about the whole ordeal because he wasn't strong enough to protect everybody from the Raven, even though nobody even got hurt, so I don't know what he's like moping around about so much. We get a weird throwaway line that Rhysand's hands are all bloody because he didn't shield them so that he could feel the Raven's lives end under his fingers.
Jesus Christ.
Okay then. I can't say they didn't deserve it, but that's a pretty disturbing thing to admit. I think that's an inside thought that you should keep to yourself, homeboy. Like, okay. When did this become haunting Adeline? Ugh. Rhysand continues his moping, and yet again I'm reminded of how much I despise him. The king used an archaic spell and walked in the front door. If I can't... Rhys shook his head, and I lowered his now clean hand and reached for the other. More blood stained the water. If I can't protect them here, how can... His throat bobbed. I lifted his chin with a hand. Icy rage had slipped into something a bit shattered and aching. Those priestesses have endured enough. I failed them today. That library, it will no longer feel safe for them. The one place they've had to themselves, where they knew they were protected. Hybern took that away today. Sir, excuse me. You care about the priestesses' safety when it comes to physical violence, but don't give a single crap about their mental well-being. If you did, then you wouldn't fantasize about boning Feyre in the library where one of the priestesses might accidentally catch you and get triggered by their past trauma. Be so fucking for real right now about what you actually care about. Let's move on from that though so I don't rage quit this video. Feyre comforts Rhysand some more and then the chapter ends, thank God. We learn that Amarantha didn't find any more Hybern cronies in her hunt, so we're all good there and there's nobody else lurking around in the city. We're told that the meeting with the other High Lords is still a week away, and seeing as we're already 50% of the way through this novel according to my Kindle, I was kind of worried we wouldn't even get to the war in this book because of the pacing. Anyway, it's the next day and they all gather to see Lucian off as he gets ready to go on his expedition to find the queen. Elaine doesn't even say bye, which makes me really sad for Lucian. He's actually been pretty respectful about not forcing their mating bond, which is something I didn't expect given how everybody else behaves in this godforsaken book. None of that really matters though, because Lucian leaves and we pretty much just forget about him for the majority of the rest of this book. I've heard that SJM says in an interview that Lucian is one of her favorite characters, but I don't believe that in the slightest with how dirty she does him constantly.
Well, Lucian has always been one of my favorite characters. He and Feyre had this like crazy friendly chemistry.
You sure about that?
The chapter ends unexpectedly when Amarantha runs in to say that Hybern is attacking the Summer Court as they speak and they gotta get over there right now to go save him. Oh my god, is the war actually starting? Was I just lying to you guys before when I said it'd all get crammed into the end? This isn't really the start of the war, but a one-off battle, and that sounds weird, but later on in the meeting with the High Lords, they reference starting the war, and I'm like, The Summer Court battle already happened. Is that not the start of the war? What else do they need to see to have them convinced that war is gonna happen? Like, what the hell? Anyway, Rhysand asks Amarant if Tarquin called for aid, which would be really weird considering the whole Blood Ruby thing from the last book and how they're banned from the Summer Court. If you don't remember, the Night Court is enemy number 1 in the Summer Court because they stole that spell book in the last novel. Except now I guess Hybern is enemy number 1 considering they're actively attacking the city. Amarant says that no, it was Varian who gave her the message, and Varian is like the guy she was flirting with in the last book, and that does actually go somewhere in this one, but it doesn't really matter for the plot. Even though they're technically enemies, Rhysand says that they have to help the Summer Court, and says to rally the Illyrian forces and get them ready. So they all jump into action, and Nesta kind of questions why Feyre is also getting ready, like she's gonna go fight. But she's not exactly asking it in a rude way, it's almost just like a genuine question, which I guess is progress. Feyre answers like, well, of course I'm gonna help them, people need help, and Nesta is kind of baffled by this. We then get this weird description of Mor that I just had to include. Mor turned to my sister, and I had never seen her so warrior-like. I'd known it lurked beneath the surface, but here was the Mor again. The female who had fought in the war, who knew how to end lives with blade and magic. I feel like SJM wanted to say something cool about Mor, but couldn't come up with anything, so she just left some placeholder text that she forgot to go back in and fix with something genuine. It's so vague and silly. She knew how to end lives with a blade and magic? You mean like the majority of other characters in this book? SJM really couldn't come up with anything better? What about her special truth power thing? Shouldn't you have mentioned that if that's what makes Mor special? Except no, we can't because nobody actually knows what the truth powers actually are, so this is what we get, some generic nonsense about her being a warrior who can fight with blades, okay. Anyway, they teleport to the Summer Court directly into the battle and it's straight up hell. Mor and Feyre are up on a hill overlooking the whole thing, and Feyre is shook because her only previous experience with a large-scale attack was when the Adder came to Valaris with his cronies, and that was nothing compared to this. The Summer Court is completely outnumbered, and it looks like only the Night Court has shown up to help, and none of the other courts have responded. Feyre suddenly remembers that Alice, her favorite servant from the Spring Court, is now in the Summer Court, but that plotline never goes anywhere, and we never see if Alice is okay or not. I guess Feyre doesn't actually care that much if she just forgot about her, but I guess Alice is okay, I'm going to assume that. Mor says that they should go to the palace to help, and there's no sign of badass Feyre, as she seems pretty nervous to get involved. None of them enjoyed this, I realized. My friends, they had gone to war and back and had not found it worthy of glorification, had not let its memory become rose-tinted in the centuries following, but they were willing to dive into its hell once again for the sake of Prythian. Girl, what? Do people generally enjoy fighting in a war? How does this make the Night Court special? Then again, I swear the Inner Circle has told some glory stories from the war before, but I can't think of any specific examples, so I could be wrong, but I swear they do kind of glorify the war in some ways. Anyway, Feyre and Mor teleport down to the palace and realize that all of the High Fae have barricaded themselves in the upper levels where it's safer and have left the Lesser Fae servants to fend for themselves. So much for Tarquin's plan to get rid of fairy racism, considering the rest of his court doesn't seem to care about anyone but themselves. Without any other help, Feyre and Mor commence their battle. The 2 soldiers nearest me had feeble shields. I tore through them with a sizzling wall of fire. Fire that then found its way down their throats and burned every inch of the way. And then sizzled through skin and tendon and bone and severed— oh my god. And then sizzled through skin and tendon and bone and severed the heads from their bodies. Mor just killed the soldier nearest her with good old-fashioned beheading. She whirled, the soldier's head still falling, and sliced off the head of the one just nearing us. Jesus Christ, okay, I guess that's one way to do it. Melting someone's head off seems pretty extreme, and I think Feyre should be a little bit more careful with her magic considering she's trying to hide it from the other High Lords and probably Hybern as well. What if someone from the Summer Court sees her magic and tattles on her? Won't that cause problems? Also, the phrase good old-fashioned beheading is so out of pocket, like what is happening right now? They make their way through the palace, slaughtering any Hybern soldier who dares to cross their path. Well, not all of them. Feyre leaves a couple of the soldiers wounded enough for the Lesser Fae to take a stab at it themselves, literally. Like, she leaves these wounded soldiers there for the Lesser Fae to torture to death, which is such an odd detail to include. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, they clear the palace and move on to the streets outside to continue their onslaught against the Hybern soldiers. I stopped being able to feel a great many things as we killed and killed, sometimes engaging in outright combat, sometimes with magic, sometimes earning our own bruises and small wounds. Okay, so I understand Feyre and Mor are supposed to be super powerful, but they are chewing through the Hybern soldiers like they're nothing. So why is Hybern such a threat? Sheer numbers? If that's the case, then why is Hybern using all these soldiers as cannon fodder before the war has even started, really? Shouldn't they save their strength and their numbers for the real battle? Why are they even attacking the Summer Court right now? Also, this is supposed to be a super tense battle, so saying that Feyre and Mor just have bruises and small wounds makes this scene kind of lame. I don't really believe any of the characters are actually in danger, so it makes me not care about this battle at all. That's kind of the whole point of a battle, is that you worry that your favorite characters might get hurt. Feyre even goes on to say that she needs water to wash the blood out of her mouth, but then reminds us that of course it's not her blood because she's just so badass she's covered in other people's blood and she's not even injured. Which, ew, hopefully none of those Hybern soldiers have any funky diseases she can catch. Like, what are we doing right now? Feyre tries to talk to Rhysand through their bond, but can't get a hold of him because he's also busy fighting. Eventually she beams into his head and sees that he's on one of Hybern's ships. Apparently there's something limiting their powers, but everybody seems to be using their magic just fine, so I'm a little confused about what's happening. Like, it's said that Rhysand is trying to seek out whatever this thing is that's limiting their powers, but nobody seems to have limited powers. They're using their magic just fine, so what is happening? I can't follow any of this. This kind of thing happens a lot throughout this book, where their powers are either suppressed or outright nullified, but they just use them anyway, so I just get so confused. The King of Hybern comes out from the belly of the ship, and it's pretty clear that this is some kind of trap. We're told Rhysand probably knew this and went on his own anyway because he just can't risk anyone else, which is such a stupid mindset for a ruler to have. It's super irresponsible for the High Lord to go out of his way to put himself in danger and not let the inner circle help him. What is Rhysand's plan for the Night Court if he dies? Let Feyre rule it? Who would have been next in line if Feyre wasn't High Lady? Like, who would have the High Lord powers snapped to? I'm so confused. It's a good thing that the King of Hybern doesn't actually fight, and he just uses talk no jutsu as he stands around and taunts Rhysand. He even brings up the creepy twins I've already forgotten about and asks why Feyre killed them, as if it isn't super obvious that she killed them because they're fucking evil. Perhaps you should ask Tamlin, Rhys raised a brow. Where is he, by the way? Tamlin, Hybern savored the name, the sound of it. He has plans for you after what you and your mate did to him, his court. What a mess for him to clean up. Though she certainly made it easier for me to plant more of my troops in his lands. Mother above, I'd done that. See, I told you all that spying stuff in the Spring Court would come back to bite Feyre in the ass. Tamlin clearly didn't really want to work with Hybern and was doing the bare minimum to stay on their good side, but Feyre went nuclear and basically handed the Spring Court over to Hybern on a silver platter. She doomed a ton of innocent people and is only just now realizing that that wasn't very girl boss of her. Also with this passage, I want to point out that SJM didn't even bother to call him the King of Hybern, she just called him Hybern, which is so stupid. Give this king a fucking name. I'm so tired of this. The nameless king continues on with his taunting while Rhysand rallies his power to find whatever is suppressing their power or something. As I've said already, I find this scene very confusing. The king goes on to continue his villain monologuing. There was room at the table for everyone, you and your ilk claimed, the king snorted. For humans, lesser fairies, for half-breeds. In this new world of yours, there was room at the table for everyone, so long as they thought like you. But the loyalists, how you delighted in shutting us out, looking down your noses at us. He gestured to the soldiers monitoring them, the battle in the bay. You want to know why? Because we suffered. When you stifled us, when you shut us out. Some of his soldiers grunted their agreement. I have no interest in spending another 5 centuries seeing my people bow before human pigs, seeing them claw out a living while you shield and coddle those mortals, granting them our resources and wealth in exchange for nothing. He inclined his head. So we shall reclaim what is ours, what was always ours, and will always be ours.
You serious?
Excuse me? What is his argument here? Wah, you people are too tolerant of all those other stupid races, but can't be tolerant of us, the people who actually matter, and hate those other races. Wah! Why are you acting all high and mighty when all we want is some slaves to torture and work to death? It's not like humans matter anyway, even though I just said that you clearly think that they do in fact matter, so of course you disagree with us. Wah! We just want to make Hybern great again! This is so brainless, I don't even know what to say about it, truly. Also, Prythian didn't grant the humans anything but their freedom. They certainly weren't giving out wealth and resources. I don't know what the king is rattling on about with all that. The fairies basically just threw the humans back into their own realm and put up a wall to keep them out, and that's it. They didn't do anything special for them. I guess Rhysand's had enough of that nonsense, so he shoots a beam of power at the king, but it goes right through him because, psych, he's just a hologram! Or something, a magic hologram. I don't know. It makes no sense for the king to actually show up and put himself in danger, just like it makes no sense for Rhysand to be out there fighting either, so he should have seen through this. Rhysand is tired of all this nonsense and then mists everyone else on the ship, and then we cut back to Feyre, who starts dramatically puking, because I guess that's just what people do when they get stressed out. Is this just a cliche, or do people actually stress vomit? Like, asking for real. Anyway, the battle is basically over now, and Feyre is pretty wound up still and disturbed by it all. I do actually appreciate that she's having this kind of reaction instead of how she acted in the last book when she didn't really seem to care who she killed as long as she deemed that they deserved it. And I could understand, just for a heartbeat, as the wind tore around us, why some rulers, human and fey, had bowed before Hybern, bowed rather than face this. It wasn't only the cost of life that ripped and devastated and sundered. It was the altering of a soul with it, the realization that I could perhaps go back home to Valaris, perhaps see peace achieved and cities rebuilt, but this battle, this war, I would be the thing forever changed. War would linger with me long after it had ended, some invisible scar that would perhaps fade but never wholly vanish. But for my home, for Prythian and the human territory and so many others, I would clean my blades and wash the blood from my skin, and I would do it again and again and again. Okay, maybe I spoke a little too soon since Feyre is still down to murk some clowns, but at least she's not happy about it. Feyre and Mor go back to the palace and see Varian helping the wounded soldiers. He directs them to Tarquin, who is now an entirely different person from the last book, which is sad to see. Tarquin was one of the very few characters that I actually liked, even though I did clown on him for being overly nice. Truly, how are you going to dislike someone for being nice, though? Like, that's dumb. I did actually like Tarquin. But now he's basically an angry, lifeless shell of his former self. He said that when the Night Court showed up to the battle, he thought it was to end them for good, and that's really sad to hear because the Night Court did genuinely want to ally with the Summer Court. Tarquin says that he heard how Feyre basically destroyed the Spring Court and he thought that they were next in line. As I've said many times before, maybe the Night Court should just stop going out of their way to pretend to be evil because it always seems to make things worse for them. Their reputation is abysmal, and I really don't see how that helps them. Sure, they kept Valaris safe all this time because everyone was too scared to enter Night Court territory, but now they're having a hell of a time getting allies for this war because nobody trusts them and thinks that they're fucking evil. Apparently Tarquin didn't know that Varian sent a message to the Night Court to ask for aid, so I guess Varian is lucky that the Night Court isn't actually evil because he could have just ended them right then and there if the Night Court was also going to try to fight the Summer Court. They would have stood no chance against Hybern and the Night Court. Why? Tarquin demanded, sunlight glinting on his armor, whose delicate overlapping scales were fashioned after a fish's. I didn't know what he meant. Why had we deceived and stolen from him? Why had we come to help? Why to both? Our dreams are the same, was all I could think to say. A united realm in which lesser fairies were no longer shoved down, a better world, the opposite of what Hybern fought for, what his allies fought for. Is that how you justified stealing from me? Before Feyre can answer, Rhysand shows up and refers to her as his mate, which throws Tarquin off, because apparently this is the first he's hearing of that mate thing. Rhysand apparently can't read the room and continues to act evil by winking and saying it should have been obvious, and dude, now is not the time to be snarky and all high and mighty, and Tarquin clearly thinks so too. Tarquin's face didn't so much as shift from that cold wrath. When you went to the Spring Court and deceived Tamlin as well about your true nature, when you destroyed his territory, you left the door open for Hybern. They docked in his harbors. No doubt to wait for the wall to collapse and then sail south. Tarquin snarled, "It was an easy trip to my doorstep. You did this." Damn straight, Tarquin, that's what I've been saying. I can understand Feyre being so short-sighted and stupid to make such a critical mistake, but I can't believe Rhysand didn't realize what a horrible idea it all was. Now people feel bad for Tamlin, which isn't good for the Night Court, and they see Feyre as being purposely manipulative and conniving. Like, they don't see it for what she did for her reason. All they see is that Feyre gave the Spring Court to Hybern, and that kind of makes it look like they're working with Hybern. Rhysand says that they didn't do anything and that Hybern made their own choices, which is technically true, but it doesn't come off very well. He says that his forces are staying until the city is secure, and Tarquin asks if he plans on stealing anything else while he's around, like burn. Feyre and Rhysand both try to smooth things out, but it doesn't really work because they should have just been honest in the first place. Tarquin seems pretty reasonable, so if they just told him about Hybern and the threat and why they needed the book, then I truly believe he would have just gave it to them. The book didn't even really help the Night Court all that much anyway since they failed to nullify the Cauldron, so this whole conflict is so stupid and unnecessary. Feyre tells Tarquin to take care of his wounded soldiers, and this is his response. Take your mate and leave, and I'd suggest warning her not to give High Lord's orders. I stiffened, about to whirl around, when Rhys said, She is High Lady of the Night Court. She may do as she wishes. The wall of Fae standing before us withdrew slightly, now studying me, some gaping. A murmur rippled through them. Tarquin let out a low, bitter laugh. You do love to spit on tradition. Oh, Tarquin, please don't make me regret saying that I liked you. You want to end fairy racism but draw the line at High Lord's wives wanting to be called High Ladies? Please just tell me you said that out of anger and you don't actually mean that. Feyre and Rhysand finally realize they've overstayed their welcome and teleport away to where the Illyrians are camped on the edge of the city. There are a lot of injured soldiers, so maybe Tarquin should have been a little more grateful for the Night Court's help. Feyre tends to the soldiers until she collapses and wakes up in a tent. Rhysand is going over the casualties, and apparently they only lost 100 soldiers, which seems insanely unlikely given the scale of the battle, but whatever, they are really good fighters, I guess. The king only came today, he said at last, to taunt me. The library attack, this battle, it was a way to toy with me. Us. I touched his jaw. Cold. His skin was cold, despite the warm summer night pressing on us. You are not going to die in this war, Rhysand. What? Seriously? The king was really ready to risk so many soldiers just to specifically mess with Rhysand? That's the whole point of this battle? Really? Also, Feyre, be careful throwing out death flags like that. You better find some wood to knock on so it doesn't come true. I'm sure Rhysand has some ready to go just for you. Rhysand seems pretty worn down by all the war stuff, which makes sense, but maybe he'd feel better if he actually let his inner circle do their jobs instead of doing it all himself. Maybe he wouldn't be so tired. They decide to expedite the meeting with the High Lords, and Feyre says that he should just drop his evil act that's not going to serve them anymore. The world should know, I said. The world should know how good you are, Rhysand, how wonderful all of you are. Is Rhysand wonderful? Even though he's debatably not actually evil, he's still a manipulator who's willing to lie and steal to get what he wants. Y'all already know I don't think Rhysand is wonderful. They continue their sappy conversation, and Rhysand stupidly doesn't want to drop the evil act, even though Feyre says it doesn't matter anymore since everyone already knows about Valaris. Apparently, word of the attack has spread around, and now everybody knows about the secret city that they were pretending to be evil to protect, so what's the point in pretending to be evil anymore? Rhysand still wants to pretend to be evil because he says that everyone is going to be angry at him for lying for so long, but they're already angry at him for being evil or their perception that he is evil, so I don't think that matters. Ultimately, Rhysand agrees to drop the evil act, but brings up Feyre's powers, and they discuss whether or not they should be open about that. It's actually Feyre that suggests that they should keep her powers a secret, because it'll come off as manipulative if they reveal both things at once, that Feyre has powers and the Night Court isn't actually evil. What? I'm so confused by this logic. It seems more manipulative to me to selectively hide information that you decide other people can't handle yet, and what? How are they justifying hiding this information? It's only going to make them look evil when it eventually comes out that Feyre has everyone's powers. Like, how can they not see how royally this is going to screw them? Anyway, we get a reminder that they still can't find Miriam and Draken on their island, and I couldn't give any less of a shit about either of those characters. Jurian has also kind of gone missing in the narrative, and I don't care about him either. Okay, so remember how I said earlier that the series' greatest sin was the library stuff? I changed my mind. The worst sin in this series is that even though both Feyre and Rhysand are physically and emotionally exhausted by the battle and still covered in blood and grime and dirt, Feyre proceeds to give Rhysand some sloppy toppy to cheer him up. His growls of pleasure filled the tent, drowning out the distant cries of the injured and dying, life and death hovering so close, whispering in our ears. But I tasted Rhys, worshipped him with my hands and mouth and then my body, and hoped that this shard of life we offered up, this undimming light between us, would drive death a bit further away, at least for another day. I have no words. Truly, how does one even respond to that? He fucking drowned out the distant cries of the injured and dying. Dead ass, the sloppy toppy was that good. He was crying out in pleasure that loud? What the hell? Just as the children yearn for the mines, I yearned for a time before I read this godforsaken book. I am fully losing my mind. Hey guys, it's Editing Senti, and I think this is as good a time as any to go ahead and end this part. I do want to have the second part out within the next week or two at most, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys!